The English teacher tapped the board, warning the students that the exam would end in 10 minutes and that they should get ready to hand in their assignments. One of the students began to lament that it was all over. The form with his answers to the exam questions was completely blank. His deskmate grabbed his head in worry and whispered, asking who had notes with the answers to the questions. The nervous guy shrugged and replied that it was Lin Tian who had to bring the answers so they could cheat on the exam. They both looked at Lin Tian, who was currently sitting on the desk in front with his face buried in the table. The main character Lin Tian was not worried about passing the exam. He slept peacefully and snored, a peaceful smile shining on his face. The hero of this story is named Lin Tian. He was a student at WW University. Even to class, he came in a simple white t-shirt and shorts, not bothering about his appearance. The guy considered himself an absolutely happy person, because every day he had the opportunity to indulge himself with his favorite rice and water. Lin Tian was constantly asking for more in the dining room, and the cook wondered why he couldn't eat some real tasty food instead of his 5th bowl of plain white rice. The protagonist responded by proudly stating that he had no money, so he could only afford water and plain white rice. The students were discussing him because the poor guy couldn't even afford to buy normal food, and he used a plastic bag as a school bag. Lin Tian shouted, asking the students what they were staring at and whether they had never seen such a chic fashionista like him. Previously, the main character was poor, but one day this changed, and now he showed up to retake the exam in his usual white t-shirt. The teacher woke him up, asking Lin why he was sleeping again and whether he really wanted to be expelled since he hadn't answered a single question on the exam. After waking up, Lin Tian lazily rested his cheek on his hand and told the teacher that he still had 10 minutes to finish. The teacher laughed haughtily and asked the student what he could accomplish in just 10 minutes. She shouted that she had already met many times poor and stupid students who could not study well, and they were simply a burden on the university. The woman threw the answer sheet back on the table and advised such poor students to stop dreaming, that the answers to the exam questions would simply appear in the sky outside the window. The protagonist grinned in response to the teacher's shouts because he had a backup plan to pass the exam. He looked at the teacher and asked what if the answers to the exam questions really did appear in the sky right now. Lin Tian crossed his arms over his chest and smiled smugly. At that moment, the exam answers actually appeared on the giant banner outside the window. He was assisted by a red helicopter, which buzzed loudly at the level of the required window so that the students could read the answers on the banner. The English teacher turned pale and was speechless when she saw this because she definitely didn't expect Lin Tian to be right. All the students fell silent when they turned around and saw the letters with the correct answers to the English exam questions in the window. Lin Tian had little time left, so he grabbed a pen and quickly began to copy the answers onto his form. The boy raised his hand and shouted at his classmates to hurry up and copy the correct answers too. The kids were delighted and began to praise our hero because now they would all be able to pass the English exam with flying colors. The main character stood up, addressed everyone in the class, and announced that it was time for him to leave, since he had completed the exam in a couple of minutes. The teacher got angry and started yelling at the students, demanding that they stop cheating. The woman warned that our hero would receive 0 points for a retake if he cheated on the exam. The helicopter pilot shouted at Lin Tian, asking where the money was, as his request had been carried out according to instructions. The protagonist walked up to the window and opened it. Remembering that he hadn't paid for this show, he prepared his plastic bag. Afterwards, Lin Tian waved his hand, which held a large red bag, to hand it over to the helicopter pilots. The guy shouted for them to catch the money, the bag flew out the window, and bills started spilling out of it. The pilot opened the helicopter door and reached out to grab the package, and Lin Tian warned him that there was even more money in there. The students who were standing on the street at that time were also delighted, because large bills began to fall on them from the sky. Our hero, pleased with himself, smiled and turned to leave the office after successfully passing the exam, in which his money helped him. And his classmates crowded around the window to get some of the bills for themselves that were still falling from the sky. The English teacher froze with her mouth open and couldn't say anything, because this was the first time she had seen something like this at an exam. Lin Tian said his final goodbyes to her and said that he still had to catch the school bus, otherwise there might not be any free seats. When the protagonist went outside, the helicopter was about to take off. Lin Tian admitted that the task was not easy, but he succeeded. The system sent a new message, the newbie's task was completed. The guy managed to use 150,000 in cash during the exam. Lin Tian scratched his chin. He was pleased with himself after completing the task of the Qianjin system that had appeared in his life just a week ago. A week earlier, our hero was standing in line at the bank, yawning from boredom and complaining that he had been standing there for so long and the line wasn't moving. He looked at his transparent bag containing several bills and said how difficult it was for him to save money. The protagonist could not hold back his tears because the meager amount he held in his hands was his monthly salary. He was not afraid to carry money in a simple, transparent bag. believing that even robbers would not covet such a small amount. Just a second later, a loud shot rang out, and robbers with pistols burst into the bank and ordered everyone to lie down on the floor. Lin Tian turned pale with horror. He didn't want anyone to be robbed because these were just his thoughts out loud. The masked robber pointed a gun at our hero and shouted at the hostages to sit there and keep their heads down. The bank's visitors burst into tears and covered their heads with their hands. They cowered before the robbers and did not resist them. The main character also did not resist. He ducked at the robber's command, but continued to look around carefully. Lin Tian found the right moment to cleverly hide his money, but the big robber seemed to notice. The masked robber pointed a gun at our hero's head and asked what he was doing. Lin Tian's eyes widened and he froze in fear. The protagonist looked warily at the bandit, who was still demanding an answer from the guy, continuing to hold the gun to his head. Lin Tian screamed, explaining to the robber that his back was itchy and he just wanted to scratch it. The boy thought that no matter how small the mosquito was, it was still meat, so he couldn't let those bandits steal his 200 yuan. The robber and the bank's patrons were distracted and simultaneously looked in the direction from which the loud scream had just come. A sly smile appeared on Lin Tian's face. He had a great chance to escape because the robber was distracted from him. The masked bandit continued to look away, mesmerized, at which point our hero slowly turned around to escape. One of the robbers roughly grabbed the woman in glasses by the arm, and it was her scream that attracted the attention of the masked bandit and all the hostages. The girl, gritting her teeth, began to resist and scream at the robber so that he should not even dare think about touching her. The puzzled masked robber asked his partner Mouse if he was really harassing the girl again even during the robbery. The red-haired guy Mouse justified himself to his boss by saying that this girl just looks great. The indignant girl, barely holding back her tears, screamed that she would rather die than be with such a scoundrel as Mouse. At this time, Lin Tian took advantage of the opportunity to press the emergency door release button and was about to escape, but stopped. The red-haired bandit Mouse again extended his hand to grab the defenseless girl and she screamed loudly in fear. The main character decided to stand up for the hostage. He demanded that the bandit release the girl. She turned out to be his class teacher Chen. The guy smiled stupidly and added that the robber should rob his teacher instead, if he was going to do it to him. The boss of the robber group pointed a gun at our hero and shouted, asking the bastard when he managed to open the door. The protagonist took a few steps towards the bandit and suggested that they just talk instead of arguing. Lin Tian froze and opened his eyes wide in fear. A bright reflection of the pistol bullet flying towards him appeared in his pupil. The bullet instantly struck our hero. He arched his back from the force that hit him straight in the chest. Our hero was surrounded by a bright snow-white light. He froze, his eyes wide open, and wondered if he was really going to die that easily. He saw 2 bills flying down in front of him and firmly decided that he could not die. He was going to grab his money. The guy thought that first of all, they should at least let him spend his honestly earned 200 yuan before he died. Suddenly, Lin Tian saw a task from the system, to use 1 million in 3 minutes to avoid death. The guy woke up and saw a robber in front of him. The gun barrel was still pointed at his head. Our hero was in shock, because just a couple of seconds ago he considered himself dead. The guy looked at his watch and saw that it was 3 minutes to 4 o'clock, which meant that he had somehow miraculously gone back in time. The protagonist realized that in 3 minutes he would die again, which meant he had to complete the mysterious system's task at any cost. The masked robber noticed that Lin Tian was acting strangely and called him suspicious. He put the gun to his head again and threatened to shoot if Lin Tian dared to look at the bandit again. The protagonist remained calm, but inside he was angry because this robber had already shot at him once. The frightened boy with a gun pointed at his head began to justify himself to the robber but hesitated. The masked bandit became even more angry at our hero and started shouting, demanding that he stop mumbling and speak clearly. Lin Tian pointed his finger at Mouse and said that this guy had dropped some money and he just wanted to politely inform him about it. A puzzled Mouse looked at the boss and our hero, not understanding what kind of money they were talking about. The boss of the robbery gang shouted, ordering our hero to show him where the money his partner had dropped was. As he passed by, the protagonist glanced at his frightened homeroom teacher and winked at Miss Chen. Covering her head with her hands, Miss Chen finally recognized the boy as a student from her class and wondered what he was doing here. The main character approached the red-haired bandit, pointed his finger down and said that Mouse had dropped the money he had tied to his leg. Lin Tian didn't lie. It turned out that Mouse really did have money tied to his legs. Some of the bills fell to the floor. The boss got angry at his partner, who decided to hide the stolen money from his leader under his pants. Our hero scratched his head and said that this mouse guy is so pathetic that he uses his pants to carry money, even though they have bags for that. The red-haired robber Mouse began to justify himself to his boss, shouting that this money had nothing to do with him. Lin Tian asked if he should go and find a bag for Mouse, since the robber could only hide a few thousand yuan under his pants at most. Mouse started shouting that it was all a lie and that it was probably some kind of trick, and the other robbers looked at him suspiciously. The protagonist approached his class teacher again, smiled, and told the robbers that he was just a good guy. Lin Tian extended his hand to the teacher to help Miss Chen stand up and said that Mouse was not stupid, even asking the second person to hide the money for him. Our young hero loudly announced that it was this beauty who helped Mouse hide the money, which shocked the teacher. The protagonist quietly signaled to the teacher and asked her to stay calm and go along with the situation. Lin Tian shook his hand without the robbers noticing, trying to pull off a trick to survive this mess this time. A moment later, a thick wad of money, given to him by a mysterious system, miraculously appeared in the young man's hand. He pointed his finger at the masked man and shouted that Miss Chen had no choice but to hide the money from this robber. The gang boss, Mouse, and the other thieves looked at our hero in bewilderment as he found the evidence so quickly. The guy in the blue t-shirt started sweating and shaking with fear. He tried to explain himself to the boss, but couldn't find the words. The group leader shouted, accusing his unscrupulous partners of deciding to grab more money for themselves in this big deal. Mouse stood up for himself and replied that they had never done anything bad to the boss, but he still didn't trust them. The boss pointed a gun at his partners and asked if the money had really appeared out of thin air, since they claimed they hadn't done it. The main character crossed his arms over his chest and smirked, thinking that the boss is the boss. It was clear even from his appearance. Lin Tian decided to stand up for the main robber's partners, pointed his finger at the boss, and said that he was doing the wrong thing. Our hero asked the main robber if he himself hadn't put some money on the floor, and pointed to a pile of wads of bills nearby. Mouse saw this and immediately began to accuse the boss named Lu Haoping of not being innocent either. The robber in the balaclava lost his temper because Mouse called him by his real name in front of everyone, and now he was ready to kill his partner for it. A shootout broke out in the bank. The thieves started shooting at each other, and the hostages trembled with fear, covering their heads with their hands. As a result of several shots, one of the robbers was hit by a bullet, after which he began to fall on his back. The loud gunshots continued, bullets whistled over their heads, and a frightened Lin Tian crouched down, shielding the teacher, Miss Chen, with his body. After some time, the smoke finally cleared, and it became clear that many of the robbers were already dead. The protagonist realized that everything was over, but the system's task was not yet completed. He still needed to spend 100,000 yuan. There were only seconds left until 4 o'clock, and one of the surviving robbers again put a gun to our hero's head. It was the gang boss, Lu Haoping, who declared that Lin Tian was to blame for everything and therefore deserved to die. The protagonist looked at the main robber in fear, his pupils narrowed in horror. Lin Tianya's homeroom teacher was afraid for her student and shouted at him to take care of himself. Teacher Miss Chen couldn't let her student die at the hands of a robber, so she bravely shielded the boy with her body. The robber fired a shot. The bullet was already reflected in Miss Chen's glasses, and she thought that she was a good teacher and could die for her student. The hostages' mouths dropped open in fear when they saw the robber shoot innocent people. Lu Haoping, looking at his victims after the shooting, himself looked scared. Something had not gone according to his plan. Fortunately, Miss Chen's teacher was still alive, and she thought that the robber was shocked by her sense of justice, so he didn't kill her. The girl closed her eyes and resigned herself to her death. She thought that she would die without regrets. Our hero's class teacher opened her eyes again. She decided that something was wrong, because she felt no pain at all. The shot did not prove fatal for her. The girl in glasses looked down to check if she was wounded. The woman saw that her torso was protected by a bulletproof vest made of thick wads of money, which stopped the bullet. Miss Chen's mouth dropped open in shock as a bullet was fired into the bulletproof vest that magically appeared in front of her. The robber was also stunned. He wondered what was going on here and whether this was really the work of that guy again. Lu screamed that this couldn't be happening and prepared to shoot the hostages again to finish the job. The robber boss certainly didn't expect that after the next shot, his pistol would literally explode in two. The gun fragments wounded its owner. Lu Haoping covered his eyes with his hands and screamed, complaining of pain. Lin Tian pretended to be surprised too, and that he had nothing to do with it, and began to talk to the robber about karma. The guy grinned slyly as he became convinced that he could make money appear in the gun to detonate the weapon. The teacher looked down with embarrassment and blushed, then asked Lin Tian to take his hand away from her. Lin Tian laughed awkwardly and pretended to be a fool, saying that he was so shocked that he didn't even notice. He apologized to the teacher. The protagonist glanced at the situation with quiet satisfaction, smiled briefly, and admitted that he had gone a bit too far while teasing his teacher. The guy reached out to take the thick wad of money he had materialized using the system. Lin Tian didn't even have time to touch them. Before the money disappeared, he was convinced that the system hadn't deceived him, and he wouldn't be able to take this money back for himself. The bank doors opened loudly and a female police officer appeared on the threshold, followed by several armed police officers. When law enforcement officers entered the bank, they saw the robbers lying on the floor in front of them. They also saw the protagonist and Miss Chen standing in front of them, staring at the police officers. The perplexed policewoman did not expect to see so many dead here. She asked the survivors what happened here. The protagonist sighed heavily, put his hand on the policewoman's shoulder and told his aunt to sort everything out herself, since he had to go to work. The guy turned around and left, and the girl silently looked after him. Several bills were sticking out of Lin Tian's back pocket. The policewoman noticed that there was money sticking out of the guy's pocket and began to suspect our hero of theft. A stern policewoman shouted at the suspected thief to stop. She again indignantly demanded that Lin Tian stand still. She was angry that our hero called her aunt because she had only recently graduated from the academy. Life returned to normal after the bank robbery, and Miss Chen's teacher was teaching a class at the university. The main character, just like during the exam, decided to sleep in class. He snored peacefully, lying on his desk, and smiled. His homeroom teacher came to his desk and tried to wake him up, but our hero was still snoring and dreaming. His classmate twirled a pen in his hand and mocked Lin Tian for being a beggar who was sleeping during class again. The protagonist finally woke up, raised his head, and, barely opening his eyes, looked at Miss Chen with a puzzled expression. The class teacher was forced to shout because the student could not join in the lesson. An indignant Miss Chen screamed, demanding that the protagonist concentrate on the lesson and not sleep. Lin Tian scratched the back of his head, smiled, and made the excuse that he was too tired from work yesterday, which is why he fell asleep. His classmate watched as our hero contradicted the teacher, and he was already impatient to see how Lin Tian would be punished for this. The class teacher couldn't forget yesterday's events. Before her eyes was the moment when Lin Tian covered her with his body. She blushed and turned away abruptly, telling Lin Tian that she forgives him this time, since he saved her yesterday. The protagonist briefly noticed the situation, reacting with visible surprise after an unexpected moment caused a small mishap with his teacher's outfit. Lin Tian's classmates were angry. They couldn't believe that our hero could sleep in class and get away with it. The red-haired boy looked at his phone lying on his desk in surprise when he heard it vibrate. On the screen, he saw the news that a mysterious university student had outsmarted robbers during yesterday's bank robbery. When the bell rang, Lin Tian's classmates surrounded him. One of them said that she heard about the boy's feat yesterday. The girl sat on the protagonist's desk, crossed her legs, and asked Lin Tian if the news about yesterday's incident was true. The main character frantically confirmed that all this was true. He couldn't take his eyes off the beautiful figures of his classmates, drooling. The girls turned around and looked at the guy who approached them and suggested celebrating the big news. It was a red-haired guy in a yellow t-shirt who declared that now that Lin Tian had become a big star, he had to treat them all to dinner. His second classmate supported him, saying that otherwise they would not be able to secure Lin Tian's status as a big star. The girl liked this idea and also asked the main character to treat all his classmates to dinner. They were perplexed when, a moment later, the chair where Lin Tian had been sitting was empty. The main character, bending down, tried to escape from the office because he did not want to spend money on his classmates. The young man stopped abruptly, looked away in fear and caution when he heard the bell ring. The red-haired guy laughed loudly, asking if the others still considered Lin Tian a star when this beggar with no ambitions just up and ran away. The protagonist's classmate fell silent when someone came up behind him and grabbed him by the shoulder. The puzzled young man frowned and looked back to see which of his classmates had dared to touch him. It turned out to be the main character, who put a wide smile on his face and announced that he was ready to pay for dinner for them in the cafeteria. Afterwards, Lin Tian shouted loudly, announcing to his classmates that he was inviting them to have dinner together at the university cafeteria. Our hero was happy because the task from the system came at the perfect moment, and now he was not averse to treating his classmates. The young man raised his hand, showing everyone the bag he uses as a school bag, and invited everyone back into the cafeteria. His rich, red-haired classmate was perplexed because the prospect of a festive dinner in the cafeteria did not appeal to him. The guys burst out laughing, clutching their stomachs, and began to mock our hero, who could only afford to eat in the cafeteria. The protagonist grinned and proudly declared that he was ready to treat them, and invited absolutely everyone present to dinner. Lin Tian waved his hand and shouted, urging everyone to go to the dining room right now and also invite all their brothers and sisters there. The happy girls surrounded him again, saying that dinner in the cafeteria also sounded good, and that it was a good option to eat to his fill, even though the food there wasn't very tasty. The red-haired guy looked askance at our hero and asked if he really thought he would eat in the university cafeteria. Surrounded by happy girls, Lin Tian left, finally advising his classmate to simply admit honestly that he was afraid of embarrassing himself. The office immediately emptied. Everyone followed our hero into the dining room. Only the red-haired guy and a few of his loyal friends remained inside. One of them told Boss Jiang that he could go to the canteen instead of him if he was really afraid to join Lin Tian's dinner. Boss Jiang got angry and kicked his friend because he thought he was talking nonsense. The boy ordered his friend to tell everyone to gather near the dining room. The young man assumed that Boss Jiang wanted to deal with poor Tian. Jiang grinned and confirmed his friend's suspicions, declaring that he intended to trample the protagonist in front of everyone. The next action took place near the student cafeteria, where a large crowd of people had gathered outside the door. One of the students asked his friend if this beggar Lin Tian was really going to treat all his classmates. He replied that our hero was going to treat not only the entire group, but also all the other university students to a free dinner. The blonde decided that this was too much and asked his friend if this recent news about Lin Tian had really made him believe in himself. Suddenly, a large man in a snow-white uniform approached the boys from behind and shouted at them to get out of the way. The students glanced back and noticed the badge on the chef's chest, which stated that he worked at Jiang Hao's restaurant. Jiang Hao walked out in front of the students, surrounded by a team of chefs, and shouted that he would treat them all to dinner today. A special van equipped with a kitchen where restaurant chefs will prepare the food arrived at the student cafeteria. Jiang's friends began to invite all the students, saying that the chef of the five-star restaurant, Jiang Hao, had come there. The students watched in awe as the chefs at the five-star restaurant prepared the food, finding it better than the cafeteria. Jiang's friend, proud of his boss, told the students that the red-haired guy was very generous and would treat everyone with all his heart. Boss Jiang's second friend turned around and publicly called our hero a beggar who was only pretending to be generous. The protagonist looked sadly at his red-haired classmate, who gave him a thumbs down. The girls already looked disappointed due to hunger. One of them asked Lin Tian if they could go somewhere to eat. The blonde complained that she was starving, so she wouldn't mind going out to eat and then coming back to support Lin Tian. The protagonist sighed heavily, smiled, and told his classmates that it wasn't worth spending so much money these days. The guy answered the phone and apologized to Mr. Lin for the longer time it took to prepare the food. While Lin Tian was talking on the phone with his chef, his classmate Jiang Hao looked at him with an evil grin. The smile disappeared from the red-haired student's face when he noticed something strange and stared at it with a puzzled look. Jiang Hao and his two trusted friends gaped in shock as large red containers began to descend from the sky onto the ground on parachutes. The other students were also stunned. They had no idea what it was. Large containers hung over their heads. A girl with long blonde hair appeared in the sky wearing a sword belt and holding two cooks by the collar. The stranger landed on the ground and unhooked her harness, and one of the cooks adjusted the long, snow-white cap on his head. The huge red container landed on the ground with a thud, and the blonde and her two chefs proudly stood before the audience. The door of the metal container began to open slowly, its contents still remaining a mystery to the students. When the door opened, it turned out that the container was filled with shelves of fresh food and drinks, and there was also a refrigerator inside. The students were stunned, and they assumed that Boss Jiang had decided to play it safe and order even more food for the hungry kids. Jean's friend looked at his boss with admiration and said that he could have warned them if he was planning something like this instead of doing it secretly. From the confused expression on the red-haired student's face, it was clear that he had nothing to do with the summoning of these containers. Boss Jean's friend shouted, urging everyone to hurry up and line up if they wanted to try Hao's best food in the world. Jiang Hao guessed that his second younger brother might have organized the container delivery and planned to give him a promotion. The guy proudly declared that he, Jiang Hao, simply loved to make people happy, and money or anything else was not a problem for him. Smiling widely, the red-haired guy approached the blonde and extended his hand, wanting to introduce himself to her. The stern, fair-haired woman responded by slapping the guy across the face and, without even looking at him, indifferently walked past. Lin Tian criticized the blonde and the cooks for being too slow and promised to double the pay for speed. The girl bowed her head before him, apologized for the wait, and introduced herself as the manager of Sicily. Lin Tian scratched his head, smiled stupidly, introduced himself as Xiao Li, and asked the cooking team to start cooking. Manager Sicily felt awkward when the guy introduced himself to her as Xiao Li, because that's what only the younger ones are called. She froze in bewilderment when Lin Tian handed her a bottle, asked her to fill it with plain water for him, and also prepare 2 bowls of white rice for him. Smiling, Lin Tian scratched his head, turned around and left, and Sicily remained standing, not knowing what to answer Xiao Li. The students realized that it wasn't Jiang Hao who had called for the container delivery, and they wondered if Lin Tian had been a rich man from the start and was just carefully hiding it. The boys started to talk about Jiang Hao losing face, and were about to go to the dining hall to try Lin Tian's food. Jiang Hao gritted his teeth and trembled in anger at Lin Tian, who actually dared to go against him. The angry red-haired guy shouted that delivering containers from an airplane is nothing, and that the most important thing in cooking is the cook. Boss Jiang proudly declared that the chefs from his 5-star restaurant are famous all over the world. The guy asked if Lin Tian's chefs could compare to his, since among them there was even one who cooked in the best restaurant in the country. Suddenly, one of Jiang Hao's chefs, ignoring his boss, ran forward and shouted, addressing someone as a master. The cook fell to his knees and burst into tears, begging the master to teach him the last tricks, since he, the apprentice, had already made progress. The chef asked the man if he, having received a job at the best five-star restaurant in the country, was still asking him for anything. Jiang shouted at his cook, demanding that he return to him quickly or he would be fired. But it was more important for him to learn from the master. The protagonist smiled slyly, observing this situation, cleared his throat and declared that he was already hungry. The cook he hired told Lin Tian that he would start work immediately and asked the boy to wait a little longer. Jiang Hao was defeated. He fell silent and silently watched Lin Tian leave for the dining room, accompanied by the best culinary masters. Boss Jiang decided to take out his anger on his friend, grabbed him by the shoulders and shouted that he was a two-faced deceiver who had been given something by Lin Tian. He kicked his puzzled friend in the back and shouted that he could see right through him, so he shouldn't mess with him anymore. Gritting his teeth, he looked through the window at his main enemy, eager to see what the culinary savages hired by Lin Tian could cook. Manager Cicely, accompanied by a team of cooks, approached our hero and announced that his first salad was ready. Frustrated, Lin Tian asked the girl why she didn't just serve him a bowl of rice because he didn't want the salad. Cicely felt awkward again and hesitated, not knowing what to answer to Mr. Lin, who preferred the simplest food to delicacies. She still presented the prepared dish to Mr. Lin and asked him to try it. The plate shone with a golden light. On the plate was a small leaf of lettuce in yellow dressing, garnished with a few drops of pink sauce. Jiang Hao couldn't help but laugh maliciously when he saw this dish, because he thought it wasn't a salad, but just a torn cabbage leaf. Lin Tian's classmate pressed herself against our hero and began to praise this salad, saying that it was magnificent. The protagonist did not argue that the cabbage was delicious, but asked the girl not to exaggerate so much. Cicely, smiling proudly, asked Lin Tian and the other guests to take a close look at the so-called cabbage. She explained that the cabbage leaf is actually made from different types of black and white truffles, as well as snow clam paste, and that the salad cost 30,000. The protagonist tried the salad and admitted that it was really tasty, even a little better than what they cook in the student cafeteria. Cicely, Jiang Hao, and the others looked at our hero with bewilderment because he compared this exquisite dish to a canteen. The students were delighted with the expensive dishes served, and one of them asked if Lin Tian was so accustomed to delicacies that he preferred the cafeteria. In addition to the salad, the chef served the students a seemingly familiar dish, free cabbage soup, but made with the most expensive ingredients. The chefs also prepared endangered pork with rare white asparagus, seasoned with saffron. The students were also served their usual scrambled eggs from the cafeteria, but this time it included special honey-glazed tomatoes and spherical fish meat. The disciples admired this food and praised Lin Tian, believing that Jiang Hao's title as boss was just an illusion and that our hero was actually a true dark horse. Jiang Hao still couldn't believe what was happening. He wondered if Lin Tian was really a millionaire and he would lose like this. Manager Cicely smiled kindly and asked Mr. Lin if he was satisfied with the dishes served. The protagonist burped and replied that he was satisfied with the food, but the water served to him was too cold. Cicely replied that it was the spring water of the snowy mountain, that was why it was so cold, but then asked the master to forget about her words. The girl handed our hero an envelope, saying that she had to return the remaining money to him because he had paid them too much. Our hero got angry when he heard this. He stood up abruptly and loudly slammed his hand on the table, shouting at Cicely. Lin Tian refused to accept the change. He ordered Cicely to buy herself bags, cosmetics, and everything else that was most expensive with the money. The students were amazed by Lin Tian's courageous act, and his classmate felt that our hero was becoming more and more beautiful in his eyes. The protagonist cried with relief when the system's task was finally completed. He dreamed that his stomach was bigger and could hold more food. The guy started to get upset when the system awarded him a lottery with a random organ upgrade, and he prayed that it wasn't a useless appendix upgrade. Lin Tian's eyes widened and he froze as the arrow on the wheel of fortune finally stopped. He couldn't yet figure out what kind of improvement he had received, but Cicely, who stood in front of him, was now in her underwear. The boy broke into a smile when he realized that he had received X-ray vision. Now he could see people through clothes. Cicely tried to reach Mr. Lin, who had lost the thread of the conversation and was fascinated by his new X-ray vision. The fair-haired girl began to noticeably worry about our hero. She asked the guy what had happened to him. Lin Tian didn't stop smiling, but his nose started bleeding from the overabundance of emotions. But now the guy didn't regret his life. After the incident in the cafeteria and at the exam, our hero became the main star at the university. Even a police officer came to find him. The girl decided to meet Lin Tian in person because, even though the bank robbery case was closed, she felt that something was wrong. The policewoman noticed a group of students returning from the university, chatting cheerfully about something. She shouted, asking the guys to wait, because she wanted to ask them a question regarding our hero. The student was scared when he saw the policewoman and asked the officer if something had happened. The girl screamed and began to complain, because she didn't look like an old woman, and introduced herself to them as Zhou Weiwei. The students laughed artificially, feeling awkward because one of them called Zhou Weiwei auntie. Zhu Weiwei noticed the bags in their hands because she had seen similar ones before and asked if they were common in their university. The boys explained to their sister that everything is very simple. Wearing such bags instead of a school bag is now fashionable thanks to Master Lin. The policewoman thought about it and decided that it was just some rich kid who decided to play a prank on the other students. Zhou Weiwei again demanded that they stop and began to shout indignantly when she realized that she had just been called sister. The policewoman froze when the young man she had come to the university to look for appeared on the horizon. Weiwei was surprised that she met our hero so quickly. She didn't even have to enter the school grounds. Lin Tian was busy with the system. It suddenly informed him that the training was completed, and now he was transferred to the task selection screen. He didn't pay attention to the girls surrounding him. The guy was unhappy that the system was going to punish him for failing to complete the task. One of the girls clung to him and, blushing, said that she would be alone in the room tonight, but Lin Tian didn't even look at her. Zhou Weiwei grimaced in confusion when she heard the girls call Lin Tian Master Lin. The police girl couldn't believe it because, according to the investigation, Lin Tian is a poor man, not a rich kid. Looking at his poor appearance and the childish watch on his hands, she also remembered that this guy studied and went to work at the same time. Zhou Weiwei, passing by our hero, who didn't even look at her, began to guess what was wrong here. The police concluded that after robbing the bank, Lin Tian, who had previously been poor, suddenly became rich, which meant he was involved in the crime. The policewoman turned around and shouted, ordering Lin Tian, who was involved in the robbery, to stay put. Lin Tian didn't pay attention to her. He needed to choose a task from the system. For starters, he decided to choose an easy one. Then, Zhou Weiwei ran up to our hero, grabbed him by the shoulder and shouted that she needed to talk to him. Because Zhou Weiwei distracted Lin Tian, he accidentally chose a difficult task from the system instead of an easy one, and said that it was all over now. The protagonist did not manage to remove his finger at the last moment, and confirmed that he was choosing a difficult task. The policewoman agreed that it was over for him and asked him to take his hand off her. Lin Tian looked up and finally noticed that Zhou Weiwei had been standing in front of him all this time. He looked at her with a puzzled expression. Our hero decided to go on the run, loudly apologizing to the policewoman and explaining that time waits for no one. Zhou Weiwei, flushed with embarrassment and indignant, began to shout, demanding that he stay put. Lin Tian was given the task of buying a car worth at least 2 million and participating in a race. The punishment was severe, the loss of language skills. He looked at his childhood watch with a pig and saw that it was now 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which meant that the task had to be completed before 8 in the evening. Lin Tian smiled and rushed forward, shouting that this time was more than enough and no one could stop him from spending the money. The protagonist was stunned and did not understand what was happening when he felt the absence of solid ground under his feet. It turned out that the policewoman grabbed the robbery suspect by the arm so that he would not even try to escape from her. Zhou Weiwei was wearing boots with unstable heels, so she slipped on the slippery tiles after grabbing Lin Tian. The girl fell to the ground with a crash, along with the stunned protagonist, whom she pinned to the asphalt. The main character, Lin Tian, grimaced and cried out in pain as he fell onto the concrete slab and hit himself due to the policewoman's fault. Zhu Weiwei deftly handcuffed him and accused our hero of hooliganism and assaulting a police officer. Lin Tian looked at the policewoman with pity and shed a tear when he was arrested for disturbing the peace. When our hero was taken to the police station, there was a brief silence, and Lin and Zhou Weiwei looked into each other's eyes for a long time. The policewoman couldn't stand it any longer, slammed the table and screamed, asking why Lin Tian didn't just tell the truth. The protagonist scratched his head and told Miss Zhou that it was just a misunderstanding, and he had already told her about it before. Zhou Weiwei shone a bright lamp directly on his face and said that she could spend the whole day like that with him to see how long he could last. The officer's phone vibrated in his pocket. She took it out and answered the call. Someone told her to just take the guy and free him. Cicely showed up at the station and told the police officer that she was Lin Tian's lawyer, so Zhou should ask her all her questions. Lin Tian was released on bail, so he immediately decided to escape from the station, suggesting that the girls now sort things out themselves. Soon our hero was lamenting. Clutching his head, he stood in front of the closed door of the car dealership, because the clock was already 6 o'clock in the evening. Walking along the pedestrian crossing, he didn't look around but thought about where he could now find a car for 2 million. The guy didn't notice the bus rushing straight towards him. Fortunately, it passed by Lin Tian without hitting him. The bus driver got angry because he almost ran over our hero, he shouted, asking if the guy was really tired of living. The main character was not scared or angry at the driver, but gave him a thumbs up, smiled, and thanked him because he gave him an idea. Lin Tian ran along the underpass whistling a cheerful tune, leaving the bus driver bewildered. The guy soon found a great hybrid car that had a lot of space and a lot of horsepower. Other perks included automatic air conditioning with a constant temperature and leather seats. The protagonist also noted the mirrors that rotated 180 degrees, So this vehicle seemed worthy of 2 million to him. Lin Tian said that it was worth the money spent, and he was not against purchasing a bus for as much as 2 million, just to complete the system's task. The young man beamed with happiness because now he would be able to avoid punishment from the system, and his language skills would be preserved. The guy proudly declared that from now on, he would have his own bus and would not have to spend money on public transport. Lin Tian smiled when he received a notification from the system that the first part of the task had been successfully completed. The smile disappeared from his face when the system described the goal of the second part of the task, to win a drift race in the purchased car. The main character decided that this was the end, because drift racing on this bulky bus seemed impossible to him. The guy grabbed his head, looked at the sky and screamed, because the main problem was that he didn't know how to drive. Lin Tian screamed and cried, but suddenly a silhouette of a woman appeared behind him, who declared that at least she knew how to drive. Hope appeared in our hero's eyes. He smiled and turned to look at his savior. The guy fell to his knees and cried with relief, hugging Cicely. He shouted that he was glad to see her, and promised to give her a promotion. He stood up and started to get on the bus, became serious, and told Cicely to stop chatting because time was running out. At night, one of the drivers was confident of his victory, because the day before he had re-equipped his car, now it had nitrogen acceleration. Zhang Hao, who was also participating in the race, laughed and told him that his clunker didn't even deserve the exhaust fumes from his car. The driver recognized the boy as Zhang Hao, and made it clear that he knew about the boy's recent disgrace when no one agreed to eat his dinner. The red-haired guy got angry at the racer, clenched his teeth in anger and grabbed him by the collar. Suddenly, a girl covering her face with a black mask approached the race participants and told everyone to shut up. The racer recognized the girl as the legendary racing goddess Luo Jiashan, who drives a snow-white car called Snowstorm. Luo Jiashan began to get into her car, which was as white as her suit, and she told her rivals to stop talking nonsense. The legendary racer really did own an expensive sports car that was sparkling clean. The girl was determined to win, and once behind the wheel, she suggested to her rivals that they start the race. Zhang Hao was also motivated to win today because, according to legend, the winner of the race will be able to remove Luo Jiashan's mask. Approaching his car, the guy shouted, asking if all the participants were there, and suggested starting the race. The red-haired boy screamed and covered his eyes with his hands when he was suddenly blinded by a bright yellow flash of light. It was the main character who arrived here on his new bus. He greeted the participants and announced that he would also take part in the race. There was silence on the track. Everyone had arrived here in their racing cars. Only Lin Tian decided to compete on the bus. Cicely blushed and thought that for the first time in her life she felt such great shame because she was going to take part in a bus race. Zhang Hao turned red with rage and screamed when he saw our hero, because today he decided to ruin his day again. The protagonist's bus stopped at the same level as the other cars. Lin Tian looked out of the window and smiled. The guy leaned against the glass and looked at his rival, who was sitting in the other car, the smile never leaving his face. Luo Jishan turned her attention to our hero. She didn't look as friendly as he did, but rather wary. The protagonist noticed that his rival was wearing a mask, so he decided to see her true face using X-ray vision. Lin Tian's eyes widened in surprise when he saw the unmasked racer, a girl he recognized. It turned out that behind the pseudonym and mysterious image of the legendary racer Luo Jiashan was hiding an excellent student from his class named Su Xueqing. Our hero knew this girl very well. He knew that Su Xueqing was recognized as a goddess among all the guys at his university. Not only was she an excellent student, Su Xueqing was also distinguished by her angelic appearance, good figure, and family reputation. Students looked at her with admiration when she played tennis, because Su was also a master in the sport. But the most charming thing about Su Xueqing was how sweet and gentle she smiled, making all the guys at the university fall in love with her. The main character found it hard to believe that this cute girl from his university was taking part in dangerous races. Lin Tian couldn't take his eyes off his rival, shocked after he exposed her with his X-ray eyes. Racer Luo Jishan was displeased when she noticed the guy staring at her. She asked the idiot what he was staring at. The main character got scared when she addressed him so rudely, stopped staring at her so brazenly, and trembled with fear. Afterwards, Lin Tian laughed because he never expected that the goddess from his university would be so arrogant. The race organizer began waving a large flag. The participants were given the command to get ready, and the countdown began. The countdown reached 1. All the drivers had already turned on their headlights and were ready to press the gas pedal on command. The team members were given the command to start, and the expensive sports cars suddenly took off. Among them was our hero's bus, which was also racing along the night highway, trying to overtake those driving in front. Zhang Hao looked at his opponent Ting Lian with annoyance, thinking that this guy was crazy to decide to participate in a bus race. The main character looked relaxed because he didn't even have to steer. He crossed his legs and folded his hands behind his head. The red-haired guy stuck his hand out of the window, gave our hero a thumbs down and shouted that this time he would trample him. Lin Tian's yellow bus began to drive level with Snowstorm, driven by his classmate Luo Jiashan. The protagonist stopped near her car when he noticed that she had slowed down and asked the beauty why she was standing there. Luo Jiashan replied that she had an agreement with the judge. She had to give her opponents a 5-minute head start, otherwise she would be accused of bullying the other participants. Lin Tian smiled and told the girl that he was ready to wait for her. His bus also stopped near his classmate's car. The perplexed racer asked if Lin Tian was really so willing to give up the 500,000 entry fee for the race. The protagonist smiled arrogantly and replied that it was only $500,000. The main thing was to remain calm and patient. In fact, Lin Tian wanted to cry because the system gave him this amount, and he still couldn't spend the money elsewhere. The young man added that he was unlikely to have spent those 500,000 in vain, so they would still see who would lose and who would win. Luo Jiashan asked her opponent if he really planned to win the bus race without any modifications. The protagonist replied that he, a great man, had a plan, and he, Lin Tian, was not going to lose so easily. The girl frowned, looked closely at her opponent again, and wondered if this was really the guy everyone at the university had been talking about lately. As she was about to set off, the racer shouted that she wanted to see Lin Tian lose and stepped on the gas pedal. The protagonist ordered Cicely, who was driving, to get down to business and follow the plan they had previously outlined. Lin Tian decided to take the first and most important step. He took out his phone from the plastic bag. The landline phone started ringing loudly, and a man picked up the receiver to answer the protagonist's persistent call. When the protagonist contacted this man, his expression became even more confident. Everything was going according to his plan. The boy screamed into the phone to a police officer complaining about a crowd of racers gathered on Mount Luojiashan. The race on the mountain track continued. Zhang Hao's black and red sports car made a sharp turn, its wheels flashing. Zhang Hao was in a good mood. He looked at the side mirror and realized that this Lin Tian was somewhere behind. Turning pale and clenching his teeth in anger, the red-haired guy was already dreaming of beating up our hero after he won this race. When Zhang Hao's car suddenly began to brake, the boy grabbed the steering wheel and grimaced in surprise. Zhang Hao's car hit spikes on the road, the tires were punctured, and he screamed, asking who dared to set him up. It turned out that the spikes on the road were placed by police officers who were standing nearby with flashlights in their hands. Zhou Weiwei was also there, shouting that she was arresting Zhang Hao for endangering public order and illegally modifying a car. A strict policewoman tied the racer's hands with a rope so that he could not run away. Zhang Hao froze and fell silent from shock. The girl admitted that she did not know who the citizen was who called the police, but she wanted to be sure to thank him. The main character's bus also slowly approached the scene, puffing with exhaust pipes. Cicely, who was driving, asked Mr. Tian if there was any other way since the police were waiting for them ahead. Lin Tian replied that he had called the police to block the shortcut so that the rest would take the long road. The frightened girl asked if Mr. Tian was hinting that they would have to storm the police post using the blocked shortcut. The protagonist yawned tiredly and told the fair-haired girl that she would understand everything herself when the time came. Zhou Weiwei managed to arrest not only Zhang Hao, but also the other young male racers who were taking the shortcut. Our hero's huge yellow bus also almost reached the police post, passing the metal spikes on the road. The police officer was startled and closed her eyes when Lin Tian's bus slightly grazed her back as it passed by. Zhou Weiwei covered her skirt with her hands and blushed because it was torn. She turned around and screamed, asking who did this. The protagonist looked out of the passenger window and asked if he could really see Aunt Zhou Weiwei in front of him. The policewoman shouted, asking our hero if he was also here to take part in illegal races. Lin Tian asked Aunt Zhou if she was overtired, because no one in their right mind would participate in a bus race. The boy showed her the sign and explained that he was just taking the last bus home and asked Aunt Zhou to clear the way for him. The police officer thought about it. She thought that Lin Tian was not lying because it was impossible to participate in a bus race. Therefore, she decided not to detain our hero. Lin Tian's bus safely passed the police checkpoint and drove on. When she realized something was wrong, Zhou Weiwei shouted at the boy to stop, as there were no buses on Luojiashan Mountain. Covering her skirt with her hand, she shouted after Lin Tian that he would also have to pay for her ruined uniform. Cicely's mood improved and she reported to Mr. Tian that they were still in the lead and half the route had already been completed. Lin Tian's bus was driving alongside the other race participants who were not stopped by the police, and Luojiashan's car was also there. Luojiashan was surprised when she saw our hero's bus, because she didn't expect such a vehicle to be able to catch up with her. The girl in the black mask immediately guessed that it was Lin Tian who could call the police to get rid of his rivals. She stepped on the gas pedal and pulled ahead. Luo Jiashan acknowledged our hero's resourcefulness, but said that she couldn't be beaten on a city highway. Cicely's mood immediately worsened. They were left behind again. The other cars had overtaken them. She wanted to tell the gentleman about this. But Lin Tian wasn't that upset. The guy called someone on the phone and ordered that person to do what they discussed earlier. The protagonist put on sunglasses and said into the phone that money is not a problem, you need to act now. Luo Jiashan's Snow White sports car was still in the lead, with the rest of the illegal race participants trailing behind. One of the drivers behind the wheel said he had no idea which idiot called the police, but luckily he had a way to get ahead. He was about to press the button, having recently equipped his car with a nitrogen booster that would help him defeat the blizzard. The guy pressed the button on the touchpad to activate the nitrogen boost in tornado mode and overtake Luo Jiashan. Bright purple sparks flew out of the exhaust pipes of the racer's blue car. The turbo boost mode was successfully activated. Tornado mode actually helped the racer reach such a high speed that he overtook Snowstorm in a few seconds. The racer pulled ahead, but suddenly his eyes were blinded by a bright white flash that prevented him from seeing anything else. The puzzled guy winced from the bright light, not understanding where this flash on the road came from. The bright light blinded the other race participants, and they all began to lose control and crash into each other. The guy heard a call to Earthlings to let him study their bodies, then he assumed that aliens had arrived on Earth. The race participants started crying, opened the door, and started to get out of the car because he was too young and did not want to die at the hands of aliens. The riders climbed out of their cars and fell to their knees. All of them began to writhe and scream in fear of the unknown light. They obediently raised their hands up and shouted, appealing to the aliens to spare the young men. The three race participants didn't notice that the whole time they were standing not in front of the aliens, but in front of Lin Tian's yellow bus. The protagonist, his eyes protected by glasses, looked out the passenger window and told the boys that he was not an alien. Afterwards, Lin Tian stuck his hand out of the window, pointed his finger at the sky where the bright flash was shining, and was ready to say something else to the racers. The young man claimed he was just a rich guy, and his rivals looked up at the sky and realized they were being blinded by spotlights, not aliens. The protagonist pointed his finger at his rivals and let the Sicilian team who were driving take care of them. The fair-haired girl brought a thin metal tube to her mouth and blew sharp needles out of it. One of the needles hit the racer in the neck. He didn't even have time to realize what had happened and froze with a puzzled look on his face. Very quickly, Sicily managed to get rid of the rest of her Master Tien's rivals by throwing needles at the guys. This caused the race participants to fall asleep. They all collapsed on the asphalt in a heap and could no longer prevent Lin Tian from winning. Lin Tian laughed and asked the boys if they had ever heard the story of the tortoise and the hare, saying that now they would have to sleep like the rabbit in the story. Pleased with the result, our hero gave Sicily a thumbs up and praised her for doing such a great job. The girl smiled and told Mr. Tian that she learned this skill of throwing poison needles from Detective K. Dongzi. The rest of the race participants remained sleeping on the road, and our hero's yellow bus slowly moved forward. Luo Jiashan was the only remaining opponent for Lin Tian, driving her snow-white car while assessing the situation. The girl put on her sunglasses and admitted that Lin Tian really did have a few tricks up his sleeve. The racer pressed the red button, deciding that she would have to speed up to prevent her main rival from winning. The snowstorm has been updated with a spoiler and additional exhaust pipes to make the car even faster. Luo Jiashan stepped on the gas pedal to accelerate using the nitrogen boost. The wheel of her snow-white racing car began to spin rapidly, shaking against the asphalt and emitting bright sparks. The snowstorm rushed forward, leaving behind bright streaks of purple light. The girl screamed that she would not let Lin Tian win. An indignant Lin Tian asked Zhili how much longer they had to travel, since the signal here was poor, and he risked missing the broadcast. He sighed heavily and complained about how hard it was to be the best, and he wondered if there was a worthy opponent for him. The protagonist's eyes widened in surprise, and he looked out the window when he heard a strange, loud noise. Lin Tian looked up at the sky and was stunned to see Snowstorm Luo Jiashan flying right above the bus, overtaking it. Afterwards, Snowstorm landed back on the track, cutting off the rival's yellow bus to overtake it. Luo Jiashan, her eyes protected by dark glasses, looked intently at our hero, who looked back at her warily. The racer ran her hand over her neck, letting the protagonist know that she would not let him win this race. The protagonist admitted that Luo Jiashan was truly a goddess because she was able to catch up with him even under such circumstances. The nitrogen boost allowed Luo Jiashan to overtake the yellow bus, leaving Lin Tian and Sicily behind. Sicily tensed up noticeably and asked Mr. Tian what they should do now that they were in second place. Our hero thought for a moment and admitted that this was not in his plans. He was already afraid of actually losing this race. An idea came to his mind. Lin Tian grabbed the walkie-talkie and asked Sicily if she could throw it into Luo Jiashan's car. The blonde girl smiled and asked Mr. Tian to just watch as she did this. Sicily began to tear her clothes to make a makeshift rope from the scraps of fabric. The bus driver wrapped the radio in scraps of cloth in order to throw it into Luo Jiashan's car. Celie leaned out of the bus window and began waving the radio to get it to pick up speed and reach the right place after the throw. When Sicily threw the radio towards Snowstorm, it began to fly in a clear trajectory, eventually hitting the car. Luo Jiashan was perplexed when she looked at her passenger seat and saw a walkie-talkie lying on it. Lin Tian called out to her through the radio and asked the beauty if she was still tired and why didn't she stop and take a rest. The girl took the walkie-talkie and told Lin Tian to stop playing with her because he was just a loser who only deserved to kiss her feet. The main character, with a satisfied smile on his face, answered the racer that he would still have time to do this, but not before he won the race. Luo Jiashan got angry at our hero, calling him a pervert, and declared that he definitely wouldn't win today. Our hero smiled confidently and asked the racing queen if she was so confident that she could win. Jiashan visibly tensed up when Lin Tian called her by her real name, Su Xueqing, which was a secret. The girl's voice became quieter and less confident. Beads of sweat ran down her face. She asked how he recognized her, since she was wearing a mask. The main character couldn't get the image of his straight-A classmate, whom he saw in her underwear with the help of X-ray eyes, out of his head. The guy smiled and thought that he not only knew what she looked like under the mask, but also the color of her underwear. Lin Tian said over the radio that it was perfectly okay to keep secrets, but the racer needed to show a little goodwill. Luo Jiashan was outraged. She got angry and asked our hero, communicating with him on the radio, how he was not ashamed to say such a thing. A snowstorm caused the race car to brake suddenly, meaning the guy managed to stop his rival. Lin Tian's yellow bus was already a few meters from the finish line. His threats towards Luo Jiashan had an effect on her. The guy got off the bus, dressed in a racing suit, and everyone around him was cheering, loudly announcing the winner. Luo Jiashan was also in the audience, but she wasn't so happy. She looked angrily at our hero and dreamed of dealing with him if he exposed her. The main character wanted to get out of here as quickly as possible, because the live broadcast he wanted to watch would start very soon. The attractive blogger's live broadcast began, and her chat was filled with comments from viewers who were waiting for her appearance. The broadcast finally started, and the pink-haired girl invited viewers to start the stream with a dance and asked them not to forget to donate to her. The girl, without showing her face, began to dance to the music on camera, and the audience showered her with compliments. The main character blushed and did not let go of his phone, watching the broadcast of his favorite streamer. What attracted him most was her figure. Lin Tian was curious about who was hiding behind the streamer's mask, since the girl never showed her face. Our hero never tired of watching his favorite blogger dance and giggling, his smile widening with satisfaction. Tian Feifei continued to dance on camera in front of her audience, which was now more than 150 people watching. Suddenly, the ginger cat who lived in the streamer's house released his claws and, meowing loudly, jumped straight at her. The girl slipped in surprise and fell straight onto the floor, her thigh scratched by a playful ginger cat. Viewers didn't feel sorry for her, but started leaving the stream, leaving angry comments under her broadcast, saying there was nothing to watch here. Tian Feifei, who was still feeling unwell after her fall, apologized to her followers for making a mistake today. The main character was furious at the rude commentators. He screamed and waved his arms because his goddess was insulted. Feifei sat back down in front of the microphone, now with only 26 viewers watching, and she looked sad. Suddenly, the streamer felt dizzy. It became noticeably worse. She closed her eyes and began to lose her balance even while sitting. The number of viewers on her broadcast dropped to 4 people, and the angry ginger cat decided to attack his owner again. Lin Tian began to dream of having real money and being able to use his gifts to help his favorite streamer become one of the most popular. The protagonist was perplexed when he looked at his hand and saw that his fingers were emitting a bright golden light. His index finger began to shine brighter and brighter like a gold bar. Lin Tian continued to stare at his palm. Suddenly, Tian Feifei received a notification from the platform that she had received the title of Broadcast Queen. Lin Tian didn't understand who did this. Who had such good taste and so much money to give his goddess such an expensive title? Tian Feifei was also shocked when she received this gift, and the number of viewers on her broadcast instantly increased to 2 million. The girl stuttered as she thanked Tian Tianlin for the gift, unable to hold back her tears and blushing. The main character was shocked when he heard his nickname, because he definitely didn't give the girl any gifts. Lin Tian checked his phone. He received a message from the platform congratulating him on becoming a crowned noble in Tian Feifei's broadcast room. Our hero still found it hard to believe that this handsome multi-billionaire with good taste was really him. He didn't understand what was going on, and then decided to check what reward he received from the system for winning the race, since he had never done this before. The protagonist activated the system interface and saw that he had received a gift generator for winning the race. It turns out he received a golden finger, which he can use an unlimited number of times to spend virtual currency on any website. The reward from the system did not make our hero very happy, because he suddenly felt that he was losing a lot. The next morning, Lin Tian returned to the university, looking tired and yawning after yesterday's busy day. When he opened his eyes, the boy was shocked, because a girl from his university was wearing a bandage on her thigh, where Tian Feifei got a scratch yesterday. Thinking back to yesterday's broadcast, a shocked Lin Tian wondered if the goddess Tian Feifei was really a girl from his university. The protagonist continued to closely watch the girl with long hair in a short snow-white dress, whom he suspected. When the stranger turned around and smiled, Tian Feifei realized that Su Xueqing, the famous straight-A student and racer, was standing in front of him. Lin Tian shook his head in disappointment because the girl looked nothing like his favorite streamer. He shrugged and said that it was a waste of time because Tian Feifei and Su Xueqing were different in both height and face. Su Xueqing was delighted to bump into our hero. The excellent student admitted that she had been waiting for him here for a long time. The protagonist asked why she waited for him, since they didn't know each other well enough to communicate. Blushing, the modest girl asked Lin Tian how he did it, but in her heart she was angry at Lin Tian because he had threatened her last night. Lin Tian completely ignored the girl's question. He was more interested in the unusual bright light in the middle of the classroom. The guy pointed his finger in that direction and shouted, asking his classmates who was emitting such a bright light. It turned out that it was Zhang Hao, who had lost all his hair. His bald head was so perfect that it reflected the sun's rays. Zhang Hao felt ashamed because all his classmates were openly laughing at him. He sat with his eyes closed and his teeth clenched in anger. The guy became even more angry when he saw our hero, because wherever he goes, he always meets Lin Tian. Hao finally figured out that our hero might have been the one who called the police during the race yesterday. The shaved-headed guy stood up abruptly, waving his fist, and began loudly accusing Lin Tian of being the one who called the police yesterday. Lin Tian pretended that he had nothing to do with it and asked if Zhang Hao was crazy, since the guy had been with Su Xueqing all night yesterday. All the students stared at the excellent student when they heard this. Su Xueqing froze, her mouth open, and didn't know what to say in her defense. The girl blushed and fell silent, hiding her shameful eyes because she could not honestly tell the truth to her classmates. She was forced to nod to confirm Lin Tian's version, since she couldn't admit to participating in the race. In her soul, she felt like a terrible demon who, out of anger, was ready to take the life of our hero for this shame. The protagonist's classmates opened their mouths wide and fell silent, in shock, while Lin Tian sat up and put his legs up, smiling. The boys began to whisper, discussing the shocking news because it turned out that the famous flower of the university belonged to the young and scary Master Lin. Su Xueqing clenched her teeth in anger. All her thoughts were now about our hero and how much she wanted to take revenge on him for the shame she had suffered. The teacher entered the room and told the students to take their seats because the lesson was about to begin. Before starting the lesson, our hero's class teacher stood on her toes, as she was short. She took the chalk and started writing something on the board, announcing the topic of today's lesson to the students, while in her other hand she held a textbook. Looking at his beloved teacher, a thought entered Lin Tian's mind, and then his face twisted. The protagonist noticed that a lot of red cat hair had stuck to the class teacher's snow-white shirt. Afterwards, Lin Tian looked at the teacher's ankles. They also had bruises, just like the streamer Tian Feifei had after her fall yesterday. Our hero formed a frame with his fingers to compare Miss Chen with Tian Feifei and confirm whether they were really the same person. Miss Chen turned her head and looked at her student with confusion when she noticed that he was acting strangely. The puzzles in Lin Tian's head finally came together, and then he froze, his mouth and eyes wide open in shock. Our hero's class teacher got angry when she saw that he was behaving strangely. She screamed and asked what was wrong with him. The protagonist began to cry with happiness because he realized that his unattainable goddess Tian Feifei was standing in front of him right now. The boy grinned, but he still found it hard to believe that his homeroom teacher would turn out to be his favorite goddess. The system stunned him with a notification that Lin Tian had now received a Hell Mode difficulty quest, but our hero didn't stop smiling. He had a lot of questions when the system gave him the task of collecting the 3 best streamers on the internet within 1 week, and the reward for this was unknown. The protagonist decided not to be distracted by his beloved goddess any longer. Now, completing the system's task was his priority. The boy intended to check with X-ray eyes whether his teacher was really that same Tian Feifei. Lin Tian clarified to himself that he was not doing this for his own pleasure, but simply to check whether Miss Chen had the same mole on her leg as Feifei. Our young hero's eyes widened in bewilderment when he checked Miss Chen with X-ray vision, and the results surprised him. It turned out that Miss Chen was wearing leggings under her tights, so the guy was unable to check whether she had a mole on her leg. He wanted to cry from the injustice because his X-ray eyes were only able to see through 1 layer of clothing. The class teacher covered her legs with a textbook when she noticed Lin Tian staring at her and asked why he was doing that. The protagonist was forced to play dumb. He shrugged his shoulders and looked at his teacher in bewilderment. Miss Chen did not interrogate the student any further because she was distracted by the phone ringing. She picked up the phone and looked at the screen. The bell clearly upset her, and the girl quickly told the students to first study on their own, and she would ask them questions after the lesson. The class teacher put the phone to her ear and turned around to leave the classroom and talk to someone. The main character became worried when he saw his favorite teacher run out of the room in tears. He scratched his chin and remembered that his goddess Tianfeifei had once cried in exactly the same way when she was insulted by the audience. The young hero stood up abruptly and clenched his teeth in anger. Now he didn't care about missions from systems or money. The guy didn't want to let anyone make his goddess cry. Frightened, Miss Chen ran out of the university in a hurry, walked to her moped and put on her helmet to ride away. The girl had no idea that at this time someone was secretly following her, hiding near the building around the corner. It was the guy who immediately called someone and reported that Chen had already left and that he should remember to put pressure on the girl again. The main character was standing behind this guy all this time. He was angry at the one who was trying to hit on his goddess. Miss Chen was already at the hospital and talked to the doctor, promising to find a way to get money if only he would help her father with the operation. The doctor took off his glasses and replied that they couldn't do anything this time because the previous doctor-sponsored operation hadn't helped him. The purple-haired girl trembled and began to cry after hearing the bad news from the doctor. She received a message demanding that she have dinner with Master Zhou, for which Miss Chen would receive a whole $500,000 from them. Miss Chen stepped aside to read the message carefully. She was tormented by doubts, because she would be paid a whole $500,000. Soon, the girl left the hospital. At this time, a guy who had been following her and a man with an unbuttoned shirt were already waiting for her on the street. The man with the bald spot told Miss Chen that this situation needed to be dealt with, otherwise her father might get hurt. The red-haired guy laughed. He didn't think when he signed the contract with the girl that she would later turn out to be so stubborn and patient. Miss Chen couldn't stop crying. The guy put his finger on her chin and remarked that she was very beautiful. Luckily, our hero's homeroom teacher was saved, because a moment later a fist landed in the boy's face. The blow was so strong that the red-haired guy flew back several meters and fell to the ground, raising a cloud of dust above him. Miss Chen was confused about what had happened, and the frightened girl began to look around. It turned out that the girl was saved by Lin Tian, who menacingly clenched his fist and insulted a bunch of idiots who dared to touch her beloved goddess. Afterwards, the main character carefully took the class teacher by the hand to lead her away from this group. The guy told the scoundrels to keep their ears open and listen to him carefully, after which he declared that this girl belonged only to him. The red-haired guy who had been punched in the face by our hero was still sitting on the asphalt. Teacher Miss Chen blushed when she heard her student's words and hesitated, not knowing what to say in response. The balding man got angry and shouted, asking the guy what the hell, since Miss Chen had signed a contract with their company. Smiling maliciously, the man declared that the girl was to blame for not reading the contract carefully, as she was now obligated to pay them a fine. The nasty old man didn't have time to finish speaking and announced the amount of the fine before he received a slap in the face from Lin Tian. The protagonist blew on his hand, which was burning after a hard slap, and advised the man to keep quiet. The red-haired guy, who was still shaking from pain and anger, covered his beaten face with his hand and tried to get up. With his tooth knocked out, he shouted angrily, drew his knife, and ordered his men to take the life of our hero for his sake. The man with a large gold chain on his chest took the knife from the red-haired guy, clenched his teeth in anger, and was ready to pounce on Lin Tian. He shouted, asking Lin Tian if he really thought his fist would be stronger than his cold weapon. The main character was not frightened by this. He said that it seemed like the guys had misunderstood everything and asked them to look back. The two scoundrels, holding their knives at the ready, turned around sharply and became frightened, thinking that an ambush had been prepared for them. When the men turned and looked back, they froze in bewilderment because there was nothing there except a leaf from a tree floating in the air. Our hero took advantage of the opportunity, grabbed Miss Chen in his arms and ran away, and they immediately realized that they had been deceived. Lin Tian ran to his yellow bus to keep himself and his beloved goddess safe from the criminals there. The red-haired guy and his partner with a bald spot followed our hero and Miss Chen onto the bus to catch them. The main character sat down on one of the seats and put the girl in his arms. Surprisingly, the young man looked completely calm. Whistling a tune, Lin Tian said that the scoundrels seemed to have no idea whose bus they were boarding. The red-haired guy shouted angrily, asking if Lin Tian really wanted to deceive them again and pretend that this bus belonged to him. Without waiting for an answer, the criminal is hit in the face again, this time by Cicely, who attacks him with her knee. The man in the unbuttoned shirt winced in fear when he saw the blonde's leg in front of him, rapidly approaching his face. Cicely managed to deal with two big guys in 2 blows who lost consciousness and collapsed on top of each other in the street. The blonde girl shook her hands and closed the bus door, getting rid of the 2 annoying rascals. The protagonist opened the window and proudly shouted to the beaten men that this yellow bus really belonged to him. The yellow bus chugged along as it slowly rolled forward, leaving behind 2 big guys who were still recovering from the beating they had received from Cicely. Our hero's class teacher felt awkward as she was sitting on his lap, her cheeks flushed. The protagonist noticed that his beloved goddess was worried and worriedly asked the girl what had happened. Still blushing deeply with embarrassment, Miss Chen asked her student if he could finally let her go. Lin Tian laughed stupidly, pretending to be a fool, and made the excuse that he simply forgot to let her go, after which he removed his hands from her. The main character put an innocent smile on his face, looked at the teacher and tried to convince her that he had not just lied. With a heavy sigh, a saddened Miss Chen told the boy that he had better let her off the bus so that she could go back on it. The girl explained that she couldn't afford to pay the fine for breaching the contract, so she should apologize to her bosses. The class teacher was stunned when our hero asked her not to worry, because from now on she would work only for him. He grinned when the system notified him that he had already managed to collect one of the 3 streamers, which meant he could complete this task separately. The teacher got angry, pulled him by the ear and asked him not to talk nonsense, asking when she managed to become his person. She blushed even more and reminded the guy that she was his teacher when he went to hug her. The protagonist awkwardly scratched the back of his head and smiled, after which he informed the teacher that they had already arrived at her stop. Miss Chen was shocked when Lin Tian simply escorted her off the bus, leaving her at the bus stop and saying goodbye to her. For a while, Chen stood at the bus stop and watched the bus leave, trying to come to terms with the idea that she actually liked her student. She couldn't stop blushing because she was embarrassed by the fact that she was Lin Tian's homeroom teacher. Soon, our hero's yellow bus stopped far from residential areas on a dirt road surrounded by metal barrels. Cicely was driving. The girl looked tense, and Lin Tian asked her if they had arrived at the destination yet. A worried Cicely confirmed that they were already there and asked Mr. Tian if he should call more people here. The protagonist grinned slyly and asked his subordinate if everything was ready. He didn't want to call in reinforcements here. Cicely tapped her hand on the large black suitcase and told her boss that she had prepared everything she needed. Lin Tian got off the bus holding a long, large case in his hand and asked the girl if she was still afraid of them, even with this gun. Our hero, holding a suitcase, confidently approached the entrance, which was guarded by a whole crowd of strong, tall men. The men reacted unfriendly to his appearance and asked the boy if he was lost or just looking for trouble. The protagonist responded to their questions with indifference and simply ignored the security guards as he walked into the building. Lin Tian saw a spacious warehouse in front of him, which was completely empty, with an empty chair standing in the distance. The guy boldly demanded that the man not pretend to be someone important because he needed to quickly resolve all the matters here and not be late for the live broadcast. The chair turned around and a man in a white suit was sitting on it, smoking a cigarette. He asked if it was Lin Tian who had kidnapped his actress Tian Feifei. The old man with a scar on his face looked unfriendly. He thought that he would make it difficult for Lin Tian to talk because kidnapping is a crime. The main character boldly admitted that it was he who kidnapped the actress of this company, but he was not afraid of any punishment. The head of the company could not stand it and started shouting, demanding that the boy stop making excuses to him. Lin Tian silently walked closer, and only then did the man realize that the guy wasn't making excuses and that the conversation wasn't going according to his script. Our young hero grinned and began to take something out of his pocket, ignoring the man's attempts to instill fear in him. The big guys immediately surrounded their boss and started shouting, intending to protect the man, because they thought that Lin Tian was taking out a gun. The big guys were proven wrong, because Lin Tian took out a key in a pig-shaped case from his pocket, solemnly showing it to everyone. All the men gathered were perplexed by the guy's strange behavior. They silently stared at our hero. Grinning, Lin Tian began to use the key to open the long weapon case he had brought into the warehouse with him. The lid of the case opened slightly, and everyone could see a red handle inside, which resembled a weapon. The boss and his guards panicked and shouted that things were bad, because this time Lin Tian really wanted to get his gun. At that moment, Cicely entered the game. The girl rushed past the crowd of big guys, swinging her fists and legs so that they were all defeated with one blow. When the boss was left defenseless, the protagonist screamed, demanding that he stop bothering his woman, since that was all he was capable of. The man was startled and cowered as our hero aimed his gun at him and shouted for him to take his shot. The main character held a red pistol in his hand, his finger already pressing the trigger to shoot the boss. Lin Tian placed one foot on the table and continued to scream, terrifying the frightened old man. The guards, beaten by Cicely, tried to get up and reach their trembling boss to protect him. The old man in dark glasses began to sob from fear of dying today and did not understand why this boy turned out to be even more reckless than himself. The company owner could only close his eyes and cover his face with his hand when he heard the click of the trigger. The man was perplexed when a second later he opened his eyes again and discovered that the shot had not killed or even wounded him. When the boss opened his eyes, he saw money bills flying everywhere and beamed with happiness, thinking he had gone to heaven. But then he saw in front of him the serious face of our hero, who was throwing this money at the boss with the help of a special pistol. The guy spread his arms out to the sides and urged the man to stop dreaming, because his god was Lin Tian, and every bullet here was payment for Tian Feifei's contract. Our hero showed the man a photo of his teacher and shouted that from now on, she no longer belonged to his company. The shocked elderly man wearing dark glasses wanted to say something back to Lin Tian, but he couldn't find the right words. Lin Tian threw the pistol back and shouted with furrowed brows, telling the boss not to argue, as he was serious about freeing his beloved goddess from slavery. The guy decided that the money fired from the pistol was simply not enough, so he reached into the long case again. He shouted that if one clip wasn't enough for the boss, let him get 2 more, and was ready to start shooting money at him again from several pistols. The protagonist began to inject a huge stream of money into the company owner, which caused the man to scream in surprise. Lin Tian threw the used pistols behind his back and asked the old man if this money was not enough for him. Then, our hero decided to use 3 pistols at once, a triple snowstorm against the company director, and he had to hold one of the guns in his mouth. The big guys were delighted with the money storm that engulfed them. They praised the generous and merciless Master Lin, bathing in bills. After covering the boss and his subordinates with a wave of money, Lin Tian finally obtained Tian Feifei's contract, which was now torn up. The guy took the contract, turned around and left, and finally told the boss to remember once and for all that Tian Feifei was his girlfriend. Already on the bus, Cicely, realizing that it was none of her business, still asked Mr. Tian whether it was worth spending so much money on her teacher. When Tian Feifei terminated her contract with her previous company, Lin Tian replied without hesitation that it was certainly worth it. Smiling maliciously, the boy asked why he would give money to the one who bullied his teacher Chen. At this time, the company boss who remained in the warehouse grimaced and screamed in shock upon discovering something. It turned out that all the money our hero fired from the pistol was counterfeit, and the men only discovered this now. One of the boss's subordinates managed to find real money among a mountain of counterfeits and showed the man 3 bills. The man proudly presented his boss with 250 yuan to calm him down, and someone else found the same amount. The boss got angry, hit his subordinate so hard that he flew into the wall and shouted, asking how dare he give him this garbage. The elderly man froze when he felt the barrel of a gun at the back of his head and was told not to move, warned that this time it was a real gun. The old man froze and looked back cautiously to find out who dared to break into his warehouse and threaten him with a gun again. When the boss saw Lady Caozong in front of him, the man fell to his knees and began to apologize to the girl. The elderly man began to cry and wanted to start making excuses to the girl, but she covered his mouth with the sole of her shoe. The girl with long pink hair smiled and wished the boss to just die if he wanted to apologize to her. The following events took place in the teacher's office. Miss Chen was surprised to receive the package, as she had not ordered anything recently. Our hero's class teacher opened the box and saw pieces of torn paper inside with something written on them. The woman was shocked when she realized what kind of papers they were. She opened her mouth and eyes wide and was speechless. She realized that this was her contract with the company where she worked as a streamer, which meant that it was now invalid, since it was terminated. Among the torn paper, the girl noticed a whole letter. She took it out to read the message from our hero. It turned out that it was a contract from Tiantian Lin's talent agency, and the teacher looked at it. When she saw Tiantian Lin's name, she immediately remembered how the person with that nickname had given her the status of broadcast queen a couple of days ago. Miss Chen had no idea that at that moment someone was watching her through binoculars, hiding not far from the university. It was Cicely, who had nimbly climbed a tall tree at our hero's request to spy on Miss Chen. At this time, the main character, without bothering himself with anything, sat under this tree, putting his hands behind his head, and rested. Lin Tian, smiling happily, asked Cicely if his homeroom teacher had signed the new contract. Cicely replied that the girl had naturally signed the contract, since her father needed money for the operation, and she could not refuse a generous reward. Our hero knew that the previous wave of gifts had attracted a lot of attention to Tian Feifei, and the popularity of her broadcast was steadily growing. The guy was bothered by the fact that the system only gave him the right to sign a contract with the 2 best streamers, and not with 3. The guy took out his phone and went to his favorite website, where he checked the list of the best streamers. A certain Cow was in first place. The protagonist grinned and decided that he should first get the platform's best streamer into his agency. He opened the broadcast to Cao Biluo, who was hosting it at that very moment. The girl was watched live by a full 14 million viewers. On his way back to the bus, Lin Tian called Cicely to follow him so that they could work together to force Cao Bu to sign a contract with him for any amount. Soon, Lin Tian managed to meet the best streamer in the country. The girl smiled radiantly and agreed to sign a contract. The protagonist was shocked and shouted, asking if Cao Biluo wasn't going to negotiate since she was the #1 streamer. The girl threw herself into his arms and said that she was confident in her brother's integrity and that he would not lie to her. Our hero blushed, awkwardly scratched the back of his head and laughed, saying that Cao Biluo had a great future ahead of him. Lin Tian was jubilant in his heart. He definitely didn't expect that getting the best streamer would be so easy. Victory was just around the corner. In fact, Cao Biluo was not who she pretended to be to our hero. She was preparing a trap for Lin Tian, who was leading the wolf into his house. The pink-haired girl raised a glass of red wine and offered a toast to her new boss. The happy guy immediately drank a glass of wine in one gulp. He didn't mind getting drunk today since things were going well. At this moment, Sao Biluo glanced at her assistant and nodded to the old man to take action. At this time, Cicely was waiting for her boss outside. She noticed a thin, tall old man in a black suit entering their bus. When the assistant of the best streamer in the country entered our hero's bus, he looked around and began to take something out of his pocket. The old man failed to carry out his insidious plan because a second later the needle with the sleeping pill hit him right in the neck. Cicely came and screamed that she saw right through him, and first the man would have to go through her if he wanted to set up the young master. Surprisingly, the needle didn't work against the older man. He simply grabbed the back of his head to remove it. A shocked Cicely screamed, asking if her poisoned needle had had no effect on the old man. The bearded old man turned around and said he was immune to anesthetics, and the girl had no idea who she was dealing with. The old man tore off his jacket and shirt in one motion, then tensed his muscles and loudly introduced himself to her as Maori. Showing off his muscular arms, the grandfather grinned and announced that he would now show Cicely his unique Chinese martial arts. Cicely wasn't afraid of the old man. She clenched her fist tightly and swung her arm to attack Maori first. The Maori proved to be a skilled martial artist, as he easily dodged the blonde girl's blow. This made Cicely tense. She screamed, asking what the move was, and noted the flexibility of her opponent's body. When Cicely wanted to punch the old man again, she didn't have time to do it because Mari grabbed the girl by the arm. The man threw the girl's hand aside, swung his right fist and explained that he was demonstrating his square dance skills to her. It was enough for Mari to push the girl away once for her to grab her head and wince, feeling dizzy. Cicely was not going to give up. She clenched her trembling fist tightly and shouted that she would use all her strength to defeat him. With a warlike expression on her face, she pounced on the old man and began swinging her fists, trying to hit him. Maori deftly dodged the girl's countless blows, shouting that she would not be able to keep up with his dynamic rhythm. Cicely froze, her eyes wide, and stopped trying to resist when Maori hit her across the neck with the edge of his hand. This made the girl fall asleep instantly, and the elderly man did not miss the opportunity to take a selfie with her in the background. Lin Tian's celebratory dinner with Cao Biluo was in full swing. The table was laden with delicacies, and they clinked their glasses to drink again. The main character was already completely flushed from intoxication. He smiled happily and fell asleep right at the table, but continued to drink wine. Cao Biluo also broke into a satisfied smile. But she was not drunk. She was happy with the success of her dastardly operation. The girl lifted her skirt, under which she held a small bag, and wondered whether her assistant had completed his task or not. At this time, Tin Lian had completely lost control of himself. He was so drunk that he fell headfirst onto the table and fell asleep, dropping his glass. Cao Biluo stood up, put her foot on the table and looked ominously at our hero, asking if he really thought she would actually sign a contract with him. She took a sip of wine and said that she would break the contract as soon as she threw the drunk Tin Lian into the bus, which already contained evidence against him. The girl laughed loudly and shouted that after that the main character would end up in prison, where he would drink with his cellmates. The streamer instantly fell silent and looked at Tin Lian with fear when he suddenly woke up and admitted that he didn't like to drink. Cao Biluo saw that Tin Lian was sitting at the table in a completely sober state. All this time, it seemed like he had been deliberately pretending to be drunk. The pink-haired girl was extremely shocked, stammering. She wanted to ask Tin Lian how he managed to do this. Tin Lian felt embarrassed to admit to Cao Biluo that he had checked her with his X-ray eyes from the very beginning. Without admitting it, the protagonist stated that from the very beginning he noticed how the girl hid the sleeping pills under her skirt. The main character couldn't stop blushing and smiling because he still couldn't get used to his X-ray vision. Cao Biluo screamed, declaring that sooner or later Tin Lian would end up in her hands anyway, and today's exposure would not hinder her. Our hero stood up from the table and advised the girl to take better care of herself, smiling arrogantly. Tin Lian asked the country's top streamer if she was curious to know who actually took the sleeping pill. The bewildered girl with pink hair abruptly sat back in her chair and looked at our hero with incomprehension. An angry Cao Biluo started yelling at the guy, repeating how disgusting he was, when she realized that she was the one who took the sleeping pill. After a few seconds, the medicine took effect on her, and she only had time to quietly say what a bad person Tin Lian was, and began to fall asleep. A sly smile spread across the protagonist's face, because now he could do everything he had planned, while Cao Biluo had fallen asleep. The girl with long pink hair was still conscious, but she found it difficult to stay awake. She covered herself with her hand and asked Tin Lian what he was going to do. Our young hero didn't respond to the streamer, he just chuckled evilly, licking his lips. Trying to stay conscious, Cao Biluo tried to stop our hero, claiming that he was acting illegally. The protagonist looked at the girl in bewilderment, not understanding why she was accusing him of a crime, because he did not consider it illegal. Chow Biluo froze in shock when she saw Tin Lian take out a plastic bag and start collecting all the food on the table into it. An indignant Tin Lian, throwing the lobsters into the bag, declared that this was a completely traditional Chinese virtue. While tying the bag, Tin Lian complained that the girl had no idea how to invite someone to dinner, as he was still hungry. Chow Biluo was also indignant and asked why Tin Lian was thinking about the leftovers when there was such a perfect beauty in front of him. The puzzled guy scratched the back of his head and asked the girl what was wrong and whether she could really be more important than food. Our hero's behavior made the girl go berserk. She started screaming and kicking her legs while sitting in the chair. The girl knocked a plate containing several meatballs off the table, causing the dish to shatter into pieces. Chow Biluo's actions and the way she treated food with disdain made the protagonist turn pale and tremble with anger. Lin Tian silently grabbed the pink-haired girl's hand and pulled her towards him. Chow Bu was scared and didn't understand why he was doing this. The main character, with a stern expression on his face, put the girl on his lap to punish her for her actions. Chow Biluo burst into tears and began screaming in pain, insulting Lin Tian as he began to hit her with his hand for her attitude towards food. Lin Tian began to yell at the girl for being careless about food and daring to break dishes. Streamer number 1 gritted her teeth and burst into tears, screaming back that even her father couldn't afford to beat her. After punishing Chow Biluo, Lin Tian walked out of the restaurant with a satisfied smile on his face, carrying bags of lobsters and bottles of wine. Chow Biluo remained inside, her whole body trembling and unable to stop crying after being beaten by Tin Lian. Before he could leave the restaurant, the main character saw a gray-haired man in front of him who was just entering. Chow Biluo's assistant decided to pass by silently. He glanced angrily at our hero, who walked through the door. The pink-haired girl immediately rushed into the arms of her assistant to complain. The old man was perplexed. Chow Biluo pulled herself together and replied that she was fine, and asked if Maori had managed to complete her task. The old man nodded and replied that everything was ready, so Lin Tian would soon meet an unfortunate fate. On the bus, our hero noticed Cicely and thought that he hadn't noticed before how beautiful she was too. Suddenly, Lin Tian's bus stopped because it was surrounded on all sides by 3 police cars. A police officer got out of the car and shouted at Lin Tian that, based on a report from a concerned citizen, he was accused of stealing a large sum of money. The main character looked out of the bus and looked at the policeman in bewilderment, not understanding what stolen money he was talking about. Cicely pulled the guy by the sleeve and discreetly handed him the weapon. Lin Tian looked at the blonde in surprise. Our hero was even more stunned when he raised his right hand and saw that the girl had handed him a firearm. The police officer became even more angry at our hero and shouted at the top of his lungs that the suspect had a gun. The frightened boy said that he had never held a real gun in his life, and all the police officers aimed to shoot at him. A smug, chubby police officer shouted, ordering his subordinates to open fire on the armed suspect. He looked at the girl running towards him in bewilderment. It was Zhou Weiwei, who decided to intervene in the situation. The policeman was angry at his colleague and shouted, asking if the girl was going to disobey his order. The police officer covered our hero with her back to prevent her colleagues from shooting Lin Tian. The girl shook her head and told Officer Yuan to take a closer look at our hero's weapon because it was a water pistol. The protagonist silently and without a single emotion on his face raised his hand and demonstrated this by releasing a stream of water from a water pistol. Officer Yuan shouted, claiming that the suspect was still dangerous because he had thoughts of resisting the police. Zhou Weiwei replied that there was no need to shoot the guy, since they had blocked the roads in all directions and he had nowhere to run. The man asked if the girl had overheated in the sun, since she had previously been investigating Lin Tian. The indignant girl replied that she had no personal animosity towards the suspect, she only relied on justice. The protagonist was touched and hugged the policewoman, calling her aunt, sister, and officer, because she stood up for him. Zhou Weiwei blushed and screamed, demanding that he stop touching her. After all, Lin Tian was still a suspect. There was simply no need to shoot him. Officer Yuan categorically disagreed with his colleague, so he roughly pushed the girl aside to deal with our hero alone. The protagonist was frightened when he saw that the man had pushed Zhou Weiwei to the ground with the force of his push. Lin Tian clenched his teeth in anger and glared at the policeman, wondering if he had been too harsh. Officer Yuan smiled evilly and asked why Lin Tian was still thinking about helping others, and did he really think that anyone other than Zhou would support him here? Confident in his rightness, the protagonist grinned and advised the police officer to stop talking too much. Lin Tian walked to a dark alley and shouted loudly, ordering someone to get out, and Officer Yuan looked in, perplexed. A small drone quickly emerged from a dark alley with a small camera underneath it filming the police officer. Officer Yuan was taken aback when he realized that the flying robot was filming him, and the plump police officer frowned and turned pale. The man lunged forward to grab the small quadcopter and squeeze it in his fist so that no one could take it off again. The law enforcement officer angrily threw the quadcopter to the ground so that it would definitely break. Having destroyed the flying camera, Officer Yuan smiled ominously and shouted that now our hero hardly has any more aces up his sleeve. Lin Tian asked the policeman if he knew that the #1 streamer Cao Biluo and the #2 streamer Tian Feifei were his actresses. The man snatched the gun from his colleague and asked what was so special about money, since in order to manage it, you at least need to be alive. The protagonist sighed heavily and replied that Officer Yuan seemed to be really stupid because he didn't know about such a thing as live broadcasting. Officer Yuan didn't even notice how the wig fell from his bald head. He pointed a gun at our hero and asked if Lin Tian really thought he could spend his money as he pleased. Suddenly, one of the civilians approached the policeman and touched the barrel of his pistol, admiring how realistic the weapon looked. Officer Yuan was silent when he saw a crowd of people in front of him. All of them turned out to be Tian Feifei's viewers who had come to see their favorite streamer. Viewers began touching the puzzled policeman, admiring how realistic his uniform was, because they thought the police officer was a hired actor for the broadcast. The protagonist grinned, apologized to the policeman, and stated that with that much money, you really could do anything. Cao Biluo finally came to her senses after dinner with Lin Tian. The effect of the sleeping pill had already worn off. She was angry at our hero. The girl looked at her assistant and asked if everything was ready. She hoped that Tin Lian was in big trouble now. The older man smiled ominously and told Lady Cao that with him on her team, she wouldn't have any problems. Cao Biluo announced that she was going to call our hero and let him know what consequences he would face if he contacted her. The pink-haired girl wanted to get her phone out from under her skirt, but then got scared when she discovered it was gone. Instead of her usual smartphone, she took out a pink toy phone for children, which had a picture of Lin Tian's favorite pig on it. The entire huge pink mansion of the #1 streamer, Cao, was filled with screams because she was angry at our hero for switching her phone. Lin Tian told Cicely that he had decided to use Cao's phone to broadcast live and asked Tian Feifei to start the stream. The guy grinned as he stood in front of the streamer's crowd and declared that the crowd's power was truly great. The protagonist took out a piece of paper and a pen and decided that now he could confidently sign a contract with the streamer. Lin Tian wrote his name on the line for side B. Cao Biluo's signature was already written at the top. The system task has been completed. One more point. Now our hero only has to sign a contract with one more girl. A jubilant Lin Tian addressed the crowd and asked if they enjoyed the exciting open-air live broadcast. He looked into the camera and asked viewers to remember that his name was Tianqian Lin, and also asked them to follow his broadcasts because there would be a big draw tomorrow. Tianqian Lin had 1.5 million viewers, all of whom wrote him positive comments because the guy promised them gifts. The protagonist smiled smugly as the audience recognized him as the same donor, but he decided to become even more popular. Suddenly, a shot rang out, and someone present in the square where the broadcast was taking place grabbed a pistol and opened fire. The viewers who came to the streamer's broadcast became frightened, started screaming and running in different directions. Officer Yuan opened fire, agreeing not to shoot our hero but intending to search his yellow bus. This didn't frighten Lin Tian. He smiled slyly and thought that he had a great opportunity to take action. Lin Tian decided to play along with the officer and stood in his way, begging the policeman not to search his bus since so many people were watching his stream. Officer Yuan, passing by, whispered to the boy that he would be in big trouble if he insulted Her Highness. A fierce police officer walked up to the window where the white telephone was standing to pick it up and stop the broadcast. The man threw the phone on the asphalt and loudly ordered his subordinates to all enter the bus and search the vehicle. When the police officers entered Lin Tian's bus, the boy walked up to Officer Yuan, put his hand on his shoulder and thanked him. Officer Yuan was completely perplexed. He didn't understand why this young man suddenly started thanking him. The man assumed that Lin Tian wanted to say something in his own defense and warned that it was too late to do so. Lin Tian warned the officer that people would want to know more about what was happening after the man broke the phone. With his arms outstretched, the protagonist proudly declared to the policeman that everyone present was part of his live broadcast. Officer Yuan visibly tensed up and started sweating, but pretended not to care, because the boy was about to be arrested. One of the police officers looked out of the window holding a suitcase in his hand and reported to the officer that he had found the missing item. The smug Officer Yuan ordered his subordinate to open the suitcase to check its contents. The man was overjoyed because he was sure that Lin Tian would not be able to escape responsibility after the police planted something in his suitcase. When the policeman opened the suitcase found on the main character's bus, the first thing he saw was a blinding light. The young police officers were stunned when they saw the contents of the suspicious suitcase, their faces blinded by the bright light. When it became clear what was in the suitcase, Officer Yuan no longer looked so self-confident. The man tensed up. The officer decided that evidence had been discovered and asked our hero how he would now behave. The protagonist pretended that he was very sorry and repentant because he shouldn't have loved studying so much. The police officer didn't understand what was going on, so he asked the boy what he loved to study so much. It turned out that the police did not find anything criminal in the suitcase. There were only math and English textbooks inside. Officer Yuan's subordinates showed him the contents of the suitcase, and the bald man was dumbfounded for a while. Officer Yuan became even more angry and started shouting, asking why the money Lin Tian had stolen had not been found. The protagonist scratched the back of his head, pretending to be a fool, and asked the police officer what stolen money he was talking about. The police officer shouted, accusing our hero of hiding the stolen money in the bus, and his subordinate had just found it. Our young hero grinned confidently and declared that Officer Yuan had supposedly forced the policeman to plant the money on the boy. Officer Yuan pointed a gun at our hero and warned that slandering the police was a crime. The guy, unafraid, removed the gun barrel from himself and warned the officer that he would not get off with just prison if he did not put the weapon away. The bald man refused to put away his weapon, believing that no one here could stop him from carrying out justice. The protagonist smiled, showing the officer all his teeth, and declared that now the person who could stop Yuan was already here. Officer Yuan wanted to continue threatening our hero, but fell silent when he looked back and saw a man in a black suit. The man in glasses with a SWAT team standing behind him looked at the policeman with disdain and asked if he could stop him. Yuan didn't act so confident now because Director Zhou from the Disciplinary Bureau appeared before him. Director Zhou reported that they had just received an internal report that Officer Yuan had committed numerous disciplinary violations. Mr. Zhou said they would continue to investigate and try Yuan, according to the law, as they would not tolerate criminality. The Disciplinary Bureau staff grabbed the officer to arrest him, but he continued to make excuses and shout about the money Lin Tian had stolen. The main character was jubilant, surrounded by joyful spectators, and Director Zhou asked someone if this was the guy who asked to come to the district attorney's office. Zhou Weiwei, who was standing nearby, admitted to the director of the Disciplinary Bureau that it was that guy. Director Zhou knew it was wrong, but he told Weiwei what a heart of gold her boyfriend had, and how calm and reasonable he was. Zhou Weiwei blushed and started shouting that Lin Tian was not her boyfriend at all, but a suspect in the crime. The man didn't argue with her and said that he would return to the office to organize an investigation and that the girl should stop talking nonsense on the street. Weiwei was still blushing with embarrassment and indignantly replied to her father that she knew this without him, and the man silently left. The protagonist was pleased to see that the system could make money appear and disappear, and now he had an extra budget to increase his and Tian Feifei's popularity. The guy beamed with pride when he saw the list of the best streamers, which included Tian Feifei, himself, and Cao Biluo, meaning the system's task had been completed. What Lin Tian was most interested in was what reward he would receive for completing the task. He wanted improved X-ray vision. Our hero was noticeably disappointed when the system instead rewarded him with unlocking the main questline and a personal storage unit. The following events took place in the tallest building in the city center, which towered over the others. On one of the high floors, a man in a dark suit stood by the window. He admitted that he suddenly had a feeling of danger. At work, Lin Tian received the main task from the system: create a company, expand the staff, confirm the office location, and complete the first transaction. Our hero already had a company with 2 employees. All that was left was to open an office and conduct the first transaction. The task didn't seem difficult to him, so Lin Tian laughed loudly and happily and shouted that he felt like he was about to become the richest man in the world. The main character had to be distracted from his great dream when he heard a loud knock. Someone threw a bottle on the table. In front of him stood a customer who was almost in tears, begging Lin Tian to finally sell him this product. Lin Tian looked at his customer in shock because he had completely forgotten that he was currently sitting at the checkout and needed to work. The boy smiled awkwardly, scratched his head, and apologized to the client several times for being distracted from his work. Our hero was upset. He didn't understand why, after completing so many tasks for the system, he still had to work part-time to earn a living. Suddenly, the guy heard someone scream. It was his partner, who accidentally dropped several bottles of milk on the floor and slipped and fell. The store manager heard this and came running to the scene. The first thing he did was start yelling at Qian Dodo. The ferocious man shouted, asking the red-haired girl why she was always messing up and whether she really needed this part-time job. Qian Dodo couldn't hold back her tears of shame when she was yelled at, and the girl apologized to the manager. Smiling ominously, the store manager approached the girl, leaned over in front of her, and asked what he should do with her now. Dodo began to loudly apologize to the manager and promised that she would pay for the damaged goods, so she should not be fired. A man warned a part-time employee that her already small salary would be cut in half this month. As he was leaving, the manager told the girl to wait for him in his office because there was something else he needed to talk to her about. The main character had been closely watching the conversation between the girl and the manager all this time, and he clearly didn't like him. The manager decided to scold Lin Tian as well. He shouted, asking what the guy was staring at, and threatened to cut his salary in half as well. The store manager went into his office, slamming the door behind him, and Lin Tian decided not to answer him. Our hero approached his tearful colleague, and the girl apologized to him for the fact that because of her, he too had been reprimanded by the manager. Lin Tian smiled and comforted her by patting her head, because they were two poor students who should help each other. Chang Dodo was delighted and suggested going out to dinner together that evening, as she had a coupon for half-price food. The main character wanted to cry because of how cute this red-haired girl was, like an angel. At this time, the manager stood at the door to his office and smiled ominously, waiting to meet Chang Dodo. The red-haired girl came to his office, sat down on a chair, and asked the man what he wanted to talk to her about personally, and also promised to work hard so that he would not fire her. The man reached out his hand to grab her and shouted that her dismissal would depend on how well she behaved. The protagonist, who noticed that the manager wanted to grab his colleague, snapped his fingers to help her. The manager only had time to glance back when he noticed that the cash register, which had magically appeared there, was flying at him. The heavy cash register hit the man on the head and caused him to fall to the floor, so Lin Tian managed to teach the receptionist a lesson. The man immediately guessed that this was the work of our hero. He looked at him fiercely and asked if he was really trying to get fired. The administrator's threats didn't frighten our hero at all. He grinned confidently and allowed the man to fire him. The manager rose back to his feet and happily fired our hero, demanding that he now get out of there. The protagonist pointed at himself in bewilderment and replied that the man seemed to have misunderstood something. Lin Tian stated that the manager was now fired, since this store was now owned by our hero. The man refused to believe that the poor student Lin Tian had bought the store because he thought it was impossible. The protagonist insisted on his own. He suggested that the manager call and check it out personally if he didn't believe it. Putting on a friendly smile, the manager immediately called the shareholder to find out whether Lin Tian had really bought the store. While the manager was talking to the shareholder in his office, Lin Tian calmed the girl down and took her to a safe place. Lin Tian returned to the administrator's office and closed the door behind him, then asked the man how the conversation went. The man looked down at the floor and was silent for a moment before answering his careless salesman. The manager threw a heavy clock at Lin Tian, but the boy managed to deftly dodge the collision with the alarm clock. The manager started yelling at the guy again, saying he had just asked the shareholders and the store was not for sale. The protagonist laughed loudly and asked the manager when he had asked him to call the shareholders. The angry man told Lin Tian to stop making a fool of himself and asked who he should call if not the company's shareholders. Lin Tian handed the store manager a small bundle of white paper and told him to call the number on it. Before making the call, the man warned the boy that he would call the police if he was convinced that Lin Tian was lying this time too. The irritated store manager called the right person and, to begin with, greeted the stranger. He didn't yet suspect that he had called the person who was standing in this very office at that moment, and it was Lin Tian. The protagonist greeted the store manager and introduced himself as Lin Tian, as if they weren't even in the same room. When the manager turned around and looked at our hero, his face was twisted with anger, and Lin Tian tried to make the same face. The man lost control of his anger and grabbed the folded chair because Lin Tian was trying to play with him again. The administrator swung the chair and started shouting, threatening to kill the main character for such stupid pranks. The manager was dumbfounded when the chair above his head disappeared and his wig slid down, revealing his bald head. A sly smile appeared on the protagonist's face. He decided to admit to the man that he had not actually bought the store. The guy put one foot on the excavator's bucket and proudly announced that he had purchased a plot of land on which the store now stands. He spread his arms out to the sides and announced that this place would now be the office of the Tianjin Lin Company. The protagonist climbed into the excavator's bucket, which began to rise upward, leaving the store manager standing in the midst of the devastation. Lin Tian sat comfortably in the bucket, took a bottle of soda, and gave the command to the excavator driver to demolish the store building. The store manager was devastated and stood there crying as he watched the place he worked in crumble before his eyes. The red-haired girl looked at our hero in surprise when he asked Dodo if she really was an architect. The surprised girl nodded her head, looking with wide eyes at our hero, who was sitting in the excavator bucket. The protagonist extended his hand to the girl and suggested that Dodo join his company as an architect. After the events unfolded at the university, our hero met with his teacher. Miss Chen told the guy that she understood everything. She showed him her phone screen and began to tell him that she had guessed who had given her an expensive gift during the broadcast, and who owned the company with which she had recently signed a contract. Lin Tian replied that he didn't even try to hide any information from her, so it was normal for her to find out about it. He proudly introduced himself to her as the owner of the company, but the girl asked him to admit that his father owned the company. The protagonist froze and stared at her with surprised eyes, because he decided that Miss Chen suspected him, not his father. The woman was convinced that her student was indeed the son of a rich businessman, so she wanted to tell him something. Lin Tian was confused because his dad was never a rich businessman. Quite the opposite. While putting the papers into a bag, Miss Chen decided to warn the boy. As a teacher, even though she was now an employee of his father's company, she showed him Lin Tian's social practice grades and told him that this couldn't go on any longer since the boy had received 1 point. Miss Chen began to reproach our hero, saying that firstly, the guy, being a rich kid, did not need to worry about food. The guy thought that he didn't agree with her because last month he couldn't afford to eat properly and only ate rice and water. Secondly, the girl reproached the student for not having to worry about his clothes since his parents provide him with everything. Lin Tian disagreed with her again because he had recently washed his only pair of white underwear and jeans, and they had turned blue. Thirdly, the class teacher reminded the protagonist that because of his rich family, he didn't even need to work. The guy could agree with this statement since he had just fired his boss yesterday, but before that he had been forced to work. Therefore, Miss Chen insisted that the boy devote more time to social practice in order to complete the internship and earn points. Lin Tian grabbed the respected Miss Chen's hands and said that he had recently found a construction site for a company building and would be hauling bricks there later. Blushing, the class teacher did not lecture him any further, but advised the boy to take care of himself. The protagonist waved goodbye to his teacher and announced that he was going to work. Lin Tian left, and Miss Chen shouted after him to remember to devote time to the internship, otherwise he would not receive his diploma. Our hero ran out of the office, but didn't even suspect that Zhang Hao had been eavesdropping on his conversation with his homeroom teacher the whole time. Among other things, Zhang Hao was able to overhear that his main enemy from the group would not be able to graduate due to poor grades. The shaved-headed guy laughed ominously. His goal now was to make sure that Lin Tian would definitely not get the points he needed. Zhang Hao immediately called his dad on the phone and complained that he had not had enough money lately. Chairman Zhang Dejing was at work at the time, and the tired, bespectacled man hung up after talking to his son. The guy who was with him in the office at the time advised the father to give money to his son if he wanted to spend it. Zhang Dejing, with beads of sweat running down his face from embarrassment, told the boy that giving money to his son was a trifle for him. A young man in a red tie asked the chairman where he was going to get money, since all his funds had recently been frozen. Mr. Zhang was outraged when he heard this. He asked the guy where he got such information. The man began to tremble all over when the guy stood up and made it clear that he also knew about the chairman's secret divorce from his wife. Chairman Zhang Dajing suddenly stood up from his chair and shouted, asking the guy if he was secretly researching information about him. The mysterious guy asked the man to think carefully and accept his offer, and he handed him a business card. Throwing the business card on the floor, he turned and walked towards the exit, warning that it would not be his fault if anything happened to the chairman's restaurant if the offer was rejected. Chairman Zhang Dajing leaned towards the floor and extended a trembling hand to take the business card of the guy who was threatening him. The man took the business card with trembling hands and looked at it to read the name. The guy's name was Da Fan Pai. After the action unfolded at a construction site, as promised, our hero arrived to help the builders carry bricks. The boy wiped the sweat from his forehead. Although the work was hard, he was happy because carrying bricks helped him relax. Suddenly, the architect Qian Dodo came and shouted to the builders, announcing lunchtime, bringing food with her in containers. The satisfied builders lined up for food. Among them was Lin Tian. He hoped that today he would get a big chicken leg. When it was the protagonist's turn, Qian Dodo timidly handed him the food box, looking at the boss with fear. The protagonist extended his hands to take the box and asked the girl to stop being so polite because they were like one family here. Lin Tian didn't have time to pick up his well-deserved lunch before a man snatched the box right from under his nose. It was a tall, muscular construction worker in a hard hat who yelled at the guy, asking what he was looking at. The big man advised Lin Tian to be a good boy if he didn't want trouble when our hero asked the man why he wasn't standing in line. Qian Dodo wanted to stand up for her boss, explaining to the scoundrel that he was currently talking to his superior, but she was interrupted. The big guy told the girl that he had never seen her and asked if she wanted to spend time together later. A heightened sense of justice made our hero tremble all over and clench his teeth tightly. He began to flex his fist. Lin Tian was about to deal with the impudent big guy, but someone approached him and put a hand on his shoulder to calm him down. It was one of the builders who advised our hero to wait because they couldn't afford to deal with this big guy. The protagonist looked at the guy in bewilderment because he didn't understand why they couldn't afford to put the big guy in his place. The purple-haired guy explained to Lin Tian that this muscular construction worker's past was connected to a gang. The thug approached the boys and shouted, asking what they were whispering about, after which he threatened to beat them up. The big man in the yellow hard hat was distracted from Lin Tian and the other construction worker when he looked at his phone screen and tensed up. The man left, warning the boys that he would definitely deal with them when he returned, after which his face turned pale with fear. The guy advised Lin Tian not to leave because they would get into trouble if they were caught, and they might even lose their wages. The protagonist put his hand on the guy's shoulder and calmed him down, saying that the big guy would be in trouble, since Lin Tian was the boss here. Lin Tian left the purple-haired guy standing there in confusion, as he didn't expect our hero to be the boss. Meanwhile, the brute went into a dark corner where he met Brother Shan and asked him what he could do for him today. Brother Shan said that he had already sent his men to this construction site, so the man would only have one task. The main character was hiding around the corner at this time and carefully eavesdropping on their conversation. He suspected that they were going to do something. Lin Tian ran in panic because Cicely was still undergoing anti-hypnotic therapy and he had no backup. The purple-haired guy was already standing in the middle of the area in a hunched position, surrounded by several strong guys. The beaten builder began to ask our hero to come back. Because he was in danger, the villains did not want to leave him alone. The bandits continued to beat the boy and mock him, calling him stupid and weak. They did not believe that Lin Tian would help him. One of the builders took a shovel and swung it over his head, wondering if the boy would be hurt by such a blow. The purple-haired boy looked at the villain from under his brows, and Qian Dodo's mouth opened wide in fear. Luckily, everyone was distracted in time and looked back when they heard a loud sound. They saw someone tearing down the fence. It was the main character who decided to intervene, arriving at the site in his yellow bus, tearing down the fence along the way. He looked out the window and asked the shovel-wielding scoundrel if it would hurt him if he ran over him with a bus. Lin Tian moved forward a little further, causing the man with the shovel to fall to the ground. The big man was afraid that he would actually be crushed. The guy got off the bus, put his hands in his pockets and looked down at the builder, asking if he was the one causing the problems. The man in the white shirt, sweating with fear, tried to intimidate Lin Tian by asking if the boy knew who their boss was. Our young hero told the man that he didn't care who their boss was, then bent down and picked up a shovel. Lin Tian smirked as someone else suddenly chimed in, asking when his brother Shan Ya had lost face. A red-haired guy, whom our hero had already taught a lesson once, came out onto the construction site, accompanied by a big guy. Lin Tian and brother Shan Ya immediately recognized each other, so there was a moment of silence as they stared at each other with dumbfounded eyes. The protagonist smiled, throwing the shovel over his shoulders. He felt more cheerful when he realized that it was brother Shan Ya who wanted to intimidate him. Shan Ya started shaking all over with anger when he saw our hero. He asked why Lin Tian was the boss of this place. The guy, looking down at Shan Ya, told the bandit to get out of here, otherwise he wouldn't be able to hold the shovel. The big man clenched his fist and shouted, asking Lin Tian who he thought he was and whether he had the right to talk to Shan Ya's brother like that. The main character looked at the big guy with a menacing smile and asked if he also knew this guy. The builder proudly admitted that he also hung out with Shan Ya and asked if there was anyone in the area who wasn't afraid of them. Suddenly, someone came up and hit the tall, muscular builder right on the helmet. The big guy immediately became furious and turned around, asking who had the courage to hit him and whether this person was really tired of living. The brute immediately fell silent and began to sweat with shame when he saw in front of him a short old woman with a cane who was clearly not afraid of him. The grandmother pulled him by the ear, and the builder fell to his knees and began to groan in pain, asking his mother what she was doing there. The old woman began to beat her son on the back with a stick and scream, claiming that she was not afraid of him, and that it was he who was tired of living, not her. The big guy took off his construction helmet and grabbed it with trembling hands. He burst into tears and began to apologize to his mother. The grandmother approached our hero and thanked him for picking her up on the bus. Otherwise, she would have been late, and her bad boy would have made a big mistake. Introducing himself as a Boy Scout, the protagonist told the elderly woman that everything was fine because helping people was his passion. The boy stopped being so kind when he turned his attention back to Shanya's brother and stated that it was time for them to talk now. Shanya felt awkward, tried to justify himself to Lin Tian, and then promised that he would leave here right now. Lin Tian stopped him and asked him to do something, namely, tell him about his employer and fulfill one request. The red-haired boy couldn't just give Lin Tian such information because there were rules that couldn't be broken. The protagonist knew how to convince Shanya's brother, so he handed him a large bag filled to the brim with bundles of money. Shanya blushed with joy. He accepted the bribe from Lin Tian, but still did not want to talk about his boss because it was not good. Seeing that the guy was reluctant to give out information, Lin Tian handed him 2 more similar bags stuffed with money. Money intoxicated Shanya's mind. He immediately admitted that his boss's name was Jiang Hao, and it was madness on his part to challenge our hero. The protagonist was delighted and praised the guy, after which he stated that the mafia is, after all, a service industry. He put his hand on Shanya's brother's shoulder and warned him that he was going to do something big, and the guy would help him with it, since he had connections. Shanya's face froze in shock as Lin Tian shared his plans with him by whispering something in his ear. Soon, our young hero met with Cao Biluo. The girl was indignant and screaming, claiming that she would in no way agree to his proposal. Lin Tian looked at the girl sternly and asked Comrade Cao how she could disobey her boss. Streamer number 1 looked at her boss in fear and blushed, asking how he could force her to do this. The protagonist smiled and replied to his subordinate that the guests simply wanted to play with her, and she simply had to accept them. Chao Biluo angrily shouted at the boss that she never thought that Lin Tian would be such a bad person. The boss stood up from his chair and walked towards the door. He turned around and looked at his actress, reminding her that her refusal was a breach of contract. The protagonist smiled ominously and warned that breaking the contract would cost the #1 streamer dearly. Shouting and indignant, Chao Biluo pulled off her shoe to throw it at the boss and called the guy disgusting. The guy left and slammed the door behind him, asking the girl to come on time tomorrow, but she failed to throw a shoe at him. The pink-haired girl clenched her teeth in anger and called for her assistant, Uda Lan. Uda Lan obediently approached his mistress, Chao Biluo. Pale with anger, ordered her assistant to ask someone for help. The old man didn't like the idea because he knew who it was, and he tried to dissuade Madame Cao. Chao Biluo shouted that he was the only one who could help them, and brother Da Fan Pai was the only one who was not driven by money. Uda Lan fell to his knees before the girl and begged Her Highness to think twice, because his brother would make them both indebted to him if they asked him for help. The girl looked at the assistant with offense and asked the old man, since when did he have the right to talk to her like that? Streamer #1 nudged her faithful assistant with her foot, after which the old man began to apologize to Her Majesty. An angry Chao Biluo stood up and left, telling Wu Dalan that he had 1 hour to bring his brother Da Fan Pai here. An hour later, Wu Dalan managed to bring his brother to Her Majesty. Da Fan Pai smiled at the girl and admitted that he had long wanted to meet her. The pink-haired girl looked at the man with pity and said that brother Da Fan Pai's name was like thunder. Da Fan Pai laughed awkwardly, scratching his head, and told Lady Cao that people were just giving him a reputation. Sweating with excitement, the streamer was ready to tell the man the main reason she asked him to come here. The man put a white-gloved finger to his lips and asked her to stop talking because he wanted to see for himself first. Da Fan Pai activated his magical vision. His eyes began to emit a red light. He wanted to look at the deepest secret in the girl's heart. Chao Biluo froze and looked at the man with fear as brother Da Fan Pai hypnotized her with his eyes. The man managed to delve into the girl's traumatic memories. He saw the day when she was still a little girl and cried after an accident. He also saw her memories from her childhood, when Chao Biluo felt completely alone and was surrounded only by an indifferent crowd. Da Fan Pai also learned that the girl had been traumatized by tough bullies who had attacked her with a bat as a child. The man saw how Chao Biluo stood up for herself that day, grabbing a brick and dealing with her attackers. Then the pink-haired girl, having managed to stand up for herself, was able to find comrades who stood up for her. Da Fan Pai made it clear to Chao Biluo that he now knew how she lost both her parents, lived on the streets, and ruled over the local hooligans. Chao Biluo was shocked because she had kept her past a closely guarded secret. She asked the man how he knew this. The man smiled slyly in response and simply told the pink-haired girl that she was now in his debt. The confused streamer asked the man if he really meant that he was ready to help her. Da Fan Pai smiled brightly and asked if he needed to deal with Lin Tian, because he had already found out all of her secrets. The man admitted that recently many people have been begging him for this. Zhang Hao had also made the same request before. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. Chao Biluo was sitting at the table and was unhappy that she had to receive guests on the orders of the boss. The girl already imagined herself sitting in disgusting company with bottles of alcohol in her hands, in an intoxicated state. She shook her head and reassured herself, because Da Fan Pai's brother was nearby and he would definitely deal with her new boss. The wary Chao Biluo spoke to Da Fan Pai through a hidden earpiece and said that she was ready. Da Fan Pai was standing outside the mansion at this time. He told the girl that he understood everything. Zhang Hao was also with him. Adjusting his white gloves, the man told Zhang Hao to go and detain our hero for a minute. The shaved-headed boy humbly bowed his head before Da Fan Pai and agreed to carry out his order. Da Fan Pai glanced at Zhang Hao and took the monocular, whispering to him to let him take a look at his secret. The protagonist, whistling a melody, approached the door of the European cuisine restaurant where today's dinner would take place. The guy looked at Zhang Hao in shock, as if he had accidentally bumped into him with his shoulder and started shouting indignantly. Lin Tian, looking at the guy in surprise, asked the student with a shiny bald head how he could help him. An angry Zhang Hao reminded Lin Tian of his name and asked our hero why he came to eat at this restaurant. The protagonist waved his hand at him and replied that it was none of his business, after which he said goodbye to the student and left. Zhang Hao needed to delay our hero a little longer, so he shouted, demanding that Lin Tian stop. Lin Tian looked at his classmate with irritation and asked what else he wanted from him. The bald-headed student said that this restaurant belonged to his family and he could order the chefs to prepare a table for Lin Tian. The protagonist turned around and replied that he didn't need it. He only asked his classmate to bill him after dinner. Zhang Hao became even more angry at Lin Tian and began to yell, accusing our hero of allegedly breaking the law. Absolutely every person who was in the restaurant lobby at that time turned around and stared at Zhang Hao and Lin Tian. Our young hero confidently crossed his arms over his chest and asked his bald classmate how he was breaking the law. Zhang Hao screamed, accusing Lin Tian of forcing his streamers to host guests in that room, which was human trafficking. The protagonist demanded that his classmate provide evidence because his business was honest. The angry student stepped forward, claiming that he did not believe in the honesty of our hero's business, since Shanya had told him about Lin Tian's plan. When the bald guy opened the door to the room, he froze in surprise when he saw what kind of guests the streamer was receiving. The room was filled with a hubbub. A whole crowd of children surrounded Cao Biluo from all sides, shouting and demanding that she play with them. Grinning, the protagonist placed his hand on the student's shoulder and asked if he was already convinced of the honesty of the guy's business. Perplexed, Zhang Hao asked if this crowd of children were the guests that Lin Tian had been talking about all this time. Our hero looked at his classmate with incomprehension and asked what was wrong with that. Lin Tian smirked as Zhang Hao simply turned around and left, finally accusing the young man of being cruel. The guy entered the room and declared that the charming Princess Cao Biluo was the best candidate to host this dinner with the children. The children surrounded the girl from all sides, calling her a charming princess, and Cao Biluo could only sit and cry. Da Fan Pai had been secretly observing the situation in the restaurant through a monocular all this time. He didn't understand what was going on. In addition to Cao Biluo sitting on the chair, he saw our hero, but instead of an ordinary person, a silhouette of binary distorted code stood in front of him. When the main character was standing and looking out the window, Cao Biluo approached him, so the guy asked if something was wrong. The pink-haired girl looked upset. She looked at the floor and admitted that she was wrong. Lin Tian, while eating the cake, reminded the girl that she accused him of having a perverted mind, and he was offended by her suspicions. Cao Biluo began to feel indignant because her new boss hadn't made things clear from the start, which is why she thought badly of him. With a sinister smile, Lin Tian announced that this time the reception was a charity event, but he would make the first broadcast tomorrow. The guy thought that the most difficult part of the main task from the system was creating a company and hiring employees. The protagonist was distracted from his thoughts, his eyes wide with fear, when someone pushed him in the shoulder. It was Da Fan Pai who apologized and asked Lin Tian if he was in pain, and he smiled and replied that everything was fine. Our hero walked to his bus, followed by Cao Biluo, who looked questioningly at Da Fan Pai's brother. Da Fan Pai deliberately collided with Lin Tian. From such a close distance, he only saw the number 11, and he was curious about what it meant. The man wanted to solve the riddle of our hero. Lin Tian intrigued him very much, and he did not take his eyes off the guy. Lin Tian returned safely to the bus and set off. Zhang Hao approached Brother Da and asked what they could do now. With a sinister smile, Da Fan Pai replied that there was no need to engage Lin Tian directly, but to start with the people around him. The following action took place at our hero's university. Miss Chen was sitting at the table, when suddenly she saw that someone was calling her. The girl greeted Dr. Dan cheerfully and asked how her father was doing, hoping that the man was feeling better. When Miss Chen heard the doctor's answer, the smile instantly disappeared from her face, and she became very wary. At this moment, Qian Dodo was already at home, sitting at her desk reading a textbook, when she was suddenly distracted by a phone call. The red-haired girl greeted the owner of the house she lived in and said that she would be able to pay this month's rent right away. When Qian Dodo heard the landlord's answer, her expression changed dramatically, and she looked frightened. Cao Biluo was also at home at this time. She was relaxing, sitting on the sofa, and chewing sausage, when someone distracted her with a phone call. Smiling happily and in a good mood, she answered the call and introduced herself to the person as Cao Biluo. When the number 1 streamer heard what was said to her on the phone, her mood immediately worsened and she began to sweat from anxiety. A frustrated Cao Biluo lowered her head and told the man on the phone that she understood everything. When the girl hung up the phone, the first thing she wondered was what her boss Lin Tian would do this time. At this time, the main character was diligently scratching his head, trying to cope with a pile of thoughts that tormented him. The guy slammed the table menacingly and complained that no one answered his call. The phone was lying right in front of him. It turned out that all of his employees had quit without telling the guy a word, including Qian Dodo, Cao Biluo, and Miss Chen. The protagonist didn't understand what to do now because the percentage of completion of the system's main task had dropped sharply. Suddenly, someone called Lin Tian. The phone lying on his desk vibrated loudly, and someone's name appeared on the screen. Lin Tian was stunned when he answered the phone and heard that the race finals would be held tonight. Having received a new task from the system to win the race final, Lin Tian walked to the door and opened it because someone was knocking on it. He saw in front of him a red-haired guy with a radiant smile on his face, who said that he had come for an interview. Lin Tian scratched his head and let the man into the office, remembering that he had just posted an advertisement for recruitment. Da Fan Pai looked at the binary code that our hero was made of and saw that the number had dropped from 11 to 3. The man smiled ominously and thought that, in any case, a disaster awaited our hero at the end of the upcoming race. In the evening, the race participants lined up in their places, and the organizer, waving a flag, warned that the route of this race was longer than all the previous ones. He explained that from the city center, racers would have to travel to the eastern part to get a mark, and then return west to the end of the city. Lin Tian was relaxed because he had heard of this racing format before, especially since he wouldn't lose anything if he lost anyway. The organizer stated that this final race will be held without restrictions on the route and methods, and the winner will receive membership in the Divine Heroes Club. The man handed over a thick stack of papers and declared that the losers in this race would have to give up what was most valuable to them. These words made our hero afraid, because no one had warned him about this condition before. The organizer began waving the flag again and then asked the race participants if they were ready to start. Lin Tian put his hand on Da Fanpai's shoulder and declared that he was counting on him because he couldn't give up his company for a loss. With his hands obediently on the steering wheel, Da Fanpai smiled shyly at his new boss, promising to try not to lose in this race. In fact, Da Fanpai was eager to see what Lin Tian's face would look like after he gave away his company. The final race finally got underway, with legendary racer Luo Jiashan's car, Snowstorm, taking the lead straight away. The race was broadcast live, the host commentated on it, and the Queen of the Night, Luo Jiashan, was on the screen. Filmed from a helicopter, the presenter told viewers that this year, many people are vying against the Queen of the Night to break her winning streak. The host admitted to the audience that last time, Luo Jiashan lost to a mysterious dark horse. The red-haired girl was perplexed when she saw the ghost bus that had overtaken Luo Jiashan in the previous race. The host scratched her head and suggested that this was the tortoise and the hare strategy because Lin Tian's bus was driving very slowly. Lin Tian felt relaxed and confident, and Da Fanpai dared to tell the boss that their car was too slow to win. The protagonist took out his phone, winked at the driver, and asked the guy not to worry because he had everything planned. The guy's first action was to call law enforcement and say that he wanted to call the police. Just like last time, Da Fanpai knew that he had actually planned this whole thing, and he had jammed the network in the entire city in advance so that his boss couldn't call anyone. Our hero scratched his chin and came to the conclusion that he would have to use a backup plan called super acceleration. The guy pointed to the right place and told the driver to go there to carry out his additional plan. Da Fanpai was confused because his new boss showed him a road that leads to the south of the city, which is not on the route. The protagonist agreed with the driver, but explained that only by taking a detour would they be able to speed up. The snowstorm was still raging, and soon Luo Jiashan's snow-white car reached the checkpoint in the eastern part of the city. Zhang Hao also participated in the final race, and he was overjoyed to see how slowly his opponent's bus was moving, and was sure that he would lose. The shaved-headed guy managed to get ahead. He put his hand out of the window to get a stamp confirming that he was the first to pass the checkpoint. Zhang Hao was perplexed when he looked at his hand and saw a snowflake fall on his palm, even though it was summer outside. Our hero's classmate was frightened when he raised his head and looked at the sky, and saw a real snowfall there. The shaved-headed guy turned around sharply and warily when he heard a loud roar in the sky. There were 3 planes flying in the sky at once, and they caused the snow to fall in the middle of summer by spraying it from the back. Zhang Hao saw not only the planes in front of him, but also the yellow bus of his main rival, which was approaching the checkpoint. The yellow bus was not afraid of snow because the vehicle was modified with metal snowmobile skis. The main character rejoiced after making a snowball and fresh snow. He said that on such a road it was easy to speed up. Now Lin Tian wasn't worried about losing. He looked out the window and smiled as he watched his opponents slide across the snow. A sudden snowfall caused the racers to lose control, and 3 cars were involved in an accident, one of which crashed into a pole. Zhang Hao got out of the car and started crying, wondering why this had happened to him and why it was suddenly snowing. The planes that accompanied our hero continued to sprinkle the route with snow, creating winter weather in the summer. The bald-headed student, looking at the sky and crying, finally noticed the planes and that they could be responsible for the snowfall. The protagonist admitted that artificial snowfall was the secret to his true acceleration. Da Fanpai sighed heavily, not understanding what was wrong with Lin Tian's brain, who had come up with the idea of getting to the checkpoint through the southern part of the city. The day before, Lin Tian brought several suitcases of money to the airport and ordered the staff to bring him some snow with everything they had in their arsenal. The guy also demanded a pair of tracks from the factory workers to speed up on the snowy road and told them to wait for his signal before throwing snow. Da Fanpai, having learned this secret through his vision, thought that Lin Tian was mismanaging the money because his company was not worth so much investment. The man warned his boss that the plane's snow supplies had been completely depleted, so the snowfall would soon stop. The driver asked the protagonist why they didn't do it the easy way and just go to the office to bribe the judge. Da Fanpai deliberately came up with this idea because this way his people would catch Lin Tian right in the office, and he would lose his reputation and money. The protagonist replied that it was a pathetic idea and asked him not to worry, after which he ordered him to go north. The yellow bus driver was confused. He looked at the boss and asked if they really needed to go straight to the city center. Lin Tian smiled and told Da Fan Pai to just trust him, and then they would be able to win the final race. Da Fan Pai visibly tensed up, but he didn't argue with our hero and remained silent, because he had to follow the orders of the new boss. Lin Tian told the driver to hurry up and advised him to behave well because it was his first day on the job. The yellow bus moved off, sliding along the snowy road on its tracks. Da Fan Pai headed towards the northern part of the city. The helicopter was already circling over the finish line. The presenter announced that the final race would soon be over. The racers had only a few miles left to go. The first group of cars appeared on the horizon, and the presenter was shocked because Snowstorm, the car of the permanent leading queen of the night, was not among them. At this time, Luo Jiashan held the steering wheel tightly and couldn't believe that Lin Tian was competing in this race fairly. The girl saw several cars ahead of her, which also did not fall into any of the main characters' traps. The Queen of the Night decided to speed up in order to win the race this time too. She pressed the big red button. The snowstorm rushed past, passing and pushing aside its rivals with the flow of air, the speed causing the snow-white car to fly above the road. The presenter was delighted when she saw the Queen of the Night and concluded that she was simply saving her strength, so she would definitely win this time too. Both Luo Jiashan and the female commentator were startled when they heard the sound of a rapidly approaching train. The Queen of the Night immediately realized that it was a trap, so she sharply turned the steering wheel to the side so that her car would not fall into the trap. A snowstorm stopped right in front of a high-speed railway, leaving a rider wondering why the train was passing there now. The girl screamed, asking if this was all part of Lin Tian's plan, and reminded that she was still ahead before this train appeared here. The legendary racer became even more frightened. She froze and opened her eyes wide when she heard the voice of her main rival. She saw Lin Tian's yellow bus pushing the train in front of it, and our hero reminded her of the proverb about all successful men and the women who support them. The protagonist looked at his rival, winked coquettishly at her, and declared that the woman who supported him seemed to be her. The guy shouted out the window that his car would now be called Day Ice, since her car was called Night Snow. Our hero shouted, ordering the driver to initiate the Day Ice transformation. They were already close to the finish line. The tracks detached from the wheels and the bus shot forward, crossing the high-speed railway straight to the finish line. Luo Jiashan was shocked. She understood that the rules did not prohibit this, but accelerating using the train was too much. The girl frowned and declared that turning a car into a train was the best her main rival could do. She was confident that our hero was unaware of her main trump card, after which she activated the snowstorm transformation. Right before our eyes, the legendary racer's sports car transformed into a snow-white motorcycle, stripped of unnecessary parts. Now Luo Jiashan, riding the modified Snowstorm 11 Pro Max, rushed forward at breakneck speed. While racing around the track, the racer decided that she could win the second half of the final race if she used nitro. Da Fan Pai was still stunned by what had happened, because Lin Tian had figured out how to reach the finish line using the high-speed train. He looked at the boss tensely and wondered if this Lin Tian was some kind of divine being to have figured it out like that. The main character, smiling sadly, looked out the window and admitted how sad he was, because there were no rivals nearby. A moment later, Lin Tian's boredom was no longer a problem, because he noticed his main rival in the side mirror. Lin Tian stuck his head out of the window and turned around. He saw the Night Queen in front of him, who was already chasing him on a motorcycle. The girl shouted at him that she had guessed this would happen, so she had come up with a backup plan, and this time Lin Tian would lose. The legendary racer's threats didn't frighten him at all. He looked out the window with a smile on his face and complimented Luo Jiashan's black outfit. Da Fan Pai looked at his boss in confusion because he didn't understand where Lin Tian saw the girl wearing a black outfit when she was wearing white. The red-haired boy frowned and asked Lin Tian if they were going to speed up since Luo had overtaken them. A jubilant Lin Tian, about to have dinner, told the driver that there was no need, since they had already won the race. The Queen of the Night looked back and saw that she had already noticeably pulled away from the bus, with only a couple of 100 meters left until the finish line. The legendary racer, using Nitro Boost, managed to reach the finish line first and achieve another victory. The presenter was genuinely happy when her favorite racer won again, and she announced it into the microphone. The female commentator announced that the winner of the final race was once again the Queen of the Night, and her car had evolved. Second place, according to the presenter, was also at stake. A ghost bus approached the finish line at a snail's pace. The Queen of the Night pointed her finger at our hero and loudly announced that Lin Tian had lost to her. The host and Luo Jiashan were silent in bewilderment as the yellow ghost bus, ignoring everyone, simply drove on slowly and leisurely. The red-haired girl commented that it seemed like this racer was unable to admit defeat and wanted to run away. The protagonist leaned out of the window and shouted to his comrades that it was time to finish and that they should come and get their pay. Several men, following Lin Tian's command, rushed forward and started running towards the yellow bus to get their money. One of the men got rid of the large checkerboard flag he had been waving at the finish line. The queen of the night, the commentator girl, and the rest of those present silently watched what was happening, not understanding what was happening. It was only after a few seconds that Luo Jiashan realized that she had not crossed the real finish line. The legendary racer quickly returned to her evolved motorcycle, Blizzard, to reach the real finish line as quickly as possible. She didn't have time to do this because Lin Tian was already celebrating his victory. The guys were throwing him into the air and shouting that they were the #1 boss in the world. Luo Jiashan frowned in displeasure and became quiet as she tried to come to terms with her latest defeat. Da Fanpai approached the Night Queen and admitted that he was curious about how she, Cao Biluo, and Jiang Hao ran into Lin Tian. The girl did not want to answer this question because she understood perfectly well that in front of her stood the legendary Eye #1, capable of seeing right through everyone. The racer asked why Da Fanpai couldn't handle Lin Tian, since he had such a unique talent. Da Fanpai smiled and admitted that he even admired the main character a little, because he was unable to see through this guy. He thought the strangest thing about this guy was these mysterious numbers in his binary code, the meaning of which was unclear to him. The protagonist approached his driver, patted him on the shoulder and praised him for a job well done, and also allowed him to add a chicken leg to his lunch. The angry Night Queen asked Lin Tian if he was the one who invited all these spectators here. Lin Tian spread his arms out to the sides and replied that this entire huge crowd of people were now employees of his Tianqian Lin company. He was pleased with the work done, because the percentage of completion of the system's main task had finally increased to 37%. Smiling brightly, he approached Xiaolong again and offered to bring back the people who had recently quit to the company. Da Fanpai looked at our hero with bewilderment and was about to blurt out that the fired employees had told him something. Fanpai was scared and concluded that Lin Tian was testing him, since he shouldn't have known about the dismissal of those employees. The man decided to get out of it and asked if they weren't going to celebrate Boss Lin's victory. Lin Tian scratched his head and asked, what was the point of celebrating his victory when he could just give everyone money and they would be happy? The protagonist returned to his yellow bus and told Da Fanpai to get on too, as new adventures awaited them. When Lin Tian turned away, the smile disappeared from his face, and he thought that this newcomer to his company, Xiaolong, was definitely not an easy one. Da Fanpai had the same thought in his head because Boss Lin had just tried to test him. The yellow bus's engine started, leaving only Luo Jiashan standing outside next to her snow-white motorcycle. The girl couldn't control her anger. After losing for the second time, she screamed and hit the motorcycle with her hand. The Night Queen turned around and said that Da Fanpai had also failed in his fight against the protagonist. The legendary racer wasn't going to give up so easily. She returned the car to its original condition and said that it was time to teach this Lin Tian a lesson. The following events unfolded in the pink luxury mansion of streamer #1, where Lin Tian's bus pulled up. The protagonist got off the bus and walked up to the glass front door, opening it without knocking to enter Cao Biluo's house. When Lin Tian saw what was happening in Cao Biluo's house, a look of intense fear appeared on the boy's face. He froze and opened his mouth wide. In front of him stood Zhou Weiwei and Cao Biluo, who was yelling at the police officer, claiming that she had been doing something for a long time. The angry policewoman replied that this time all the evidence pointed to Cao Biluo, so she wouldn't get away with it. Lin Tian scratched his head in confusion and asked Aunt Zhou and Junior Cao what happened here. The police officer looked sternly at our hero and asked if Lin Tian had any connection with Cao Biluo, who was a member of the gang. Cao Biluo was now angry with our hero, thinking that it was he who had caused her to get into trouble with the law. Looking at the evil girls with fear, Lin Tian asked if this was the legendary battle between Asura and Indra. Lin Tian tried to shout over them to calm down and finally explained to him what was going on here. Zhou Weiwei and the country's top streamer finally fell silent, glaring at each other with hatred. Afterwards, they started shouting at the same time, trying to explain the situation to Lin Tian, the police officer accusing the streamer of fraud. The girl's screams and the endless stream of incomprehensible information made the protagonist's ears ring and his head spin. Lin Tian put his finger on Cao Biluo's mouth and signaled her to shut up, and she blushed as she looked into his eyes. Streamer #1 snorted and turned away sharply, offended by her boss, and did not yell anymore. The main character asked the police officer to sit down first, and then slowly and calmly tell him everything. Zhou Weiwei sat on the sofa opposite our hero and Cao Biluo. She told him that something happened this morning. According to the police, the streaming platform launched a discount on balance top-ups. People could pay just 1 yuan and receive as much as 50. The protagonist covered his mouth with his hands in shock. He regretted that he had not known about such a generous promotion earlier. A police officer said that a huge number of spectators took part in this action, but a problem immediately arose. According to Zhou Weiwei, The executives and moderators of Cockfighting, a streaming platform, disappeared simultaneously. Having become serious, the main character asked the policewoman if those people had really disappeared with the viewers' money. Zhou Weiwei confirmed his suspicions and added that the only person who had not disappeared was Cao Biluo, one of the company's top officials. The main character looked at his employee with suspicion, and she became frightened when she noticed her boss looking at her like that. The indignant girl with pink hair screamed, wanting to justify herself and prove her innocence. But she was interrupted. She blushed and froze in surprise when Lin Tian hugged her and reassured her, saying that he believed her. The fact that the main character stood up for his ward moved Cao Biluo to tears. Lin Tian told the police officer that he trusted his officers unconditionally, and Cao Bu looked at him lovingly. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist confidently declared that he was ready to take full responsibility for Cao Biluo's actions. Zhou Weiwei stood up and sighed heavily. She decided to give our hero only a warning, since he had already helped the police several times. Turning around, she warned that a special investigative team had been created for this case, so the guys had a maximum of 2 days. The protagonist was delighted and replied that 2 days was more than enough because he personally was already prepared for this problem. The police officer began to leave, and Cao Biluo, whom our hero had been hugging by the shoulder all this time, touched his hand. When Lin Tian felt the girl's touch on his palm, he looked at her in shock. Cao Biluo stuttered and blushed as she thanked Lin Tian because he still helped her even though she quit. The protagonist grabbed her by the shoulders and declared that she was his wonderful employee, no matter what. Streamer number 1 blushed even more, closed her eyes in embarrassment, and said Lin Tian's name with a smile on her face. Lin Tian also couldn't take his gaze, shining with delight, off his employee. He quietly said her name, approaching her face. The pink-haired girl looked straight into our hero's eyes, smiling, and Lin Tian's cheeks also turned red. Their sweet moment was interrupted when someone burst into the house and cleared their throat to get their attention. The protagonist and Cao Biluo were stunned when they saw Cicely in front of them, who had disappeared from the city for a long time. The girl changed dramatically. She cut her hair short and got into shape. Cicely told the boss that his prediction had come true, and now they could begin. Lin Tian sat back on the sofa. He was glad to see Cicely again and said that it seemed like something happened, as he expected. Cao Biluo felt ashamed, so she apologized to Cicely for using the hypnosis technique on her in the past. Cicely waved her hand and replied that the hypnosis had long since worn off, and at the moment she worked exclusively as Lin Tian's personal assistant. The protagonist stood up, patted Cicely on the shoulder and suggested that they go and first take care of the fugitives. Outside, Cao Biluo asked if Lin Tian had predicted that something would happen during the cockfight broadcast. Lin Tian replied that he simply had a vague feeling that trouble was approaching, so he sent people to the train stations, airports, and highways. Cicely said that they had just learned about the movements of several secretive individuals, but a problem arose after tracking them. According to her, investor Li Sanxiong, one of the shareholders of the cockfighting platform, is a rich kid and a man who ran away with the money. The protagonist looked closely at the photo of the criminal and asked his personal assistant whether an investigation had already been conducted. Cicely nodded her head and replied that Li Sanxiong would be participating in an online gaming tournament tonight. When Silly mentioned online games, a happy and confident smile appeared on Lin Tian's face. As he was getting ready to get back on the bus, the guy started shouting, asking if donations weren't the deciding factor in online games because he was a pro at it. When Da Fan Pai wanted to follow his boss back onto the bus, he was unable to do so because Lin Tian blocked his way with his hand. Our hero said that he was going home to play games now, so his driver didn't need to follow him. Confused, the red-haired guy pointed to his face and replied that he could give his boss a ride home. The protagonist replied that his personal assistant, Cicely, who had already gotten behind the wheel, had returned, so Da Fan Pai could go home and rest. With an ingratiating smile, Da Fan Pai declared that he also wanted to help the boss and promised to carry out all his orders. Da Fan Pai's smile was not sincere because he was only going to pretend to help the protagonist. Lin Tian chuckled and leaned over to take a closer look at his employee's tense, smiling face. The boy slammed the bus door behind him and drove away, telling Da Fan Pai to prepare a footbath for him to wash his feet after he returned. The yellow ghost bus chugged away, leaving Da Fan Pai standing outside, his hands hanging in despair. The pink-haired girl looked at Da Fan Pai suspiciously as she sat down on her seat on the bus. Cao Biluo decided to warn our hero that this new employee of his, known as Da Fan Pai or Dragon, was not an easy person at all. The protagonist asked the girl if she really meant to say that the closure of the streaming platform had something to do with him. The girl approached Lin Tian and replied that it was quite possible. She clearly did not trust our hero's new employee. Lin Tian smiled sincerely and told the streamer that he already knew perfectly well what Da Fan Pai was involved in. A puzzled Cao Biluo wanted to ask the boss why he hadn't done anything yet, but the girl was interrupted. The guy crossed his legs, folded his arms, and confidently replied that with Da Fan Pai next to him, his tricks wouldn't work. The action then took place in a luxuriously furnished apartment in which the investor and shareholder of Cockfights lived. A boy named Lee Sanxiang, the son of wealthy parents, played his favorite online games and was overjoyed because he felt invincible. Having defeated someone once again, the guy thought that no one would dare challenge him in this game again. He was surprised to see another weakling logged into the game when the corresponding notification appeared on the screen. The battle began, and Li Sanxiang's opponent was Tiantian Lin, who was completely unarmed. Li Sanxiang looked warily at his opponent, who wasn't even wearing a beginner's kit, meaning he was a complete zero in the game. The guy clicked the mouse, and his character raised his pumped-up expensive sword to the sky to pounce on the enemy. Sanxiang laughed and rejoiced at his superiority. Fighting a player like our hero seemed too easy a task to him. When the overly confident guy looked at his laptop screen, his expression changed dramatically. It turned out that he had been defeated for the first time in many matches. Lin Tian victoriously put his foot on his beaten opponent. The protagonist was happy that he was able to single-handedly defeat the newcomer who wore such expensive equipment. Li Sanxiang couldn't control his emotions when he realized he had lost. He grabbed his face and screamed in horror. The guy started banging his fists on the keyboard, the keys flew in all directions, and he continued screaming, not understanding how he could lose. Li Sanxiang couldn't believe that he couldn't defeat this guy without equipment, even though he had the best Golden God equipment. Grabbing the microphone, the enraged player began accusing our hero of cheating, since he defeated him without equipment. Lin Tian asked where he saw that he was without equipment, and whether Li Sanxiang could afford to buy such equipment. Li Sanxiang realized that his opponent had been using disguise all this time, meaning he had not been fighting him with his bare hands. It turned out that all this time Lin Tian had been wearing the legendary paid transparent armor, the drop rate of which is practically zero. Li Sanxiang, sweating with terror, assumed that he was playing against a donation maniac compared to whom he was nothing. He had already reached for his bank card, wondering whether he should spend his last money to top up his balance in the game. The protagonist shrugged and advised him not to do it, since there was no point in playing against Lin Tian anymore. He would still remain a legend. Li Sanxiang still grabbed his bank card with a trembling hand and replied that he could not afford to be a loser. The red-haired, bespectacled boy clenched his teeth and declared that he could not lose. The desire to defeat Lin Tian was above all else. Sanxiang entered a game store where he was offered to spend nearly 65,000 yuan on an equipment lottery. He entered the password to confirm the payment and bought 100 tries in the lottery to test his luck and get good equipment. Li Sanxiang said that if he went the normal route, gold-colored equipment would be enough for him. The guy started frantically pressing the key over and over again, trying to win the right equipment in the lottery. The chance of getting good equipment was too low, so Li Sanxiang continued to try the lottery. The fire in his eyes gradually faded, his mood worsened, but the guy continued to rely on his luck in the lottery. His face became completely exhausted. The lottery did not give him the opportunity to get good equipment, but he did not stop. Then, completely tired, Li Sanxiang complained that he couldn't do it anymore because he had already made countless attempts. The guy couldn't take it anymore and started crying. He screamed and asked why this was happening to him because he couldn't come to terms with losing the game. Li Sanxiang calmed down a little when he heard the sound of an incoming private message, and he became curious about who was writing to him. It was his opponent, Tiantian Lin, who offered to sell the boy his legendary transparent armor if he wanted it so much. Sanxiang got angry and started accusing our hero of wanting to make a big profit off him, since he was trying to sell him transparent equipment. He proudly introduced himself as Li Sanxiang and declared that he wouldn't want his superior transparent armor, even if it meant dying like a vegetable. In response, the protagonist sent him a voice message so that he would not misunderstand him and explained everything to him. Lin Tian managed to convince the red-haired guy. Now he was smiling and found our hero's offer tempting. Li Sanxiang felt like a confident player again, standing in transparent armor and shouting that he was now #1 again. The protagonist put his hands behind his head and finally relaxed, telling Cao Biluo and Sicily that he got the thing he needed. Cao Biluo was not so happy because for her sake, Lin Tian lost a very expensive and rare transparent equipment. Lin Tian scratched his head when she mentioned rare equipment and replied that he had a dozen of the same sets of armor. The guy smiled slyly and showed the girls that, after selling the equipment, he still had a whole bunch of the same gear. Cao Biluo was stunned. She froze and opened her mouth wide when she saw this, because the equipment was very rare and expensive. The main character showed the girl a piece of paper and confessed that he bought this gaming company, which is where he got all this equipment. This statement shocked the pink-haired girl even more. She stared at the guy with dumbfounded eyes. Even the experienced Sicily was shocked when she learned that Lin Tian had acquired a company worth many millions. Cao Biluo started shouting, asking if the guy had really bought the company, as she found it hard to believe. The protagonist calmly replied to his ward that he had not acquired the gaming company, but had exchanged it for something else. The streamer couldn't hold back her tears, and with a trembling voice, she asked if Lin Tian had really lost Tianqin Lin's company for her. It seemed the girl's guess was wrong, because Lin Tian looked at the streamer with bewilderment. Our hero Cao Biluo took the silence as consent, calmed down and smiled sweetly, looking at the guy with love. Blushing and cowering in embarrassment, the streamer wanted to politely tell Lin Tian that she couldn't enter into a relationship with him yet, if he liked her so much. The protagonist laughed and asked the girl not to be silly, asking how he could exchange his company to Tianqin Lin. Cicely felt ashamed of the guy and jokingly called him a legendary straightforward man, tempered by steel. The stunned Cao Biluo stared at Lin Tian with eyes wild with shock and cautiously asked what happened then. Lin Tian asked the girl to remember the rules of the race, where the loser had to give up his most valuable possession. He threw a tall stack of papers on the table and explained that he had traded several small companies for 60% of the gaming company's shares. According to our hero, he then asked the programmer working on this game to add numbers to his character's characteristics. Cao Biluo began to guess that transparent armor didn't actually exist, and Lin Tian won thanks to his characteristics. The guy picked up his mobile phone and started chuckling slyly as he texted someone. Cicely asked if the so-called transparent armor was really Lin Tian giving commands to the programmer to change the data. Lin Tian replied that he was happy because he had received everything he wanted from Li Sanxiong, and now he wanted to reward him with an improvement in his characteristics. Cao Biluo looked at the guy hopefully and asked if this was really about proving her innocence, since Lin Tian claimed that he got everything he wanted. The protagonist almost pushed her away from him with his palm and shouted that this was not about her innocence at all. Cicely and Cao Biluo were already tired of their boss's unpredictable behavior, so they simply fell silent and waited for his explanation. The tired Cicely shook her head and complained that she couldn't bear to watch it anymore. Lin Tian was really too ironically straightforward. Our hero suddenly jumped up and hit the table, after which he shouted, suggesting that the three girls now go somewhere else. The guy finally explained to Cao Biluo and Cicely that he had managed to get a list of all those involved in this setup from Li Sanxiong. Soon the action took place in a nightclub, which was full of people who came to relax and listen to live music. All the spotlights were directed at the singer, who was standing on the stage, the girl covering her face with a mask. One of the VIP visitors asked the younger Zhang why he hadn't seen this singer here before. The green-haired boy who worked at the club remarked on Boss Zhou's excellent taste and explained that this amazing singer had recently joined the club. Licking his lips, Boss Zhou asked the younger Zhang to describe to him what she looked like, since the singer was hiding her face behind a mask. The younger Zhang replied that the girl usually did not show her face. But one day one of the workers saw her, and the singer turned out to be incredibly beautiful. The man immediately got up from the sofa and demanded that Junior Zhang immediately send this mysterious beauty to his room. Boss Zhou walked towards the exit of the common room, and 3 strong bodyguards went to the stage to grab the girl. 3 strong men in dark glasses surrounded the singer from all sides. She looked at them with fear. The singer was frightened by the appearance of these thugs. She asked the men in a trembling voice what they wanted from her. Boss Zhou's bodyguards didn't explain anything to the mysterious singer. They began to reach out their hands to grab her. Soon the singer was already standing in Boss Zhou's room. The man began to reach out his hands to her, smiling and blushing with anticipation. The girl, whose face was hidden under a mask, smiled slyly. The man's attempts to touch her did not frighten her in the least. Boss Zhou, having changed into a robe, continued to extend his hands to the mysterious beauty and offer to have fun together. The man hugged the girl. The masked singer did not resist. She pressed herself against Boss Zhou, grinning slyly. Suddenly the smile vanished from the man's face. His skin turned pale, and a bead of sweat ran down his cheek. It turned out that all this time, behind the mask of a beauty, there was not a girl, but a guy who began to make fun of Boss Zhou. The stunned man screamed, asking the unfamiliar young man who he was and where the beauty had gone. The disgruntled protagonist was outraged that Boss Zhou still had the courage to ask him such questions. Lin Tian started shouting, asking Boss Zhou if he wasn't good enough to satisfy him. The boy continued to shout indignantly, asking the man if he too couldn't become a beauty. A shocked Boss Zhou sat on the bed, staring at our hero, not understanding what he was getting at. Having come to his senses, the man grabbed his radio and began shouting at his subordinates to go to his room, because there was some crazy person in there. Boss Zhou's bodyguards kicked down the door and immediately rushed into the room to save their boss from the madman. A crowd of 5 strong men surrounded the protagonist from all sides. Lin Tian remained calm and silent. Boss Zhou complained that the kid had ruined his mood, so he wanted him to pay for it. The main character decided to finally rip off his wig and shouted that it seemed like things had gone too far. The militant guy put his hands forward, forming a pistol with his fingers, and suggested that they begin. One of the bodyguards was perplexed when the young man began shouting, threatening the guards with a gun. Boss Joe and all his guards looked at the madman in shock as he began to point a gun at them from his own fingers. The man shouted that it seemed like Lin Tian was taking them for idiots, so he ordered the guards to grab the boy. One of the bodyguards was the first to rush forward, attacking our hero with his fists, but this did not frighten him. Lin Tian continued waving his hand, pretending it was a real gun, and even began to imitate the sounds of gunshots. The bodyguard, who was about to punch our hero, froze and stared at him when he saw smoke coming from his fingers. Boss Joe and his guards were shocked when one of the bodyguards, who was shot by Lin Tian, collapsed to the floor. Smiling smugly, the protagonist pointed an imaginary gun at another guard and then fired. The guards didn't understand what was happening when the second big guy also collapsed to the floor after the madman's shot. Now the protagonist is armed with 2 imaginary pistols at once, preparing to continue the shootout. Lin Tian continued to shoot at Boss Joe's bodyguards with both hands now. Each of them was killed with a single shot. The guy managed to get rid of every guard, leaving only Boss Joe alive, who huddled against the bed and trembled with fear. The protagonist put 2 fingers to the man's forehead and told him to now listen carefully to what he was about to tell him. Pale with horror, Boss Joe called the guy a monster, but promised to do whatever he said because he didn't want to die. The man burst into tears from fear of dying, and our hero looked out the window, smiled at someone, and gave a thumbs up. It turned out that all this time, Cicely was hiding on the roof of a neighboring building, and she was shooting at the guards instead of the boss with a sniper rifle. Cao Biluo was also nearby at this time. She was delighted with Cicely's abilities and told the girl that she was magnificent. Cicely told the streamer that it was a small thing because she only used a rifle with anesthesia, which made all the bodyguards fall asleep. At that moment, the girls didn't even suspect that someone was watching them through binoculars, hiding on the roof of a neighboring building. It was the legendary racer Luo Jiashun, who was keeping an eye on our hero more than his girlfriends, and wondering what his next move would be. Soon, Lin Tian managed to gather all the people he needed in one room. Among them were Boss Joe and Li Sanxiong. The lucky guy invited Zhou Weiwei there to introduce her to all the defendants in the money theft case. Zhou Weiwei praised our hero, saying that the guy did a good job this time. Cicely and Cao Biluo also returned to the room. Cao Biluo was angry with the police officer because she had previously told her that she had nothing to do with the crime. The policewoman agreed with the girl that it had nothing to do with her, but, in her opinion, it was still not that simple. The streamer couldn't stand it any longer and started shouting indignantly, asking if Zhou Weiwei really wasn't satisfied with all these captured criminals. Zhou Weiwei shook her head and replied that there was definitely someone behind these people, and that person was very powerful. Lin Tian, considering the above, suggested that the same person was behind the collection of black funds by many other companies. Our hero was surprised when Mr. Zhou suddenly entered the room and praised Lin Tian for his intelligence. Mr. Zhou said that all police departments are currently attaching great importance to this issue, but they do not yet have evidence. The man's eyes were restless. Zhou Weiwei noticed her father's mood and looked at him with fear. Both Mr. Zhou from the disciplinary department and his police daughter stared at the protagonist at the same time, leaving him dumbfounded. Smiling stupidly, Lin Tian pointed at his face and asked why they were all suddenly looking at him. Zhou Weiwei blushed when she had to tell Lin Tian that Director Zhou wanted to let the boy do the investigation as a freelancer. The main character was stunned when he realized that they wanted to make him a secret police agent. Weiwei, blushing deeply, began to pound her father's chest with her fists because she didn't want to ask Lin Tian to do such dangerous things. Director Zhou told his daughter that he knew how much the girl loved her boyfriend, but everything depended only on him. Lin Tian adjusted his jacket, put on a serious expression, and told Director Zhou that he thought this mission was indeed very dangerous. Mr. Zhou was clearly disappointed. He sighed heavily, but did not try to persuade our hero, and replied that everything was fine. A crazy smile appeared on Lin Tian's face, and he said that if he had to add some money, he would be happy to do the job. Cicely, Cao Biluo, Mr. Zhou, and the policewoman looked at our hero in shock, not expecting such a reaction from him. Director Zhou was glad that Lin Tian agreed, laughed, and said that the young people were very ambitious. He handed our hero a folder and said that it described all the connections between the suspects, and Lin Tian should prepare well before starting. The protagonist took the folder in his hands. Mr. Zhou patted him on the shoulder and said that the mission was expensive, but the glory it would bring was priceless. Lin Tian put on his hood, turned around, and declared that he had never failed a mission before. The guy left, and a joyful Mr. Zhou told his daughter that he wanted to continue collaborating with Lin Tian if the mission went well, because this guy was very interesting. Zhou Weiwei blushed again because of her father's words. She began to insist that there was nothing between her and Lin Tian, so dad should stop talking nonsense. Cao Biluo's case was decided, and now our hero was ready to begin the next battle, which would begin on the campus of his university. Previously, the guy studied Director Joe's file and found out that one of the suspects was a professor at his university. It turned out that the suspect was the drawing teacher Su Wumei, a tall blonde man with long hair who was adored by all the girls. Our hero had only one impression of this teacher, because he was constantly staring at his favorite class teacher. Even now, he dared to hit on his teacher Chen in front of everyone. Su Wumei walked up to the girl and put his arm around her shoulders. Pulling his sunglasses onto his face, the protagonist decided that he had to explore everything here. Soon, Miss Chen was sitting in her office and looking out the window. The girl was clearly in a bad mood today. The class teacher looked worried because she was worried about her father. She didn't let go of the phone. The girl remembered a recent conversation with the doctor, who told her that her father was recovering, but something had happened. The frightened doctor then shocked her with the news over the phone that her father had disappeared from the hospital. Miss Chen was shocked and screamed, asking how this happened, since her dad couldn't even move during his recovery period. The doctor admitted that the girl's father could not have left the hospital on his own. Most likely, he was taken away from there by someone. Our hero's shocked class teacher screamed that she would come to the hospital immediately. At the hospital, she entered her father's room and met a police officer there. The bed was in disarray, and she asked the officer if there was any evidence. The police officer replied that it could have been a group of people in black clothes who broke into the room at night and kidnapped her father. When asked if she had had any conflicts with anyone, the girl admitted that she had, but that was no reason to kidnap her sick father. Ms. Chen was shocked when she checked her phone and found a message from the kidnapper telling her not to go to the police. The police officer noticed that the girl was taken aback by something and asked if something had happened. The frightened girl decided to obey the kidnapper and lie to the police officer that nothing had happened. Ms. Chen forced a smile and said that her student had a problem, and she had to come to his aid immediately. The girl returned to the university and sat at her desk. She came to the conclusion that these kidnappers must be enemies of the Lin Tian family business. Miss Chen opened our hero's gradebook and looked at his photo, wondering whether she should warn the guy. The teacher began to be tormented by doubts because her father was still in the hands of the kidnappers, and he was planning to suffer if she spoke up. The girl became frightened and jumped up from her chair when she saw a man's hand persistently reaching out to her. She looked at the man in shock, and only then realized that the person standing in front of her was the drawing teacher Su Wumei. The smiling blonde asked the teacher if she had thought it over carefully, and if she would agree to go on a date with him. Miss Chen wasn't eager to go on a date with him, so she told him to forget about it, lying that she had a boyfriend. Su Wumei couldn't take the refusal calmly. He became angry and shouted, asking how she dared to refuse him after thinking about it for so long. The woman sighed heavily, looked down sadly, and apologized to teacher Su. The long-haired blonde advised the girl not to be so shameless, because he knew that she was broadcasting live. Miss Chen was about to sink into the ground when she was exposed, and she stuttered as she tried to justify herself to the teacher. Smiling ominously, Su Wumei suggested that the girl simply enjoyed being stared at by strange men. The teacher took a step back as Su Wumei started to approach her, asking what he was going to do to her. Su Wumei stretched out his hands and began to praise the real internet celebrities he found hot. The long-haired blonde laughed loudly and ominously, then shouted that the girl belonged to him. The defenseless Miss Chen closed her eyes and screamed loudly in fear as the cruel Su Wumei was about to grab her. The girl couldn't hold back her tears because she thought Su Wumei had just grabbed her shoulders. The drawing teacher froze and looked at her in bewilderment because he didn't even have time to approach Miss Chen. It turned out that it was Lin Tian who came to her aid and grabbed her shoulders. He ran his finger along her chin and turned to the teacher. The boy asked his class teacher why she said that someone was groping her if he was the one who came to save her. The protagonist smiled radiantly and explained to the frightened girl that he was simply showing concern on the part of his boss. Miss Chen was stunned when she opened her eyes and saw the student in front of her. She wanted to ask the guy how he got here. Su Wumei was also curious about this and shouted, asking how Lin Tian got in through the window since they were on the 7th floor. At this time, the main character had already climbed back into the aerial platform through the window and taken the class teacher with him. Smiling, Lin Tian hugged the teacher again and asked if it was impossible to go up to the 7th floor by simply buying a crane. Su Wumei was furious when his beloved tried to escape from him. He waved his hand, cutting through the air with a bright blue laser. Our young hero was scared, but managed to dodge in time when a beam of blue light almost hit him. Lin Tian was at a loss and couldn't comprehend what was happening when he noticed that Su Wumei's beam had managed to injure his ear. Su Wumei, gritting his teeth in anger, materialized flames in his hand and shouted, ordering Lin Tian to get out of here, because Chen Zilin was his beloved woman. The protagonist was ready to fight for his beloved teacher, so he brazenly replied that Chen Zilin was his woman. Lin Tian accused the painting teacher that the red magical light on his hand was the same as Da Fan Pai's. The hero stared at the man with a frown, and Wu Mei smirked, asking the boy if he was really trying to find out the secrets of his Su family. The long-haired blonde man blushed with anger and warned Teacher Chen that he was giving her one last chance to change her mind. Teacher Su warned the girl that he could not guarantee her father's safety if she decided to stay with our hero. Our hero's homeroom teacher was horrified when she realized that Su Wumei was one of her father's kidnappers. The protagonist gently took the teacher's hand and asked her not to worry so much because she was safe as long as he was near. Miss Chen couldn't stop worrying. She explained that even the police couldn't find the kidnappers and she was worried about her dad. Lin Tian decided to calm the girl down by happily announcing that he had already managed to find Mr. Chen's kidnappers. Su Wumei swung his arm and shouted that this couldn't be because the Su family's influence extended to all the high-ranking authorities in this city. The protagonist shrugged and asked if Su really thought they were strong because of their influence, when even ordinary people were better than them. Su Wumei threw a piece of chalk charged with magical energy at the boy and shouted that our hero could not know anything about this. Lin Tian tensed up, but quickly reacted, hugging the girl tightly to protect her and jumping to the side. The protagonist began to visibly panic when he looked to the side and saw where the piece of chalk the teacher had thrown had landed. It turned out that the blow hit the metal structure of the basket in which Lin Tian and his beloved teacher were now standing. The bolts of the structure began to loosen. The cradle was collapsing before their eyes. Lin Tian and Miss Chen could barely stand on their feet. The teacher felt like she was falling, so she panicked, closed her eyes, and started screaming non-stop in fear. She was stunned when she opened her eyes and saw that she and Lin Tian were already standing on the ground, safe and sound. Su Wumei tensed up, because he clearly didn't expect that Miss Chen and our hero would be able to escape from his death trap so deftly. Lin Tian asked Su if he had seen how a movie was made, since the trick using a rope was cheaper than buying a car lift. Grinning broadly, our hero, holding the girl in his arms, safely returned to the 7th floor on a rope and arranged to meet Su Wumei on the roof. Su Wumei immediately went to the roof of the university to finally deal with Lin Tian and Miss Chen. At this time, Miss Chen was finally reunited with her kidnapped father. She hugged him tightly and began to cry. The main character was also glad that his favorite teacher got her dad back, and he helped her find her father-in-law. The drawing teacher, seeing this picture, clenched his teeth tightly and began to tremble with anger. Su Wumei was stunned as he looked at the man and began to stutter, unable to understand how Lin Tian managed to return the kidnapped father to the girl. The long-haired blonde looked warily at the man who approached and put his hand on his shoulder. He saw in front of him the main character, who could not stop bursting into tears and sobbing loudly without embarrassment. Su Wumei grimaced, looked at Lin Tian with a puzzled expression, and asked why he was whining, since he clearly didn't expect this from him. Lin Tian wiped the tears from his cheek with his finger and asked if the scene of father and daughter reunion wasn't touching. The art teacher pushed the student away and shouted, asking if he was laughing at him and how he managed to save the man. Having calmed down, Lin Tian asked if the guy really didn't know it himself, since money was all he had. An angry and stunned Su Wumei shouted, asking our hero if he had actually managed to bribe the kidnappers. The protagonist threw up his hands and replied that he didn't know anything, so it wasn't him he needed to be asked. Lin Tian relaxed and put his hands behind his head, while the blonde man, grimacing with anger, took out his phone to find out everything. One of Miss Chen's father's kidnappers was in another place at the time and took out his phone when someone called him. Smiling ingratiatingly, he greeted Chief Su cheerfully and asked if there were any new instructions. He had to cover his ears when Su Wumei started yelling into the phone, asking what kind of instructions there could be if the kidnappers were working for competitors. The man tried to convince his boss that this was not true because they had never worked for Su's competitors and had always followed his instructions. An enraged Su Wumei shouted, asking the man if he really took money from this Lin Tian, and then released the hostage. The kidnapper tensed, looked around to make sure no one had heard, and put the phone to his ear. The man made sure that the hostage was in place, an elderly man lying on a hospital bed, surrounded by a crowd of kidnappers. The bandit told Chief Su Wumei that everything was fine, and the man they had kidnapped was still there. These words made the long-haired blonde man even more angry because the man began to deny his guilt. The protagonist listened attentively to Su's conversation with the kidnapper, and a crazy, happy smile appeared on his face. Su Wumei was horrified when he finally realized that he had fallen into Lin Tian's trap and no one had kidnapped the hostage. The art teacher noticed that the chair where Mr. Chen had been sitting was now empty. The blonde was dumbfounded when he saw a man in front of him, cutting through the air, rapidly approaching him. The man managed to snatch the phone from Su Wumei's hands and landed successfully, performing an acrobatic stunt, for which Lin Tian gave him 100 points. Visibly panicking, Su Wumei, who had lost his phone, demanded that Lin Tian confess what he was planning. The boy approached the box covered with red cloth and honestly answered that he was going to get even with the drawing teacher. Lin Tian explained that he was doing this to make Su realize how wrong he had been and revealed the precise location recognition tool. The protagonist took Su Wumei's phone and then inserted a red wire into it, which would allow them to determine the hostage's geolocation. The man hired by the guy used a tool to determine and report that the caller was located near the suburbs. Lin Tian was delighted by this and gave the order to immediately move to the scene to rescue Miss Chen's real father from captivity. When the imaginary Mr. Chen tore off his mask, it turned out that Cicely had been playing the role of the man all this time. The muscular girl tore off her hospital pajamas and was ready to go to the suburbs right away. The protagonist nodded to his personal assistant, ordering her to go first and he would follow her later. Cicely, in order to get to the bus faster, decided to jump down from the roof onto the street instead of going down the stairs. Su Wumei's tension increased when he saw our hero also jumping from the roof using his batsuit. Hugging the frightened teacher, the boy asked how he should punish Su Wumei now that the situation was already under control. The tearful class teacher approached our hero's ear to secretly give him an idea. The girl's idea frightened Lin Tian. He considered this punishment too harsh because Su Wumei might burn with shame after this. A sinister smile appeared on the protagonist's face, and he admitted that he still liked this method of punishment. After the events unfolded in the corridor, at the door to the teacher's room, 3 cute students were standing next to it. The girls gathered near the teacher's room to guard their favorite teacher Su Wumei. They finally waited for his appearance. They were convinced that it was definitely Su Wumei because such a graceful figure in this establishment could only belong to a drawing teacher. The 3 female students began to stare at the teacher with loving eyes. They shouted, confessing their love to Su Wumei. As the graceful, long-haired blonde man approached them, silence fell over the corridor, and the smiles vanished from the girls' faces. Su Wumei smiled sweetly at them and replied that he needed to focus on work, even though he understood how much they liked him. The 3 girls stared at the blonde man with disgust and asked who he was, because they did not recognize their favorite teacher in him. The puzzled teacher answered them that it was he, Su Wumei, and clearly did not understand where their eternally loving eyes had disappeared to. Panicking, the man started screaming, trying to prove that it was really him, but he completely forgot to hide his bald head. The students did not believe him, replying that he was as much of a teacher as they were a ballerina. Teacher Su couldn't stop shaking with rage because Lin Tian's punishment was that Wumei's hair would be shaved off. After the event took place near a small shop where Chen Dodo was selling her signature stinky tofu, Cao Biluo and Miss Chen were also there. Cicely, who knew nothing about this, asked our hero what these girls were doing there. The protagonist explained to his personal assistant that when his company had a lot of money again, they would be able to start a new business plan. Curious, Cicely began to ask the boss what other new plan he was trying to tell her about. Without explaining anything in detail, the guy smiled smugly and declared that he had already thought about the first clients. The protagonist handed his personal assistant several sheets of paper and asked Cicely to find these people for him. The short-haired blonde's eyes widened in surprise when she read the list of her first clients. The first client was police officer Yuan, who wears a wig to cover his bald head. The second client was also a man suffering from baldness. He was a former manager of the convenience store where our hero worked. The third client on Lin Tian's list is Jiang Hao, the protagonist's classmate, who, like the other men, suffered from baldness. It didn't take long for Cicely to bring all the clients to the boss, and she reported this to the guy. The store manager knew that Lin Tian was now a big boss and asked if he was worthy of our hero looking for him. Fearing Lin Tian, Officer Yuan still dared to complain that he had been demoted in his position because of him. A frightened Jiang Hao asked his classmate what he was up to again after trampling on him in 2 races and at dinner in the cafeteria. Smiling radiantly, the main character asked the boys if they still hadn't figured out what united the 3 of them. The men really couldn't figure it out. Jiang Hao asked if what they had in common was that he had deceived them all. The protagonist shook his head because the guy's version was not correct, but he was ready to tell them the truth. Lin Tian explained that the men were linked by the problem of baldness, at which point Cicely tore the wigs off Officer Yuan and the former manager. Our hero's first clients felt very awkward about their problem and stared at the guy in silence and bewilderment. The protagonist proudly pulled out a suitcase and announced that his new business plan was to sell artificial hair. Zhao Han, the store manager, and Officer Yuan started shouting and complaining because these artificial hair products were sold everywhere. Lin Tian asked if they would have the same opinion if he said that these wigs were special. They could influence people to fall in love with men. Jiang Hao didn't believe our hero's stories and declared that Lin Tian's advertisement was complete nonsense. The protagonist replied that living proof of the work of these special wigs was now standing right behind the men. The balding manager and police officer Yuan reluctantly turned to look at this living example of the wig's effectiveness. Lin Tian's bald-headed classmate also became curious to see the man wearing a wig. They saw Cicely in front of them, and our hero explained that the changes in the girl's body were caused by his special wig. Jiang Hao still didn't believe that wearing a wig would make people fall in love with him and accused Lin Tian of lying. The protagonist suggested that the boy think carefully because Cicely was not as attractive before as it is now. The shaved-headed guy carefully examined Cicely standing behind him, who now looked radically different than in the past. Jiang Hao remembered how she looked before and noted that she was more charming and gentle in the past. Our hero agreed with the guy and took a wig out of his suitcase to show the clients the secret of Teacher Su's attractiveness and popularity. The student was perplexed because he had previously thought that Teacher Su Wumei was so popular among girls because of his talent and beauty. Lin Tian showed the screen of his phone to the customers and claimed that he discovered these secret photos after investigating Su Wumei. According to the main character, Su Wumei used to suffer because no one loved him. The guy was completely bald. The boy said that Su Wumei later bought a wig from him, after which everyone immediately fell in love with the teacher. But today, the main character punished Su Wumei by taking away his favorite wig, and now the girls are not interested in him again. Jiang Hao found it hard to believe what he saw on the screen because teacher Su Wumei looked completely different from what he was used to seeing. Lin Tian confirmed that it was their teacher Su in the photos, because without his wig, it was almost impossible to recognize the man. The bald-headed student stroked his bald head and asked our hero if the lack of hair was the reason for his unpopularity. Our hero smiled ominously and stated once again that Su Wumei only became popular after he bought a special wig. Jiang Hao shook his head and accused Lin Tian of lying because he didn't believe that teacher Su had purchased the wig from him. Lin Tian wanted to laugh because Jiang Hao believed that teacher Su was wearing a wig and was willing to provide his classmate with new evidence. He decided to show the student a video where Lin Tian came to collect money from Su for the wig, and Su wanted to take an IOU from him so that our hero would not sell these wigs to anyone else. The protagonist showed the clients a video of Su Wumei, bald-headed and shaking with anger, cursing Lin Tian for taking away his beautiful hair. Lin Tian proudly showed off his wig and declared that everyone should have the opportunity to own this wonderful artificial hair. This evidence did not convince Jiang Hao. The bald-headed guy still felt there was something fishy about this. Our hero noticed that the guy couldn't make up his mind, so he invited him to touch the wig, smell its wonderful aroma, and verify its quality. Jiang Hao reluctantly picked up the fake hair and sniffed it to check if it really smelled that good. The scent was so mind-blowing that tears appeared in the guy's eyes and his cheeks turned pink. Now he was delighted with the wig. Looking pitifully at the main character, the shaved-headed guy asked how much this artificial hair cost. The protagonist shook his head and replied that he could not charge the student for the wig because students could not have money. Jiang Hao got angry and shouted that he had everything, and Lin Tian was just looking down on people since he had a lot of money himself. The bald-headed guy held out several credit cards in his palms and allowed Lin Tian to take as many as he wanted, since money was nothing to him. Cicely walked up to our hero and whispered, asking if this Jiang Hao wasn't acting too strange. The protagonist told his personal assistant that the wig was infused with a special potion using Chinese medicine, and only a small amount was needed. Cicely asked the boss if it was enough to bully Jiang Hao, since the boy had already been cheated out of a large sum of money. She was dumbfounded when Lin Tian started shouting, asking if the girl really wanted to get the car, and asked if she was talking about that big sports car. At that moment, Jiang Hao's large black sports car was parked nearby, and the first customers in Silly froze in bewilderment. Jiang Hao was willing to do anything to get this wig, so he handed our hero the keys to his favorite car. Afterwards, Cicely asked the boss if this wasn't too much, and Lin Tian asked if Jiang Hao, on the contrary, shouldn't thank the guy. Jiang Hao and the other customers were happy after purchasing the wig. Now they all had long blonde hair. Lin Tian was ready to collect the reward for completing the first main quest because the first transaction had been completed. The office layout was ready, and he had also finished recruiting employees. The protagonist became very wary when he activated the system interface and discovered an unpleasant notification there. Instead of a reward, he received a message stating that the identity of the company employee did not match the documents provided, meaning he could not receive the prize. Our hero began to go over all of his employees in his head, among whom were Cicely, aka Xiao Li, and Da Fan Pai, aka Xiao Long. Lin Tian also remembered the red-haired student Qian Dodo, who works as an architect in his company. The first thing the protagonist decided to do was call Xiaolong, whom he had hired last in his company as a driver. Da Fan Pai answered the phone and began to grovel before the boss, asking if he had any instructions. The stern and serious boss replied that he needed to discuss something with the man and ask his advice. Clenching his fist, Da Fan Pai replied that he would have no problem discussing anything the boss wanted with him and would carry out any of his instructions. The protagonist responded to the employee that he appreciated his loyalty and was ready to get to the heart of the matter. Da Fan Pai grinned, eager to hear what his boss had to say, and he was already dreaming of using this information against him. Although a bright smile appeared on Lin Tian's face, he stunned the boy with the sad news that Da Fan Pai had been fired. The protagonist didn't bother to listen to what the fired employee had to say, but simply hung up, having dealt with the first liar. The dragon couldn't understand what just happened. He looked at his phone in shock, having lost his job at Tianjin Lin Company. Da Fan Pai was so angry that he yelled at the whole room, asking if Lin Tian was making fun of him, and smashed the phone with his fist. Lin Tian decided to ask his personal assistant for her opinion, and asked if she thought he had been too harsh with Da Fan Pai. Cicely was not happy with her boss's actions, shaking her head in disapproval and declaring that it was a violation of the employment contract. Smiling slyly, Lin Tian replied that he was willing to pay the fired driver a year's salary, since this money was small change for him. The short-haired blonde only sighed heavily in response, and the main character couldn't stop smiling stupidly. Suddenly, Lin Tian grabbed Cicely by the waist and pulled her towards him, declaring that there was another matter that concerned her. The protagonist approached the girl's ear and stunned her with the news that she, too, had been fired from Tianjin Lin's company. The news came as a complete surprise to Cicely, and she looked at her boss in fear, asking if she was really fired. Our young hero admitted that he recently managed to find out that Cicely is not who she claims to be, and in fact, she is not the same Xiao Li. Lin Tian stated that recently, although Cicely had been following his orders, she had constantly expressed doubts about his methods, while the real Cicely did not do so. He grabbed her by the waist again and said that the real Cicely didn't like being touched, but this one just silently endured it. Smiling ominously, the protagonist asked if he really needed to voice the final argument in favor of her not being Cicely. Cicely smirked and replied that she had no intention of keeping this secret from the boss forever, as her movements and fighting abilities were indeed better than the real Cicely's. It turned out that the main character didn't even notice this obvious difference. He scratched the back of his head and looked at her in bewilderment. The lying Cicely was also perplexed and asked if the boss hadn't noticed that she had much better skills than the real Cicely. The girl blushed and became angry with our hero when he said that she was not such an outstanding figure, which distinguished her from the real Cicely. The protagonist looked away in shame, licked his lips, and thought that he couldn't help himself, which is why he noticed this. Afterwards, Lin Tian asked where the real Cicely was now, because she herself didn't seem to have any malicious intent. Cicely began to dissipate before his eyes. She wished Lin Tian to enjoy the life of a stupid rich man, and he did not need to know the whereabouts of her sister. The protagonist wanted to stop the girl. He extended his hand and shouted for her to wait, but she had already dissolved into pixels. Lin Tian couldn't hold back his tears because even though he was the one who fired Xiao Li, he cried because so much good cheap labor was gone. The guy fired 2 of the 3 suspicious employees. Now he hoped that he would be able to receive a reward for completing the main task. He was shocked when he still couldn't get the reward due to the error, which meant that Qian Dodo was also not who he claimed to be. At university, the guy began to closely follow his coworker and classmate, but Qian Dodo never had any problems in his studies. Afterwards, he hid in the bushes while the girl was playing tennis, and there he was convinced that Qian Dodo had no problems with sports either. Lin Tian did not leave Dodo's side in the dining room when she was having lunch, and he made sure that the girl was also eating well. When the girl returned home, the guy hid in a trash can to follow her, and he didn't notice any problems there either. He scratched his head and wondered if there really was a bug in the system, because Dodo had no problem identifying himself. The boy threw away the fish bones that were stuck to his head and decided to go to Tianjin Lin Company to invite all the employees to contribute their ideas. The events then took place at the headquarters of the Tianjin Lin Company, a tall, majestic building in the form of a skyscraper castle. Lin Tian was wary because every time he came to the office, someone outside the building would shout for the alliance, and this time was no exception. The protagonist approached the door leading to the headquarters. The glass door automatically opened in front of the boss. Inside, he was greeted by girls lined up in a row, all wearing the same uniform, who happily greeted Boss Lin. On the right side, there were also girls who worked for the Tianjin Lin Company lined up. They greeted our hero with a smile. The protagonist blushed and couldn't stop smiling because with the help of X-ray vision he could see what variety of underwear his employees were wearing. He mentally listed all the girls' underwear, among which were camouflage, snow white, beige, and with a teddy bear. Lin Tian, with a happy smile on his face, said how good it is to have company, and even better to have such vision. The protagonist suddenly became wary when he noticed the top with the teddy bear, because he had seen it many times before. He saw that the underwear belonged to Qian Dodo and shouted, asking how the girl got here. One of the girls started praising Qian Dodo to the boss, saying that she was the most responsible and active of all who worked there, since she came in early in the morning. Our quick-witted hero thought something was wrong, because he had been watching Dodo all day, and she couldn't have come to the office so early. The boss began to look closely at Qian Dodo, which made her tense. He began to guess who was causing the error in his system. Lin Tian decided to test her by praising the girl for how well she had performed in the swimming lesson this morning. The red-haired girl assumed that Boss Lin was mistaken because she didn't have swimming lessons in the morning. Our hero apologized to her and admitted his mistake, But in reality, he intended to continue questioning the girl. Lin Tian reminded Qian Dodo that he had invited her to have spicy tofu with coriander for lunch this morning, so it was time for them to go. Qian Dodo laughed and asked the boss to stop joking because he was inviting her to eat pumpkin cookies, not spicy tofu. The attempt to expose the girl failed again because he really didn't invite her to have spicy tofu for dinner. The cheerful girl reported that there were still several contracts for the sale of wigs that needed the boss's signature. The protagonist put his hand on Qian Dodo's shoulder, agreed to sign the documents, and told her to keep trying just as hard. When Lin Tian turned around, the polite smile disappeared from his face. He finally realized that there could be something wrong here. He smiled ominously when he realized that there were two Qian Dodos in this world, so they could be both studying and working at the same time. He immediately shared this news with teacher Chen, who was shocked to hear that there were two Qian Dodos. The protagonist, frowning sternly, decided to let these two red-haired girls tell them themselves how this was possible. Miss Chen asked the boy if he was absolutely sure that Qian Dodo would tell him the whole truth. Lin Tian grinned maliciously and replied to his beloved class teacher that he was sure of it, because his trap would soon snap shut. At this moment, the two Qian Dodos were sitting at the table and chatting. One of them reported that Lin Tian was beginning to suspect them. The second Qian Dodo, blushing with shame, asked her twin sister why they didn't tell Boss Tian the whole truth. The red-haired girl with glasses replied that they couldn't do that yet because she had one last trump card left. After the action unfolded in our hero's apartment, the guy was sleeping peacefully in his bed after a hard day at work. He was forced to jump up in the middle of the night when someone started knocking on his door, although he had not called anyone, and it was already late. Lin Tian carefully walked to the door and looked through the peephole before deciding whether to let this person into the apartment. The main character was surprised when he saw through the peephole a completely empty corridor. There was no one behind the door. The guy scratched the back of his head and decided that this was strange. He moved away from the door to return to his bed. Before Lin Tian could return to sleep, a few seconds later he heard an insistent knock on the door again. The main character got angry, opened the door abruptly and shouted, asking who dared to disturb him in the middle of the night. The young man stood dumbfounded on the threshold of the apartment when, this time too, there was no one in the corridor. The huge entrance was completely empty. When Lin Tian walked out into the corridor to check, he froze in fear when he noticed a dark, strange silhouette nearby. He saw a ghost in front of him, whose strange face was covered by long hair. The ghost warned our hero that he had made a mistake. Lin Tian, sweating from fear, looked at the ghost in bewilderment, not understanding what he wanted from him or what mistake he was talking about. After the ghost crept up on our hero from behind, a man with a wrinkled face and glowing eyes once again told the guy that he was mistaken. The protagonist was dumbfounded, sensing the close presence of the ghost. He could only close his eyes and clench his teeth in fear. When Lin Tian opened his eyes again at the threshold of his apartment, the scary night ghost had disappeared somewhere. The young man couldn't believe what was happening, so he assumed it was just a hallucination and not a real ghost. This night, adventure did not allow Lin Tian to get a good night's sleep, and the next day, while sitting at the university, he was constantly yawning. Suddenly, one of his classmates placed a hand on the boy's shoulder before turning to the tired Lin Tian. It was Qian Dodo, who was worried about the boss, who asked if something had happened because he looked sleep-deprived. The visibly exhausted young man frankly admitted that something strange had happened the previous night and told a story about a ghost. The red-haired girl, after listening to the boss's story, concluded that Lin Tian had dealt with a ghost last night. People who see ghosts also have a misconception of time and tend to not recognize people, she said. The protagonist smiled and added that such strange people can see two identical people, hinting at Qian Dodo's deception. Qian Dodo tried again to convince the boss that he had just seen a ghost, and then the guy would stop thinking that the girl had a twin. The girl failed to deceive him. Lin Tian shook his head and asked what kind of relationship Qian Dodo had with her. The red-haired student stared at her boss in fear when he asked her this question, because she didn't expect him to know everything. Lin Tian smiled ominously and said that yesterday he clearly saw Qian Dodo and her twin disguised as ghosts, because they were wearing tops with a cat on them. Qian Dodo, indignant, covered herself with her hands and stuttered as she asked Boss Lin Tian what he was saying. Our hero openly stated that he saw everything with his own eyes, because the ghost's clothes were torn and their wigs had slipped to the side. A panicked Qian Dodo replied that he couldn't expose them because they were convinced that the suits were perfect. The protagonist was jubilant because he had long ago seen through this masquerade in which Qian Dodo and her twin sister were participating. Lin Tian reassured her, trying to convince her that she could put aside her doubts because she could trust him. Boss Tian looked her straight in the eyes, and the girl advised him not to interfere in this matter because she was worried about him. Qian Dodo stood up and warned that otherwise, both he and all his loved ones would die sooner or later. The protagonist looked at his red-haired employee with fear, because the problem turned out to be much more serious than he expected. The following events took place in the building where the Chen Music School was located. One of the musicians, a gray-haired man in a suit, ran to the director in a panic and shouted that something had happened. The school principal was sitting quietly drinking tea at this time. She smiled and asked Teacher Xiaoli if he would like to join in the tea party. The man had no time for tea. Teacher Xiaoli, sweating from the stress, shouted that someone was putting on a show at school. Smiling, the woman asked her subordinate to stop panicking and promised that she would come there after tea. It turned out that Lin Tian had burst into the music school and started demanding that the director be called in because he wanted to talk to someone more senior. Teacher Xiaoli shouted back that if the boy wanted to see the principal, he would first need to talk to the man. He showed off his musical instrument and proudly introduced himself as the best clarinetist in the world, so he was ready to compete against Lin Tian. Seeing the wind instrument, the main character was not afraid. He waved to Ermazi and gave the signal for him to come on stage. The bald-headed, freckled boy smiled broadly and put his hand on his heart. He was happy to speak. Teacher Xiaoli looked at the boy with disdain and asked Lin Tian if he really thought he could compare to the legendary clarinetist. The protagonist asked if one really needed to look good to play a musical instrument, since in that case Lin Tian would be a musical genius. An angry teacher, Xiaoli, replied that he didn't care and they had nothing to talk about, so he would just start playing his clarinet. The man in the dark suit looked like the epitome of elegance as he began to gracefully play the clarinet, producing a perfect melody. People who attended the performance burst into tears because the music of this true master was so beautiful. Even the protagonist praised Teacher Xiaoli, saying that he is a master of emotional performance. Xiaoli smiled smugly and replied that the clarinet has a wide range of 4 octaves, so no other wind instrument can compare with it. Lin Tian asked if this was the same as simply playing on emotions, and gave the command to Ermazi to go on stage. People grimaced, and the legendary clarinetist froze in shock when they all heard the ear-shattering melody from Ermazi. Ermazi chose the suona, a Chinese folk instrument considered a hooligan in sacred music, for his performance. Now our hero could not hold back his tears either. He declared that these were not just tears, but mourning in its purest form. The guy approached Ermazi, put his arm around the boy's shoulder and explained to the crowd that in Shenzhou, all funerals take place to the sounds of the suona. The audience began to cry. One of them screamed, remembering his grandmother and her funeral, because it took place to such music. Teacher Xiaoli approached Lin Tian and admitted that he had lost the competition, but our hero could not always win by his cunning alone. The gray-haired man in the black suit turned and walked away, trying to hide both our hero and his tears from the public. Wiping away his tears, Lin Tian loudly declared that he was ready to compete against 10 musicians and asked who would be next. When the girl appeared in the hall, Lin Tian immediately recognized her and asked if she was the eldest granddaughter of the Chen family and the director of this music school. The girl smiled kindly and asked the guy if it was really he who bravely challenged the entire Chen family. The protagonist froze and stared at her, because his X-ray vision allowed him to examine her excellent body. Director Chen was no ordinary girl, and when she looked at the guy's eyes, she immediately realized that he had X-ray vision. Lin Tian was so amazed by the girl's beauty that he could only read the poem now. He began to fall to the floor, fountains of blood pouring from his nose, but the guy managed to read the first line of the poem about the death of the departing master before he achieved final victory. The main character fell flat on the floor and spread his legs and arms out to the sides. Director Chen silently stared at the boy. Lin Tian, even though his nose was bleeding, smiled happily as he recited the second line of the poem about heroes and nosebleeds. When the young hero finally came to, he opened his eyes and discovered that he had been lying on the lap of the caring director Chen all this time. The Chen family's youngest granddaughter smiled charmingly and asked solicitously if Lin Tian was feeling better. The protagonist jumped up from the floor, wiping the blood from under his nose with his hand, and shouted that he had no intention of falling for her trick. The guy walked up to Ermazi, handed him the money and said that the only way to deal with Director Chen was to get out his secret weapon. Having received 5 yuan, the boy asked Boss Lin what secret weapon he could get for such a ridiculous amount of money. Putting on his sunglasses, the protagonist explained to Ermazi, syllable by syllable, that he needed to buy fruit yogurt with this money. Ermazi understood everything and left, and Lin Tian turned to the director, saying that he saw what a big heart she had and that she didn't even require the guy to explain his mistake. Director Chen laughed sweetly, covering her mouth with her hand, and asked what the next competition would be. The protagonist declared that the competition with wind instruments was over, so next were strings and percussion. The director of the music school didn't like the idea. The girl looked at the guy pitifully and asked him not to do it. Lin Tian smiled and asked Director Chen if she was willing to admit her defeat in this music competition. Taking a flirtatious pose, the girl explained that she wanted to invite Lin Tian to play something else, just him and her. The main character became indignant and screamed so loudly that pieces of cotton wool flew out of his nose. He asked why the girl thought so badly of him. But immediately after, a happy smile appeared on Lin Tian's face. He approached Director Chen and asked her to explain the rules of the new game. The charming girl laughed again and admitted that she was beginning to like Brother Lin more and more. Director Chen explained that preparation for the competition would take 1 day, during which each of them would play their own instrument. The girl came close to the guy's face and whispered in his ear that the loser would be obliged to fulfill any request of the winner. Our hero liked the conditions of the competition. He smiled and agreed to take part in the musical battle. The protagonist blushed in surprise when Director Chen cupped his face with her palms and kissed him on the lips. Lin Tian's eyes widened in shock and he stared at the girl who had kissed him completely unexpectedly. Smiling coquettishly, Director Chen explained to the shocked boy that it was the promised kiss. Our hero liked this, so he asked the girl why they didn't kiss for a few more minutes. Director Chen still left, telling Lin Tian that she would look forward to his performance in the competition. The musician hired by Lin Tian warned the guy that this woman was a real witch who could take away human souls with her playing. The second musician agreed with him, believing that their heart-rending erhu and dynamic allegro percussion could not compare to Director Chen. Putting on his glasses, Lin Tian decided that he needed to involve Qian Dodo in this matter to defeat the Chen family. Otherwise, it would not be revenge. The musicians hired by our hero, not understanding why they weren't listening to him, looked at each other in bewilderment. The men warned the boy that Qian Dodo also couldn't play musical instruments. The next day, the action took place in a large round arena, where a large crowd of spectators had gathered. Our hero's bus and a black car were parked in the square. Director Chen stepped out of the black car. The girl was wearing a red dress in the traditional Chinese style today. The main character also got out of his yellow ghost bus, having previously covered his eyes with a black blindfold and stuffed his nose with cotton wool. Lin Tian approached the unknown witch. Sparks began to fly in the air between the two competitors, and the most dangerous moment in our hero's life had arrived. Chao Biluo, who got off the bus, was stunned, not understanding the electric spark between her boss and Director Chen. The protagonist removed the blindfold and admitted that he thought it was a spark that ran between him and the girl. He grimaced when he realized that this electric spark was real. Lightning struck our hero's hand. Director Chen, smiling sweetly, explained to her opponent that her musical instrument was electric, which is why there were sparks flying. Lin Tian admitted that this was unexpected because he thought the girl would choose the organ or conduct. He became curious about what instrument this witch would play today. He went through all the options in his head, from a synthesizer to an electronic guzheng. The confident musician clapped her hands and ordered her assistant boys to carry the instrument into the arena. A whole team of assistants brought an instrument into the arena, which was striking in its size, but for now it was covered with a black cloth. The protagonist was stunned when he saw a musical instrument of inhuman size in front of him. Director Chen stated that today, it looks like our hero will never be able to become more than just a brother to her. The girl walked up to her musical instrument and began to rip off its cover. A bright light immediately blinded everyone. The musicians hired by our hero and the show's spectators were dumbfounded when they saw the size of the instrument Director Chen had brought with her today. It turned out that instead of her usual musical instrument, the girl would be playing a giant Tesla coil today. Director Chen licked her lips and looked confidently at her opponent to see how he would react to her instrument. The protagonist's mouth opened wide in surprise. He could not take his eyes off the majestic and gigantic Tesla coil. Afterwards, the girl approached the cage that stood near her instrument and advised the guy to watch carefully. Standing next to the Tesla coil, Director Chen began to control electrical sparks by waving her hands in the air. The music show finally began, and the Tesla coil began to release powerful streams of electricity. Director Chen stood directly underneath her musical instrument, raising her hand to play it. After the girl entered the metal cage, she lowered her head and spread her arms to the sides. Bright lightning filled the entire arena. The musicians and spectators watched Chen's extravagant performance in silence, no longer hoping for Lin Tian's victory. The men hired by Lin Tian couldn't stand it any longer and started shouting, praising Director Chen's amazing music, as it was unlike anything else. When the girl finished her performance, she approached her opponent and asked if he now thought she was cool. The protagonist didn't dare argue with Director Chen. He began to nod his head frantically, his hair ruffled by the electric sparks. The Chen family's youngest granddaughter laughed, covering her mouth with her hand, and said that she thought the boy would pretend to be indifferent to her performance. A completely serious Lin Tian admitted that this was the first time in his life he had heard real, professional electric music. He took the girl's hand and said that he could not control sound the way she did, relying only on a small iron cage to isolate the electric field. The guy pressed his head against the girl and admitted that she amazed him with how natural her beauty was when surrounded by electric current. The girl patted him on the head and suggested that he immediately give the victory to her, so that Lin Tian should now do everything she says. The protagonist took out his mobile phone and replied that he would not admit defeat because the competition had just begun. The audience was outraged because they did not believe that there could be music that would be even more powerful than Director Chen's performance. The crowd began to watch our hero, not understanding what he was doing, as he called someone and began to climb up the ladder to the top of the Tesla coil. The protagonist climbed to the very top and declared that this performance had just made him even more convinced of the true essence of music. Lin Tian shouted that music was vibration, so he would use the Changdodo method in his performance. The girl looked tensely at her opponent when he stated that he wanted to pay tribute to the Chen family. Director Chen crossed her arms over her chest and thought about our young hero's words about music being vibration. When she heard some loud noise, she became even more alert and screamed, asking what that sound was. The musicians and the spectators who watched the performance shuddered in fear because the noise was unexpected and loud. The bodyguards surrounded the girl and started shouting at her to get out of here because it looked like a small earthquake had started here. The main character, who was still standing on top of the Tesla coil, reassured the audience by saying that it was not an earthquake at all. Smiling smugly, Lin Tian loudly declared that it was his music that was causing such terrifyingly strong vibrations. Even the tall tower that stood in the arena began to shake and vibrate violently as Lin Tian began his performance. Then he pointed his finger at the stadium that stood nearby and made this huge structure shake as well. Director Chen visibly panicked. This was the first time she had encountered anything like this, so she didn't understand what kind of tool her opponent was using. Lin Tian grinned and admitted that his musicality was actually not very good, as he had not studied music theory and was not very good at rhythm. Rubbing his fingers together, the main character shouted that all he had was money, and that it was money that always helped him win. He proudly spread his arms out to the sides and shouted that all these buildings around were his musical instruments. After finishing his unique musical performance, he began to walk down the stairs while asking Chen Dodo to leave. The Dodo twins surrounded the boy, and Lin Tian stated that it was thanks to them that he had calculated the vibration speed of each building and the sound they could make. The guy admitted that he then used modern vibration machines to rotate the frequency for sound vibration. The protagonist explained to the stunned crowd that people who play music control instruments. Smiling slyly, the young man declared that he allowed the instruments to control people, which is what made his performance unique. He joyfully grabbed Dodo by the hands and raised them up, shouting that no one could repeat his performance, in which people listened to the music between the instruments. Without turning around, the protagonist asked his rival how she was feeling now. The girl didn't answer, so Lin Tian decided to turn around, a little scared when he heard strange sounds. It turned out that the girl could not stop crying. She said that she felt both sad and incredibly happy at the same time. Scratching his head, Lin Tian walked over and asked Director Chen if she was feeling sad about her loss. Director Chen admitted her loss, but asked how she could listen to other music now after hearing Lin Tian's performance. The Chen family's youngest granddaughter burst into tears and threw herself into our hero's arms, screaming that he must now take full responsibility. Qiao Biluo, watching this, felt a strong sense of jealousy. She puffed out her cheeks in resentment and glared angrily at the woman hugging Lin Tian. The protagonist stroked the girl's head to calm her down and asked Director Chen to do him a favor. Lin Tian pointed his finger at Chen Dodo and said that these girls should now return to the Chen family to regain their lost identities and honor. Director Chen was ready to fulfill any request of our hero, so she promised to return the girls to the Chen family. Smiling sweetly, the girl admitted that she also wanted to ask Lin Tian for one modest favor. The main character didn't have time to say a word before he suddenly felt how bad he felt and began to lose consciousness. When Lin Tian finally lost consciousness, Chen's bodyguards picked her up, and the girl told them to send the guy to her family's mansion because she had her own agreement with him. After some time, our hero was able to come to his senses. He jumped out of bed and screamed, realizing that Director Chen was plotting against him. He froze when the girl put her hand on his shoulder and said that he had acted completely differently last night. The protagonist, grimacing in disgust and fear, slowly turned around to look at the girl who had touched him. The guy saw Director Chen in front of him, who was lying on the bed covered with a blanket, and asked if they hadn't had mutual consent. Lin Tian found himself in such a hopeless situation that he burst into tears, not understanding why he was in such trouble. Besides her and our hero, there were other people in the luxurious mansion. The sisters Qian Dodo and Qiao Biluo were sitting outside. Qiao Biluo looked tense. She crossed her arms over her chest and asked the girls what happened to Lin Tian, since he had not been seen since yesterday. The red-haired girls replied that he was probably fine, since he didn't have anything useful for the Chen family anyway. The #1 streamer couldn't stop worrying about her boss. She asked what if Director Chen offended him. Qian Dodo laughed and asked the girl what she was even thinking about, because Lin Tian, although handsome, was not that handsome. The second red-haired twin advised Qiao Biluo to take better care of his other problems. Their conversation was interrupted by Director Chen, who entered the gazebo and said that they had all misunderstood, as she did not want to create problems for them. Chao Biluo began to wave her fists and shout, demanding that the girl let her go because she wanted to see Lin Tian. Trying to get into a fight, the pink-haired girl didn't even notice how she collided head-on with someone. The streamer saw Lin Tian in front of her. The guy looked completely exhausted, his face had become thinner, and his skin had become pale. Concerned about the boy, Chao Biluo asked our hero what had happened to him and whether Director Chen had been bullying him. The main character gave the girl a thumbs up, put a smile on his face, and decided to lie that everything was wonderful. Director Chen suggested that they get down to business and begin discussing the Chen family's affairs since everyone was gathered here. Licking her lips, the girl said with a sly smile that she wanted to cooperate with Chen Dodo and her identical sister. One of them immediately refused, saying that the Chen family's affairs were none of their business, and they definitely did not want to cooperate with her. The brunette asked the twin sisters if they had forgotten that it was she who had been helping them hide their biggest secret all this time. Chen Dodo looked at the girl with fear, and her little sister clenched her teeth in tension when the headmistress used this argument against them. Director Chen stepped forward, took one of the sisters by the hand, and asked if they had forgotten how much fun they used to have together. One of the Dodo twins looked at Director Chen in shock, trying to find the words to respond. The dark-haired girl burst into tears and blushed. She declared that although she had changed her name, for them she was still the same sister Pinju. An exhausted Lin Tian grabbed the yogurt bottle and confirmed that Director Chen was indeed Pinju, as he had seen the evidence. The girl hugged her twin sisters and said that soon all their problems would end, because they had already been through so much over the years. Having taken control of her emotions, Pinju declared that she had already found a way to regain control of their own family. Chao Biluo didn't believe her and shouted that the girl was lying. Otherwise, she wouldn't want to cooperate with Lin Tian and the others if she already had a way. The brunette took our hero by the arm and explained to the angry girl that Lin Tian was helping her, which is why she found a way. The girl pressed herself against the main character and called him her Lin Tian, and in response, a blush appeared on the young man's cheeks. Chao Biluo was so angry that her eyes turned into flames. She clenched her fists and teeth tightly, burning with jealousy. Chen Dodo and her twin sister looked at Pinju in shock when she told them about the way to regain control of the family. Director Chen turned around and told her younger sisters that the head of their family was currently discussing a new business plan. The girl took out some book and said that she should take advantage of the opportune moment to regain control of the family. The red-haired sisters froze in shock when they saw exactly what book Pinju had pulled out. Director Chen opened the book and showed that the names of Qian Domi and Qian Dohao were now written in it, meaning they had officially returned to the family. It was too early to rejoice. Lin Tian hugged the sisters and said that now they needed to urgently remove the head of the family for the changes to take effect. Pinju agreed with this, and added that she had more grandiose plans than simply getting rid of the head of the family. The long-haired brunette declared that she intended to turn not only the Chen family, but the entire Li family upside down. Qian Dohao and Dome became even more wary when they learned of their sister's plans because they understood what kind of family they were. Chao Biluo was afraid for Pinju and asked how she was going to do this, since the Li family was the third most powerful in all of Shenzhou. The main character did not share the girl's concerns. He raised his hand and loudly declared that they would handle everything. He chuckled ominously and thought that now he could fight with the help of these girls, although he initially wanted to hire a secret agent. Pinju crossed her arms over her chest and suggested meeting the day after tomorrow at the Chen family mansion, but the girl was interrupted. Lin Tian waved his hand and left, saying that they would discuss the rest later, but for now, other matters awaited him. Gritting his teeth tightly, the boy understood that the most important thing now was to finally collect the reward for completing the main task. He was delighted to see that 2 rewards were already ready, because with them, he would be able to solve all the problems of the Chen family. Smiling madly, the guy decided to first put his new skills, received from the system as a reward, into practice. After the events unfolded at a local chain coffee shop, our hero came face to face with Da Fan Pai, whom he suspected of many things. Before even sitting down at the table, Lin Tian dismissively suggested to Dragon that they immediately resolve all the problems between them. Da Fan Pai scratched his forehead with his white glove and admitted that the main character never ceased to amaze him. With a malicious and mad smile plastered on his face, the dragon shouted that Lin Tian would not be able to defeat the man who had escaped from hell. He decided that he would no longer hide the Su family's techniques since Lin Tian had already seen them, so he materialized fire in his hands. The young man extended his fiery hands and shouted, urging Lin Tian to come closer so that he could see the ancient striking technique of the Su family. The protagonist was not afraid of Da Fan Pai's attempts to show off his mighty power, and he was not averse to fighting him. The guy came because he received a reward from the system, which now allows him to view the enemy's properties using his eyes. Lin Tian saw that Da Fan Pai had 3 points of strength, 4 points of intelligence, 5 points of mana, and 3 points of luck. Our hero laughed ominously and was ready to begin changing the enemy's properties, an opportunity the system had given him as a second reward. After changing his characteristics, Lin Tian finally relaxed, and Da Fan Pai rushed forward to attack him with a flaming fist. The dragon guessed that Lin Tian had used a sneak attack on him when he saw the coffee cup flying towards him. The cup of hot black coffee, fortunately, fell to the floor and broke under Da Fan Pai's feet without hitting him at all. The red-haired dragon frowned and looked away, distracted from his opponent because someone interrupted their battle. The coffee shop employee began to apologize and bow to the customer because it was he who accidentally dropped the cup of coffee from his hands. Da Fan Pai still didn't believe that it was the employee's fault. He decided to pounce on Lin Tian, asking if it was really his doing. The dragon didn't look where he was going as he approached our hero, so he didn't notice that he had stepped on a broken cup and a puddle of coffee. The red-haired boy froze in fear when he realized that he had stepped on something, and because of this, he began to lose his balance. Da Fan Pai slipped and fell to the floor. Hitting his chin on the floor, the stunned boy screamed, asking what was going on. The protagonist blushed with laughter, starting to make fun of Da Fan Pai, who showed such a clumsy side of himself. Lin Tian decided to check the enemy's characteristics again. His strength and intelligence had increased, but his mana remained the same. Only luck had undergone a major change. Now the dragon had 0 luck points, which is why he slipped on a puddle of coffee. Da Fan Pai reminded himself that he was called the dragon, and he was the strongest and most invincible warrior in the underworld. When the boy was still a child, his mysterious father in a hat constantly took him along with him on various missions and showdowns. The boy, although small, worked together with his father, and together they managed to defeat almost all the families in Shenzhou. At the same time, Da Fan Pai regularly worked on his development in martial arts. He went to training sessions, practicing his strikes. Even as a child, the dragon thoroughly learned the fighting techniques and methods of various influential families in the province. Already in childhood, Da Fan Pai became invincible. He could not only swing his arms and legs, but also perfectly wield knives, swords, and nunchucks. After sitting in front of the car's headlights for a day, the dragon even managed to learn the ancient eye technique of the Long family. This magical technique now allows Da Fan Pai to unravel the secrets of other people by penetrating their memories with just a glance. The boy felt proud of his family because the Sioux had the most powerful fist techniques. Now, lying on the floor of the coffee shop, Da Fan Pai was shocked because he used his family's strongest technique against Lin Tian, but he was still disgraced. Someone was carefully watching what was happening in the cafe through binoculars, hiding in the neighboring building. It was Luo Jiashan, also known as the honor student from Lin Tian University named Su Xueqing, who was Da Fan Pai's sister. The girl was shocked and confused because it turned out that Lin Tian could withstand her brother's fist techniques. With a satisfied smile, Lin Tian reminded the dragon that he should now ask the guy why he didn't defeat him. Da Fan Pai listened to our hero and, indeed, indignantly shouted, complaining that he was unable to defeat Lin Tian. Boasting to his opponent, Lin Tian happily explained to him that all of this had been planned by him in advance. The dragon had no intention of giving up. His entire body was surrounded by yellow flames. He was ready to show Lin Tian the power of another ancient technique called powerful Qigong. He stood up, clenched his fists and roared, calling upon the dragon's superpower to activate the dragon family's technique, Heavenly Dragon Spirit. Su Xueqing's binoculars shattered, and she dropped them when she saw her brother show his true power to the enemy. The protagonist was outraged that Da Fan Pai could do this, because even his characteristics had changed. Lin Tian became wary when he saw that all of the enemy's stats had now reached their maximum level, including luck. Da Fan Pai rushed forward, clenching his fist, which was blazing with a bright flame, and shouted, ordering our hero to kneel before him. The bewildered young man cried out, asking how it was possible to resist the change in characteristics since he had changed its properties. Lin Tian gritted his teeth in pain as he took the first blow, and Da Fan Pai managed to punch him in the chest. Da Fan Pai's ancient technique was so powerful that one blow sent the young man flying backwards, landing on the floor with a thud. Smiling ominously, the dragon declared that our hero was lucky because he was the first person in the last 50 years to die from this ancient technique. The protagonist immediately managed to get up. He wiped his mouth and admitted that the enemy's blow was strong. Da Fan Pai was terrified because he was sure that one blow would be enough to take Lin Tian's life. The completely unharmed young man rose to his feet, smiled, and declared that the dragon's round was over. Now it was his turn to attack. Lin Tian took a deep breath and closed his eyes. his body surrounded by the same yellow flame aura as his opponent. The main character was delighted. He looked at his hand and said that it was a wonderful feeling. His body was filled with energy. Da Fanpai's jaw dropped in surprise and he shouted, asking how it was that Lin Tian possessed the ancient techniques of the Su family. Frowning, Lin Tian looked the guy straight in the eyes and asked if he really didn't know our hero's nickname. Covering his warlike face with a jacket, the protagonist proudly and loudly introduced himself as the copy ninja Tiantian Lin. Having copied his opponent's ancient technique, our hero struck Da Fanpai with his fist, causing him to collapse with the first blow. The legendary dragon tried to rise after the crushing blow. He hid his face and trembled all over from pain and anger. Da Fanpai no longer had the mental and physical strength to fight against our hero. He only asked him to explain how he managed it. After activating Father Mode, the protagonist asked the boy if he wanted Lin Tian to teach him his secrets. Lin Tian knew very well that he was simply using an ability that he already had in his arsenal, which was given to him by the system. Our hero never tired of smiling broadly with joy, because he was once again convinced that intelligence is the most important thing. Lin Tian had previously noticed that the dragon's energy was being fed by the surrounding aura during the attack. It was high time to use the pocket safe, the virtual magical instrument that the system had given him long ago. Lin Tian liked this ancient technique of the Su family, so he decided to take it and put it in his pocket safe. Surrounded by yellow flames, our hero shouted menacingly, demanding that Da Fanpai show the rest of his techniques, because Lin Tian was stronger than him. Wiping away the blood with a white glove, the dragon refused and shouted that our hero had definitely used cheating to deceive his opponent. The protagonist stared calmly at Da Fanpai, and the red-haired guy shouted that he must defeat him at any cost. Da Fanpai roared, clenched his fists tightly, and activated the strongest form of the second-generation dragon, his body once again surrounded by flames. The guy raised his hands to the sky and shouted, calling on all those people who owe him something to give him their powers. A huge, bright blue sphere of energy formed above the coffee shop, sucking in the energy of all of Da Fanpai's debtors. The main character was not at all scared. On the contrary, he was delighted with what he saw, and already asked the dragon to give him this technique. Holding a giant sphere of energy above his head, the dragon shouted that it was the first time in his life he had heard such a stupid request from someone. Da Fanpai threw that sphere of energy straight at our hero, but it didn't even alarm Lin Tian. He relaxed, smiled, and closed his eyes. Controlling a huge clot of energy, the dragon, whose hair had turned yellow, shouted that Lin Tian would definitely not survive now. All the protagonist had to do was snap his fingers, and Da Fanpai's collected sphere of energy would evaporate in an instant. He crossed his arms over his chest, smiled and nodded at his opponent, and the system saved the clot of people's energy into his pocket safe. Lin Tian turned around and waved goodbye, asking him to contact him if he had any more useful techniques in his arsenal. Our hero confidently walked out of the coffee shop, the windows of which were broken after the brawl with the dragon from the Su family. A confident smile appeared on his face as Da Fanpai, who remained inside, began to shout for him to come back. Da Fanpai no longer interested him. Now Lin Tian was more curious about the new task from the system. He gladly accepted this task because its condition was to obtain true energy, and the reward was to obtain a Wulin expert. The guy was upset when he read the conditions of the side quest, which consisted of creating his own techniques in 3 days. Lin Tian answered the phone and heard from a worried Chen Dodo that something bad had happened. The Qian family had discovered Pinju and kidnapped her. The main character first asked the red-haired girl to calm down and asked if she was injured. Chen Dodo told the boss that they were fine, but they only blamed themselves for their sister's kidnapping since she was caught at their home. Boss Tian gritted his teeth and told the girls to hide, and he would deal with all the other problems himself. Lin Tian hung up the phone and walked over to a homeless man who was sitting in the middle of the street, holding onto a crutch. The guy squatted down in front of this poor man and said that first he needed to find the kidnapped girl. This time, Lin Tian had no assistance, so he decided to play his trump cards and pulled out a wad of money from his jacket. The protagonist placed several thick wads of bills in a donation bowl and declared that the entire city needed to be searched. The homeless man, who turned out to be a professional in this matter, grinned and told the customer that he understood everything. The mysterious homeless man stood up and immediately threw away his crutch, as he only used it for camouflage. The leader returned to the rest of his gang, Guy, who were also homeless-looking men, and told them to get to work. At this time, another man, wearing rags, was kneeling in the street, begging for alms, holding a metal bowl in his hand. A homeless man was distracted when someone approached him and tapped him on the shoulder to get his attention. It was gang member Guy who squatted down next to his partner and whispered the boss's final instructions into his ear. The man immediately took off his mask of a destitute homeless person and told his partner that he understood everything, having prepared himself for serious work. He began walking around the city and distributing photographs of the kidnapped Pinju to other homeless people. The homeless man not only distributed photographs of the beauty to others, but also told them who she was. and what they needed to do. The next events unfolded near a large warehouse where a white car had just pulled up. Two men in glasses came out of it, holding Pinju. The girl's eyes were covered with a blindfold, and so were her hands. Two tall, strong men led the kidnapped girl into the warehouse, where no one would be able to find her. At this moment, one of the gang members, Guy, was watching what was happening, and from the man's photograph, he was convinced that he had found the right girl. In the evening, the men lit a fire to have dinner after a hard day of searching. They roasted a whole chicken over the fire. One of the Guy gang members, whom Lin Tian had initially approached, began to cut the chicken into pieces with his hands. The first thing he did was offer the wing to Lin Tian to eat while the chicken was hot, and our hero was flattered by the gesture. The protagonist began to devour the hot chicken fried over the fire with gusto and praised the man for how deliciously he cooked. The long-haired man laughed and told our hero that he had cooked the chicken using Lin Tian's secret recipe. Lin Tian and his partner became wary and looked up from their delicious dinner when they heard a suspicious sound. The man took off his shirt to answer the phone. He carried a landline phone underneath his clothes. The gang leader, Guy, immediately became more serious. He answered the phone and told the man to quickly say what he wanted. A happy smile appeared on the man's face when his subordinates reported to him that the kidnapped girl had been found. He happily shared this news with Lin Tian and told him that Pinju had been found and was now at the Qin secret base. The protagonist stood up abruptly, forgetting about the delicious hot chicken, and ordered everyone to act according to the previously agreed-upon plan. Lin Tian, putting a piece of chicken wing in his mouth, shouted that today they would let the Chen family know how cool our hero and his team were. With a chicken leg in his mouth, the gang leader, Guy, stood up and shouted in a warlike voice, repeating the words of our hero. When it got dark outside, the action took place again in the Chen family's secret warehouse, where they were holding a girl hostage. The entrance was guarded by two men. A homeless-looking guy holding a bottle of beer approached the bodyguards. The drunk man began telling the guards how much he missed them. A stern, bespectacled bodyguard shouted at the homeless man to get out of there and called him a sick alcoholic. The man immediately stopped smiling and pretending to be drunk. He looked at the security guard with pretension and bewilderment. The stern man with glasses also stared silently at the homeless man who had come to bother them. The homeless man did not respond to the guard's demands and remained standing there, so the man shouted again, demanding that he move away. The man didn't even have time to step aside before he felt sick and threw up right on the stern, big man in the business suit. The bodyguard, whose face was covered in the contents of the homeless man's stomach, began to scream and grimace in disgust. He started trying to wipe it all off against the warehouse wall, and the second guard pointed his gun at the homeless man, telling him to get out of here. The shaved-headed guard raised one eyebrow in surprise as a chicken bone landed directly in the barrel of his pistol. It turned out that the gang leader, Guy, and our hero were already hiding in the bushes at this time, and the man used a secret weapon, chicken bones. At this time, Pinju was in a secret warehouse. The girl was securely tied to a chair. She complained that she wanted to drink. The man in dark glasses who had been following her in the warehouse happily handed the girl a bottle of water. He brought the open bottle to the tied girl's mouth so that she could drink, but the water began to flow out, making her all wet. The guard explained that he was ready to fulfill any request of the girl, because she was, after all, a huge gift for the Li family. Gritting her teeth in irritation, Pinju turned away and called the kidnappers simply pathetic money slaves. The man smiled ominously and asked if the girl had really started to act like a heroine by talking about slaves to money. The security guard was startled when he heard a sudden loud noise and a cloud of thick smoke suddenly rose up from the warehouse. A silhouette of a hero in a cloak appeared on the threshold, declaring that everything was fine and ready to explain why. It was Lin Tian, dressed in a red superhero cape, who smiled madly and shouted that everything was fine thanks to his appearance here. Pinju's cheeks immediately turned a healthy blush, and she was overjoyed when she heard the voice of her savior, Lin Tian. The man who was watching Pinju got angry at the protagonist, snorted, and called him impudent. Confident in his family's strength, the guard shouted at the armed men to take Lin Tian away from here. The protagonist warned that there would be a lot of calcium here now, because he had prepared his weapon, a whole pile of energy-charged chicken bones. All these bones started flying, striking the armed men of the Qian family with their violent force. They fell flat from the impact of the bones. Lin Tian walked up to the defeated armed guards and called them losers who didn't even know how to fight. At our hero's command, the remaining Calcium brothers appeared at the door. Lin Tian allowed them to take everything from weapons to pants from the Qian family representatives. The guard in dark glasses had not yet been defeated. He activated his golden aura and clenched his fists tightly. The protagonist was delighted when he saw the beautiful color of the man's aura and admitted that he even liked it. The man, glowing with a golden light, frowned and leaned forward, swinging his fist to attack the insolent boy. Our hero thrust his fist forward in time to respond, causing them to collide, causing a deafening sound. The man trembled and wondered what was going on, as the attack he had used against Lin Tian was far from weak. Lin Tian, grinning broadly, explained that he had changed the enemy's characteristics, and now he was weak in all respects. Our hero's adversary gave orders to someone to return with a report and forgot about it, and wanted to run away from here himself. The protagonist didn't want to let anyone escape from here, so he held out his hand and shouted for them to watch how he could change his characteristics. When he realized that something had gone wrong, Lin Tian froze in shock and began to accuse the system of deception. The guy saw in front of him a man in a coat whose face was hidden by a hat and scarf. His characteristics did not change and were unknown. The mysterious man rushed past. Lin Tian tensed up, because usually he could recognize the characteristics of absolutely every person. He turned to look at the man in the cloak and wondered if it was not a man but another creature that stood before him. The protagonist decided to use X-ray vision to see through clothes at the disguised person. When the boy saw who was hiding behind that hat and scarf, he couldn't believe his eyes, because the discovery was shocking. A long blonde hair fell onto his palm after the mysterious man ran past him, trying to escape. It turned out that behind the mysterious man in the coat was Cicely, a girl who used to work for him. The protagonist was dumbfounded. In a state of shock, he began to guess why Cicely was here. Cicely tore off her mask and revealed her face, loudly declaring that she was no longer human. Our hero decided to test the system again, since it was unlikely to deceive him, and the reward was that he could check the characteristics of absolutely every person. He checked the third rule of attributes, which states that the total number of attribute points cannot be changed. Remembering the dragon, the boy became familiar with the second rule of properties, according to which the characteristics parameters do not change during inactivity. The most important thing was the first law of characteristics. Our hero had the right to view the properties of absolutely any person. Initially, he was confused about what happened to the twins and their history, and now he can no longer use Cicely. He looked at the blonde's hair and wondered if Cicely was no longer human, and if he had gotten into a strange plot like in a typical manhwa. The protagonist was distracted from his thoughts when the gang leader guy approached him and put his hand on his shoulder. The man, smiling slyly, asked Boss Lin, pointing his hand to the side, how they should deal with these guys. The armed men of the Qian family were taken hostage by the Guy gang. Lin Tian allowed the men to do whatever they wanted with them. Pinju was finally freed. The first thing the girl did was throw herself into Lin Tian's arms and ask how he managed to find her so quickly. The protagonist replied that it was all thanks to these guys from the Guy gang, a whole network of homeless men who helped him today. The girl smiled and said that Lin Tian also deserved credit for this, since thanks to him, the guys from the Guy gang could let off some steam. Lin Tian was perplexed when he realized that all this time Pinju had been acquainted with the men he hired. The girl approached the gang leader and announced that she had managed to find out everything about the girl who was the heiress of the Chen family. The gang leader scratched his head and was flattered. He asked Pinju not to be so polite to him and promised to invite her to dinner. Qian Pingzhe frowned and asked if she was right that the Guy gang was secretly trying to ruin all of the Li family's plans. The man did not admit to this, but pretended that the girl was talking nonsense, and that his gang had nothing to do with it. The protagonist stopped understanding what was happening here. He began to look around in confusion, hoping for an explanation. Pinju said that the Guy gang works undercover in restaurants and collects information from the public. Lin Tian looked at the leader of the Guy gang in shock, because he didn't know such details. The man laughed and tried to turn it all into a joke, saying that working in restaurants was just a small business. Pinju asked the man to stop being shy since she had, after all, turned specifically to him for help. The gang leader, Guy, didn't want to discuss anything with the girl, so he said that he was very glad to meet her, but he was tired, so he left. The girl became indignant and started shouting after him, asking if the man really didn't want to take revenge on the eldest daughter of the Li family. The irritated gang leader, Guy, left, telling Pinju that she had imagined too much. Miss Qian asked if the man would forgive the Li family for hurting him and throwing him out of the house, and if he didn't want to get his belongings back. Lin Tian, genuinely surprised, asked the man if Old Man Li really came from a rich family. The man became angry and shouted, demanding that they stop pursuing this topic, as he did not want to have anything to do with the Li family. Pinju treated this with understanding because she knows that in every such family there is a victim of behind-the-scenes struggle. Clenching his fist, trembling with anger, Old Li walked up and asked the girl why she was saying this, since he would have destroyed the Li family long ago if he had the chance. The girl smiled charmingly and answered the man that before she too had not seen any possibility of destroying her family. But that was until Lin Tian appeared in her life, and after these words, our hero looked at her in shock. Old Man Li sighed heavily and asked the girl what Lin Tian had to do with it, since he didn't think that this guy could help in any way. The girl giggled and replied that Lin Tian had money, which was why he became useful in the fight against her negligent family. With his nose in the air, the proud Lin Tian began to praise himself, saying that he had a super lot of money. After the event, the family members sat at the table in a spacious round hall that belonged to the Qian family. The head of the Qian family, Pingzhu, asked Mr. Lee if he needed the musicians from the Chen family, who were already ready to start work. Dae-ren, the young master of the Lee family, was busy on his phone, so he told the man that he didn't care. Smiling ingratiatingly, Mr. Chen asked the guy to resolve this issue now, since the Lee family was, after all, authoritative in this matter. The boy asked the old man to be quiet and did not want to discuss serious things because now Mr. Chen was distracting him from his favorite game. Mr. Chen Pingju no longer knew what to say to the boy. He slumped his shoulders and felt out of place in front of young Master Lee. A heated discussion began at the round table in the Chen family hall, and the others present began whispering among themselves. The third headman of the Chen family, named Pingwang, stood up, folded his hands and thanked the headman for the reception, but he was forced to bow out. The mustachioed, gray-haired old man was not so polite now, he shouted, asking where he was going, since they had not finished talking yet. The man replied that it didn't matter whether he stayed here or not, since the Chen family had no say in the matter anyway. Mr. Pingju continued to yell at the third headman, asking how he dared to talk like that when Mr. Lee was still here. Young Master Lee, meanwhile, was completely indifferent to everything that was happening in this room because he was playing on his phone. The head of the Qian family, Pingwang, and the others present looked at the boy acting so indifferently in bewilderment. Third headman, Pingwang snorted and said that the Lee family didn't care about them at all, and because of the old man, the Chen family would be destroyed. Mr. Chen became angry and began to shout at the headman even louder, asking if he also wanted to betray the old man the way Pingju did. The elderly man became silent and trembled with fear and pain when he suddenly received a slap in the face from someone. It turned out that it was young Master Lee who told the old man to stop making noise because he had lost because of him. The guy got angry, stood up and threw his phone, shouting that he almost won. But then 3 new players joined the game. Darren ordered Mr. Qian to identify the 3 people who caused the boy to lose the mobile game. The old man tried to object, explaining that they were now discussing a much more important matter that concerned both their families. Trampling his phone under his foot, an angry Darren insisted that the old man bring the 3 people here and his father would pay for it. Mr. Qian was delighted when he was promised money. He smiled and asked the guy what the names of these people were. Darren began listing the nicknames of the players, among whom was Tiantian Lin, the name our hero was known by on the internet. Old man Pinju admitted that Tiantian Lin was a very familiar name to him, but the man did not recognize the other nicknames. The old man shouted, ordering his family members to quickly look for Tiantian Lin, who he thought was from a wealthy family. Darren still couldn't calm down after losing. He dreamed of dealing with the players who dared to get ahead of him. The door to the Qian family's round hall suddenly swung open, and someone shouted at the young master that there was no need to look for those players. When the doors opened, Darren, Mr. Qian, and everyone else stared to see who had brazenly barged in. They saw old Lee in front of them, who was covering his face with dark glasses, just like Pinju and Lin Tian. Smiling, Pinju proudly introduced herself to young Master Lee as the girl he had just been playing with, under the nickname, "Why Are You Wearing My Clothes?" The protagonist, adjusting his shiny hair, introduced himself as Tiantian Lin with a proud smile on his face. Old man Lee introduced himself to Darren as the third player, nicknamed Your Dad My Brother, and was ready to explain why he called himself that. Young Master Lee became wary when a chicken bone whistled past his face. The gang leader, Guy, explained to the boy that he played under this nickname because Da Ren's dad was actually his younger brother. Lin Tian approached the guy and immediately warned him that he would take his life if he tried to interfere with him, because he had a team. Smiling ominously, the protagonist roughly pinned the frightened boy against the wall and declared that he should not even hope for success as long as Lin Tian was alive. Mr. Qian was furious with the guys who barged in without permission. He stood up, hit the table, and shouted that it was impudent. The old man, mad with anger, began to accuse Lin Tian of wanting to steal his company together with Pinju. The protagonist blushed and began to pretend to be an innocent boy, claiming that he was forced to come here. Pinju stood up for the boy and asked her older brother how dare he speak so rudely to his sister's husband. Gritting his teeth and writhing in anger, Mr. Qian accused the girl and our hero of having no conscience. Suddenly, he received another slap in the face from Darren, who shouted, asking how dare he talk to his family members like that. Adjusting his cap, young Master Darren declared that the old man should forget about the money from the Lee family for the next year. The old man began to tremble and begged Mr. Lee not to treat him so cruelly, because without the support of the Lee family, his family would not survive. Pinju asked her elder brother if the Chen family couldn't get by without being humiliated in front of the Lee family. Boiling with anger, the elderly man accused his younger sister of insolence and ordered his men to arrest her. The protagonist pointed his finger at himself and said that if the Lee family did not give money to the Qian family, other people might do so. Darren, guessing where he was going with this, asked if Tian Li would finance the Qian family if Li did not. Smiling stupidly, Lin Tian unbuttoned his jacket and showed everyone that he had money. He was covered with wads of bills on all sides. A stunned Mr. Pinju asked if the protagonist really intended to buy the Chen family's company. The old man's guesses turned out to be wrong. Our hero held his hand out in front of him and replied that he was not going to do that. Mr. Qian, Darren, and the others present looked at Lin Tian in bewilderment, not understanding why he needed money then. Lin Tian reminded everyone that the Qian family had always strived to cultivate exquisite classical musicians. According to our hero, people don't like this kind of music anymore, so the Qian family now lives solely on flattery from the audience. He hugged Mrs. Chen, looked her straight in the eyes, which made her happy, and said that Pinju thought completely differently. Lin Tian spread his arms out to the sides and solemnly declared that this was a completely different era, namely the era of idols. He took out the idol development plan for the Pinju Music Company and said that they intended to hire versatile artists who could do everything. Smiling with hope for success, the protagonist declared that they would make money from the large masses of people who loved this kind of music. Mr. Qian and Darren still stared at Lin Tian with puzzled expressions, as they were not thrilled with this idea. Only the third headman of the Chen family clapped his hands after listening attentively to the protagonist's speech about the new idea. The man began to applaud, saying that this was a very good idea and that it would become a new vector of development for the Chen family. The other members of the Chen family thought about it and also agreed with this, since they could reconfigure the equipment to a new style. Mr. Qian was categorically against it. He shouted that this bunch of beggars did not know how to make money. The protagonist asked the elderly man if he really wanted the Chen family to make money only by humiliating themselves in front of the Li family. Young Master Li intervened and asked the head of the Chen family if they no longer needed his money. Old man Pinju immediately broke out in a sweat and began to make excuses to the boy, trembling with fear, because he didn't mean to say that. The long-haired brunette took out a wooden sign and suggested that the family members hold a meeting immediately to resolve everything. Young Master Li became indignant and shouted, asking if the Qian family really intended to turn their backs on them. The protagonist patted the guy on the shoulder and honestly admitted that the Qian family had already turned their backs on the Li family. Old man Li asked the guys from his gang to escort the guests out. The men roughly grabbed Da Ren by the arms to escort him out of the hall. Only Mr. Qian tried to stand up for the guy, trying to show his loyalty. He shouted his name after him. Pinju approached her stunned older brother and declared that the Li family would not interfere with them in any way now. A joyful and inspired Lin Tian invited all the assembled Qian family members to get to work. A heated discussion of Lin Tian's new idea began in the round hall, with men in black suits consulting with the third headman. Everyone was productively talking to each other about something. Only Mr. Qin sat at the head of the table and trembled with anger. The old man jumped up from his chair and began to accuse our hero and his partners of deciding to start something of their own, having only insignificant plans in their arsenal. The older man admitted, mimicking the idol's pose, that everyone wants to be one now and that the industry is very popular. Mr. Chen said the family had some resources for this, but it would be better to conduct business with the support of the Li family. The protagonist grinned and admitted to the old man that he expected to hear those exact words from him. Lin Tian crossed his arms and proposed to organize a competition to see whose company's idol would be the most successful. Old man Pinju immediately asked his assistant to bring him a list of the programs selected for this month. Mr. Qian chose the program and said that the person whose idol would be the center of attention would take over the company. Lin Tian stood up, agreed to the terms, and said that the selection round would begin tomorrow, and his team intended to find a male idol. After he and Pinju left, Old Man Qian ordered his assistant to quickly report the incident to the Li family so that they could choose the most popular artist for them. The elderly man also ordered his subordinates to prepare teachers in all disciplines to take on the idol's training. Mr. Qian began listing who they would need, including music, dance, and rap teachers, as well as a basketball coach. The old man's personal assistant scratched his head and asked if basketball skills were important to an idol. The angry old man tried to kick the assistant and told him to stop talking and do as he said. Already on the bus, Pinju asked Lin Tian what they should do now, since they didn't have any male artists on their team. The protagonist broke into a self-confident smile and reassured the girl, replying that he knew one such person. Lin Tian tried to convince Pinju that this guy he knew would be perfect for the role of a male idol. At this time, Zhang Hao, sitting at home, suddenly sneezed so loudly that it even scared him a little. Scratching his nose, the red-haired boy wondered why he suddenly began to have a bad feeling. Zhang Hao was even more surprised when he looked at his phone and saw that it was his father trying to call him. The guy picked up the phone and smiled, asking if his dad was calling because he wanted to send him pocket money again. He was stunned to hear from his father that his company wanted to open 10 new branches and that Zhang Hao would be given the position of manager. Zhang Hao agreed to accept the position, but was worried because he did not understand where his family got so much money. Mr. Zhang replied that they had just acquired an investor with whom he had already signed a contract and that all the family's debts had been paid off. The man's mood improved even more because his son finally agreed to take part in the family business. Bowing before the investor, he handed him a cup of tea and asked if they could move on to the next stage of the agreement. It turned out that Mr. Jiang's company's investor was Lin Tian, who sat comfortably in his chair and agreed to continue discussing the agreement further. Lin Tian handed Mr. Jiang a huge bag of wads of bills and said that they could do with the money as they pleased. The protagonist pulled his sunglasses down onto his face and declared that they intended to make a real star out of Jiang Hao. Jiang Hao got out of his new car. He still couldn't believe how quickly he became a boss, and he was curious about how luxurious his new branch was. The red-haired boy was shocked, and his mouth opened wide when he saw the building where the branch of his father's company was located. The branch office was luxurious and glassy, with gold facades, but the surrounding space was completely empty. Manager Jiang began to get indignant and wave his arms, asking what kind of wilderness he had ended up in, since he didn't like this place. Gritting his teeth in anger, the boy shouted that he would later call his father so that he would choose another location for the office of his branch.